The story takes place in present-day Seoul, South Korea, where the city's fate rests in the hands of one man. Amidst the thick, swirling smoke, Jang Shirwan, the leader of Manhwa Guild, kneels on the ground, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. He exhales deeply, gripping the earth beneath him. Standing among the city's ruins is the enemy of all mankind, Shin Kang-hu. A crimson ring hovers above Shirwan's head as he stares at his foe. A man in the distance trembles in disbelief. "This can't be happening," he mutters, horror in his voice. A woman in the crowd clasps her hands over her mouth and screams. Kang-hu steps forward, crossing two swords in front of him with unwavering confidence. "At last," he declares. "It's just us now." Shirwan slowly pushes himself up, his body shaking as he rises from the debris. He glares at Kang-hu through the lingering fog. "Because of your senseless slaughter," he growls, "innocent people are suffering." His fury ignites. He raises a hand, red energy surging around him like a raging storm. "All because of a monster like you," he roars. Kang-hu chuckles, his smirk laced with amusement. "Oh, and who do you think you are?" He tilts his head mockingly. "An envoy of justice." Shirwan's lips curl into a savage grin. An energy sphere crackles to life in his palm. "Justice," he scoffs. "How dare you even speak that word?" With a powerful squeeze, the energy explodes outward, sending streaks of lightning crackling through the battlefield. "You always stand in my way." Shirwan's voice thunders. "So tell me, if I'm not the devil, then who is?" The crowd erupts in support. Faces twisted with rage, they shout his name, their voices carrying through the ruins. Shirwan's gaze sharpens. "As long as they believe in me, I will never lose." He thrusts his hand forward, a massive magic circle forming in the air. From its core, a devastating energy beam surges forward at breakneck speed. Kang-hu's eyes widen in shock. He crosses his arms defensively, bracing himself against the incoming blast. A blinding explosion engulfs the battlefield. Smoke and debris spiral into the sky. The force is so intense that the onlookers shield their faces. As the dust settles, Shirwan strides toward Kang-hu, who now kneels, battered and bloodied. Blood drips from his face as he lifts his head, scanning the hazy battlefield. The crowd cheers grow louder. "We always believed in you, Shirwan," they cry. "Finish him. End this monster." The crowd erupted, raising their clenched fists high and chanting for Shirwan to finish it. Their voices rang out again and again, demanding Kang-hu's end. Shirwan cast a calm gaze downward. "No one wants you alive," he murmured. Purple energy rings swirled around his raised hand. Meanwhile, Kang-hu, the so-called enemy of all humanity, struggled to steady himself, gripping his trembling knees. With a single, decisive motion, Shirwan unleashed a powerful blast. The force sent Kang-hu hurtling backward, his body slamming into the ground with such intensity that the earth cracked beneath him. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he skidded across the broken terrain. Hovering in the sky, Shirwan spread his arms wide, a triumphant smile playing on his lips. "Everything we worked for," he declared, "has finally paid off." Raising his hand, he unleashed radiant crimson beams into the sky. "Now, absolute freedom will descend upon these lands." Tears of joy streamed down the faces of the people. They gazed in awe at the glowing sky, their voices rising in celebration. "It's finally happening." Shirwan, still smiling, flicked his fingers outward. The red energy surged upward, striking the heavens. A massive explosion followed, streaks of lightning crashing down, painting the world in a sinister red glow. And then it appeared. A colossal hand stretched down from the sky above Shirwan's head. The celebration turned to terror. People's eyes widened in horror as they beheld the monstrous sight. Panic set in, and they fled in all directions. Shirwan, his expression dark with satisfaction, clenched his fists. "At last," he declared, "the Demon King has descended. Now, true peace will reign." Kang-hu, drenched in sweat, watched the scene unfold. His heart pounded as a chilling realization struck him. "This isn't peace," he thought. "This is tyranny." Shirwan turned sharply toward him, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Why are you still breathing?" His lips curled into a smirk. "Open your eyes and take a good look." His gaze hardened as he gestured toward the shattered landscape. "This is the real world I've created." And just like that, the world was no more. The truth was revealed. It had all been a novel. The author, in a final note, thanked the readers for their support. They had followed the journey of a villain who became a savior, only to have their expectations completely shattered. Shirwan wasn't a hero. He was a servant of the Demon King. Alongside his comrades, the infamous 13 Stars, he had risen to become the highest embodiment of evil. But in the end, fiction is nothing more than a mirror reflecting reality. This novel was born from the author's own college experiences, The moment he witnessed the kind of power that could bury school violence, twist justice into corruption, and reshape truth itself. He poured that reality into his story, but the world wasn't ready for it. The readers failed to understand, and so the story faded into obscurity. The comment section erupted with criticism. "What kind of ending is this?" one reader ranted. "These wannabe writers with their artistic vision should be banned from publishing novels." The author sighed. There was nothing he could do about it. With a weary click, he closed the comment window. Slumping onto his bed, surrounded by the mess in his dimly lit room, he replayed the harsh words in his mind. "Why leave it open-ended?" one reader complained. Another mocked him. "Isn't this the same guy who brags about crossing his arms in real life?" Pressing his lips together, he rubbed his eyes. But the worst comment lingered. "You're nothing but a minion who destroyed the world we invested in." His jaw clenched. Everything felt wrong. And now, he couldn't even rewrite it. It was too late. All he could do was sleep. As his thoughts faded into exhaustion, a strange noise crept into his dreams. Clang. Thud. Voices echoed. Weapons struck the ground. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The cold, unyielding surface beneath him felt rough. Was this stone? A loud voice rang out. "You ungrateful freak." A man, a warden, kicked a worker brutally, his words laced with venom. "Even after the mercy of the eclipse, you dare defy me?" Lying there, the protagonist stiffened. Eclipse? Did he just say eclipse? The worker curled up, shielding his face from the relentless blows. Watching the scene, a sinking feeling gripped the protagonist. He had seen this before. Lived it. No way, he thought. Is this freak really going to show up in my dreams now? The warden, seething with rage, grabbed the worker by the collar and raised a clenched fist. "You useless idiot. Start working, or you're dead." But then he stopped. His bloodshot eyes snapped toward the protagonist, who had unknowingly drawn his attention. In an instant, the warden was in front of him, a terrifying snarl on his face. His fist shot forward with brutal force. The impact sent shockwaves through the protagonist's body. Pain exploded in his skull. What the hell? His mind reeled. Why does this hurt? This is just a dream, isn't it? But before the warden could strike again, a firm hand caught his wrist. "Enough!" a voice commanded. The man's grip tightened, his presence radiating authority. The warden's face twisted with fury. He spat on the ground before storming off, muttering under his breath. "One day, I'll kill you." Silence hung in the air. A trembling hand landed on the protagonist's shoulder. The battered worker turned to him, his face pale with fear. "Are you okay?" The protagonist's mind raced. Who was the warden talking about? No, it couldn't be. A creeping dread settled over him as he glanced down at his hands. His breath hitched. Without finishing his thought, he bolted to the side, panic surging through him. Dropping to his knees near a pool of water, he pressed his hands to the ground. Blue mana pulsed beneath his palms, surging forward in powerful waves. Energy crackled around his body, wrapping him in its glow. A single bead of sweat rolled down his face as he lifted his hand, now bathed in shimmering blue light. His thoughts spun wildly. This is the ability to absorb mana at will. No doubt about it. This is innate increased mana sensitivity. Slowly, he touched his forehead, his gaze shifting to his reflection in the water. Then, realization struck. His fingers trembled as he stared at his reflection. Horror dawned in his eyes. Does this mean I become Kanhu? His lips curled into a bitter smile. He covered his face with one hand, a dry chuckle escaping him. Of all people, why him? If Kanhu was still alive, that meant there were 5 years left, 5 years until the end. Had he transmigrated into Sherwan instead, he would have been hailed as a hero, the savior of the world. But as things stood, the story would unfold exactly as before. The Demon King would descend, wiping out everyone except his loyal followers. And if the ending didn't change, then he was doomed. The only silver lining? He knew exactly how to escape this place. The moment he arrived, Kanhu's past and experiences had merged with his own. A sudden notification appeared before him. Class, Assassin. Level 10. 2 skills flashed on the screen, short-range jump and teleportation. His eyes narrowed. So I'm still at this level, huh? Letting out a weary sigh, he placed a hand on his knee, gripping a small blue stone. Frustration flared within him. He clenched his fist and growled. My stamina is terrible. His jaw tightened, and they just had to give me the weakness of being oversensitive to mana. All because I'm the villain. Taking the stone, he dragged it across the dirt, marking a line on the ground. This is the only way, he muttered to himself. Just then, hurried footsteps approached. Kanhu, the worker ran up to him, concern etched across his face. Are you all right? Still sitting on the ground, the protagonist turned slightly. His voice was calm. I'm fine. Don't worry about it. The worker exhaled in relief before lowering himself down, resting his hands on his knees. Should I ask them for a break? Konghu's lips curled into a knowing smile. If they cared about people's conditions, he said, his tone laced with quiet amusement, then none of us would be here in the first place. In a detention center run by the criminal organization Eclipse, novice hunters capable of using mana are forced into grueling labor, mining mana stones like slaves. Konghu, maintaining a serious demeanor, told his companion not to worry and to keep working. The worker hesitated before asking if Konghu wanted to escape. Closing his eyes, Konghu dismissed the idea, warning him not to do anything reckless. If the guards caught wind of it, there would be consequences. The worker sighed, placed a hand on Konghu's head with a faint smile, and agreed to drop the subject. Gripping a gun tightly, Konghu watched the worker walk away. He had done everything he could to warn him, but the man was merely a narrative device, just another stepping stone in his story. He couldn't afford to change the course of the novel just to help him escape. Later, the workers stood deep within the mines, surrounded by massive mana stones. Konghu pushed a cart filled with stones when a sudden scream cut through the air. He spun around in shock. A worker was on his knees, hands pressed to the ground, trembling before the overseer. The overseer sneered, explaining that while the guards were distracted by the newcomers, some reckless fool had attempted to escape. "Watch closely," the overseer commanded, raising his gun. The shot rang out. The worker's body jerked before collapsing. Blood pooled beneath him. With a cruel smirk, the overseer kicked the lifeless corpse aside. Konghu swallowed hard. His fists clenched as he stared at the worker's body. Idiot. He told him not to do anything reckless. Lowering his gaze, he felt a strange hollowness settle in. The warden, resting his blood-stained weapon on his shoulder, turned to Konghu. "What's wrong? Thinking of going berserk again? No one's here to stop me this time. I'd be more than happy to kill you." Konghu met his gaze, voice flat. "I don't care that he's dead." The warden's eyes narrowed in surprise. Turning slightly, Konghu added, "What matters more right now is that I need to use the toilet." The warden chuckled darkly, gripping his weapon. "What's that? You scared?" His tone dripped with mockery. With a smirk, he motioned for Konghu to follow. The protagonist walked forward, his expression cold and resolute. Upon reaching the corridor of the building, the warden rested a hand on his hip, smirking. "You've got 1 minute, he warned, his tone laced with amusement. "If you take even a second longer, this place will be your grave." Konghu peered into the dimly lit toilet, where several lifeless bodies of workers lay in disarray. Ignoring the stench of death, he stepped inside, his mind focused. It had to be here somewhere. Outside, the warden crossed his arms, counting down the seconds. Konghu ran his hand over the rough stone walls, scraping his skin in the process. He winced, but didn't hesitate. With a tense expression, he dragged a finger through the blood trickling down his arm and traced a line on the floor. The warden's voice rang out, impatience creeping in. 10 seconds left. Konghu remained on his knees, finishing the intricate blood-drawn magic circle. Rising slowly, he examined it with sharp eyes. He could feel it. Something was watching him. He clenched his fists, gaze unwavering. He knew exactly what kind of being lurked beyond. One that thrived on suffering, despair, and tragedy. A surge of blue mana pulsed from the circle, illuminating the grimy space. The warden banged on the door. "Hurry up and get out of there." Konghu didn't move. Instead, he smirked. "Aren't you even a little curious?" His voice carried confidence. "How someone like me, nothing but a low rank, can summon him? If he followed the original story, he would arrive soon. But if he hesitated, if he delayed even a single day, then the hope the world desperately needed would be lost forever." A blinding beam of light shot up from the circle, making Konghu's breath hitch. His hands pressed against the ground as he whispered under his breath. This is what he had to say. Because to him, Konghu was nothing more than a source of amusement. Standing at the center of the glowing magic circle, Konghu smiled. His voice was steady, unwavering. "I'm the only one who can wield your power to its fullest." Then, with a slow, ominous grin, he muttered under his breath, "I knew you'd come." And he did. The being that had once made a contract with Konghu in the original story. With absolute confidence, Konghu called out into the void. "Dimension Robber." A deep, echoing voice answered. "How bold of you." A presence loomed over him, thick with power. "I'll lend you my strength, but only for a while. Since you caught my interest, now prove yourself." A smirk played on the protagonist's lips as radiant energy swirled around him. Clenching his fist, he exhaled slowly. "Just sit back and watch." A system notification flashed before him. System alert. Constellation. Dimension Robber has been identified. Status. Neutral constellation. Special abilities. Looting and upgrading. All skills have reached maximum level. Rank F skills can now be made your own. The door burst open with a thunderous crash. The overseer stormed in, his face twisted with rage. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he bellowed. Thick black smoke curled through the room, obscuring his vision. His anger faltered, turning to shock as he caught sight of a shadow moving within the haze. Another system notification flashed. System alert. All skills have reached maximum level. Short-range jump skill upgraded to max. A piercing blue glow flickered in Kanghu's eyes as he propelled himself forward at an inhuman speed. System alert. Teleportation skill upgraded to max. The overseer flinched, scanning the smoke-filled room, his breathing ragged. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His voice trembled. He's gone. In a split second, Kanghu materialized behind him. Lightning pulsed in his gaze. With a swift, brutal motion, he drove a wooden stake through the overseer's back. The man choked, eyes wide with pain, blood spilling from his mouth. He twisted, barely able to breathe. "Why, you freak?" he gasped. Kanghu's expression remained cold as he wrenched the stake free. A fresh spray of blood splattered across the floor. The overseer collapsed, his body twitching before going still. Kanghu stood over him, gripping the bloodied weapon. "Thanks." His voice was calm, almost indifferent. Wiping the crimson streaks from his face with the back of his hand, he added, "Because of you, I'm walking out of here today." A deep chuckle echoed in his mind. "Dimension robber, huh? You're amusing." Contract established. Kanghu bent down, retrieving the warden's weapon. As he gripped the hilt, a thought crossed his mind. This was how he had avenged him. The system chimed once more. System alert. Weapon obtained. Tightening his hold on the blade, Kanghu tucked it into his bag. "From now on, I won't look back." Sometime later, Kanghu stood in a dimly lit corridor, his back to the overseer's corpse. In one hand, he held a canister. Tilting it slightly, he poured gasoline over the lifeless body. Sliding his free hand into his pocket, he stared at the scene before him. Step 1. Acquire a second-rank warden's uniform. Complete. He flicked open a lighter. Step 2. Burn all evidence. The flame danced as he let it fall. A roar of fire erupted, consuming everything in its path. Outside, chaos erupted. Workers scattered as flames engulfed the buildings. "He's near the 18th building," someone shouted over the crackling blaze. Another man, panic-stricken, raised his voice. "What kind of lunatic did this?" A worker threw up his hands. "Call the fire department." Meanwhile, Kanghu moved swiftly, disappearing into the night. Step 3. Escape through the main gate. A worker sprinted toward an armored car, gripping the ladder at the front. "Everyone, follow the instructions. We're heading to the crematorium," he shouted. He turned sharply to the driver. "Step on it." The driver nodded without hesitation and accelerated. Glancing in the rearview mirror, his eyes landed on Kanghu's uniform. "That's a second-rank warden's uniform. Are you replacing the supervisor in charge of this group?" Seated in the back, Kanghu gave a curt nod. There was an escape from Building 18. The driver's brows furrowed. What do you mean?" Kanghu's voice remained steady. "The prisoner climbed over the northwest fence. So why are we still here?" The driver stiffened, quickly slamming his foot on the gas. The vehicle roared forward. "Damn, my bad. We're moving now." Meanwhile, Kanghu's mind worked fast. The northwest fence led to Mountain Chungmyong. At first glance, the perfect escape route. No guards, complete darkness, and a maze-like terrain. But the reality was far different. That area was littered with deadly traps, making it the most dangerous path out. He crossed his arms, keeping his gaze forward. They'll try to catch him before he gets far. If they lose him, they'll search Mountain Chungmyong and bring back his corpse. The driver, hands gripping the wheel tightly, swallowed. "Got it." At the next checkpoint, a guard stood firm at his post. "Secret code, Warang," he called out. The driver didn't miss a beat. "Secret code, cigarettes." The guard waved both hands. "Clear. Move along." Kanghu's gaze remained cold. "Finally, the last obstacle before I clear this fence." The armored car rumbled down a forest road, weaving through the dense trees. The driver, keeping one hand on the wheel, glanced at Kanghu with a smirk. Must be exhausted with all that chaos at Building 18. Kanghu absently squeezed his blood-stained collar, fingers pressing into the fabric. It'd be easier to kill those rebellious prisoners. The driver laughed. "Right? Those so-called hunters are just a bunch of weaklings. They talk big, but in the end, they're nothing but losers." Kanghu's expression darkened. "Losers? Is that what they call them?" Beside him, the worker turned to face the disguised warden, his expression serious. "How long have you been stationed at Building 18? The protagonist glanced down and mentioned he'd arrived the day before yesterday. One of the workers immediately pointed out that this meant he was from the 9th block. Kanghu nodded in agreement. But then, the worker scoffed, questioning how that made sense when the 9th block hadn't even existed until the day before yesterday. Meanwhile, a car sped through the dark forest, its headlights cutting through the night. With a grin, the protagonist pulled a sword from his bag and muttered that cleaning up trash like them must be the only reason he was here. Without hesitation, he dashed forward, ready to strike. The car screeched to a stop, smoke billowing from its wheels. Kong-Hu slid back in an instant, while the worker was sent flying through the shattered window, glass scattering everywhere. The driver, gathering mana into a blazing fireball, shouted furiously, calling him a freak. The protagonist swiftly dodged the incoming blast of fiery mana. His eyes flicked to the scorched roof of the car, studying it quietly. The driver, now rattled, raised his hand, forming another fireball and yelling out, demanding to know how the protagonist dared to deceive them. A surge of blazing energy shot from the car, bursting through the roof and spiraling upward in flaming rings. The driver smirked, clenched his fist, and muttered about what kind of trash he was dealing with. But as he glanced toward the car's mirror, Kong-Hu had already vanished from sight, disappearing like a shadow. Before the driver could react, the protagonist's sword pierced through his neck, the blade slicing cleanly through the window. Kong-Hu raised his weapon, his expression cold and unshaken. The driver tumbled from the vehicle, collapsing onto the ground, coughing violently. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, the protagonist winced at the sharp pain pounding in his head. With a crooked grin, he pressed a hand to his temple, wondering aloud if he'd overused his mana. Just then, Kong-Hu's eyes widened as another car approached. The protagonist, unfazed, raised his hand with a smirk, asking if this was supposed to be a patrol. He hadn't expected backup. There shouldn't have been many left. Kong-Hu leapt from the armored vehicle, landing directly into the rubble below. Without missing a beat, he clenched his fists and slid confidently down the dirt mound. The protagonist knelt nearby, watching him descend. From above, a hunter observed the scene, unimpressed. He rested his weapon on his shoulder and chuckled, calling Kong-Hu low-ranking trash, surprised he'd managed to take out 2 guards and get away. The protagonist glanced at the hunter and noticed a red mark hovering above his head. That meant this guy had formed a contract with a constellation. Kong-Hu found himself wondering what kind of power he was dealing with. A system notification popped up, confirming that the hunter was linked to a neutral constellation. He was a skilled connector, someone capable of tracking mana. Curious, the protagonist calmly placed his mana-infused hand on the ground. So that's how the hunter had been able to find him so easily. Kong-Hu smirked, thinking to himself how perfectly things were falling into place. The hunter, clearly confused, narrowed his eyes and asked what he was grinning about. But the protagonist wasn't about to answer. Instead, he studied the mark above the hunter's head, realizing this guy was contracted with a Dimension Robber constellation. That explained the advanced looting abilities and top-tier training. And better yet, by killing another hunter, Kong-Hu could claim that constellation for himself. A system alert confirmed it. He could steal this target's contract. With a quiet smile, Kong-Hu leaned down, palm pressed to the earth, thinking this was the perfect opportunity to test out constellation looting. But there was one problem. Anyone tied to a constellation like that had to be at least level 100. A direct fight was out of the question. No, he'd have to bait him in and take him by surprise. Meanwhile, the hunter looked up with a smug grin and mocked Kong-Hu, calling him nothing but low-ranking trash. Raising his hand overhead, he sneered that Kong-Hu should have hidden better. Activating his constellation's ability, the hunter declared that nothing would escape his sight. Stalking through the dark forest, he called out, daring Kong-Hu to show himself. His gaze landed on a nearby tree as he sensed the faint pulse of mana. Smiling, he clenched his fist and said, "Found you." With a scowl, the hunter hurled his weapon straight into the tree, cutting through it with brutal force. Smoke and debris filled the air as the trees came crashing down. But as the dust cleared, the hunter's expression shifted to shock. He quickly looked around, realizing his target was gone. Before he could react, Kong-Hu appeared behind him, kneeling low and driving his sword clean through the hunter's neck. "Imagine that," Kong-Hu said coolly, a melee fighter tossing his own weapon. Big mistake. Without hesitation, Kong-Hu yanked his hand back, slashing through the hunter's throat with a swift, brutal strike. A system notification appeared, confirming the kill and the successful transfer of the skilled connector's contract. The skilled connector was now bound to the Dimension Robber and couldn't escape or break free. All its abilities were now Kong-Hu's. Rubbing his chin thoughtfully, Kong-Hu scanned the new stats displayed in his system window. With a tap of his finger, he boosted his night vision to the maximum. With a weary expression, Kong-Hu muttered that he'd pulled it off. Activating his night vision, he scanned the area and confirmed there were no more pursuers nearby. The protagonist, drenched in sweat, suddenly covered his mouth, dropped to his knees, and jammed his sword into the ground to steady himself as a harsh cough rattled through him. Glancing down at his bloodied palm, Kong-Hu wondered if he'd pushed himself too far. To stay hidden from the hunter, he'd completely suppressed his mana sensitivity and kept out of sight. The real trick had been pouring all his mana into that stone. If he'd left it unchecked, the blast would have drained every bit of mana from the area. So, he had no choice but to suppress his energy and get rid of the stone quickly. That gamble worked. It drew the hunter in and let Konghu finish him off. But closing the distance had required using the jump, and now his body was paying the price. If he pushed himself any further, death wasn't just a possibility, it was guaranteed. He needed to find somewhere safe to lay low. Konghu pressed forward, stepping over the rubble until his gaze landed on exactly what he needed, a sand truck used to refine mana stones. Without wasting a second, the protagonist leaped from the edge of the slope, kicking up a cloud of dust as he landed hard below. Looking up at the sky, he took a deep breath. Lying back on the sand, hand resting on his forehead, he thought about the 3 guards he'd taken out during his escape. None of that had happened in the original story. From now on, he'd have to be careful not to make any major changes until he'd gained real strength. That way, he could keep using his knowledge of this world without shifting the future too much. Meanwhile, the truck rumbled along the mountain road, speeding through the narrow paths. Konghu leaned back against the wall of the truck bed, watching the sunrise and enjoying the peaceful moment, even managing a smile. Beautiful, he murmured to himself. A while later, inside the office, Kong Dong casually mentioned that they could just round up some low-tier rookies to handle the mana stone mining, so there was no real problem. They'd be back to work soon enough. His assistant nodded in agreement. Dong, cigarette dangling from his lips, scoffed at the thought of some fool who thought he was clever, strolling right out the front gate like he'd caught them all sleeping. Back in the truck bed, Konghu fought to stay conscious, his breathing heavy, his body worn thin from mana overuse. His stamina was crawling back bit by bit, but it wasn't enough. Bloody gloves on his hands. He quietly pressed the buttons on his system. Dong glanced out the window, hands stuffed in his pockets, and asked if it was really possible that some level 10 killer, someone whose presence couldn't even be sensed, had managed to take down both a level 45 guard and a level 55 with a constellation. Konghu picked up the phone and answered, confirming it was him. On the other end, Soyeon greeted him, addressing him by his status shown on the screen. The protagonist explained that he was standing near Taejun Station and asked if she could do him a favor. Dong, watching from ahead with an amused grin, commented that this was getting interesting. Sounded like it was going to be a fun hunt. A bit later, the protagonist thanked Soyeon. Despite him showing up out of nowhere, she still helped him. As she carefully wrapped his injured hand, she asked what had happened to him. Was he seriously in a military zone? Konghu replied that he'd been kidnapped by Eclipse. Soyeon's face tightened, and she asked in shock what he meant. Had they forced him to mine mana stones? Worried, Soyeon pointed out that Eclipse had a reputation for snatching up hunters. Konghu explained that mana was needed to extract mana, which meant low-ranking hunters like him were easy targets for groups like that. Even with all that, Konghu trusted Soyeon. He'd reached out to her because, deep down, he knew she still cared. Back when they broke up, she was just a rookie who had only recently awakened her abilities. Now she was level 150 with a constellation contract. But if she'd been with him back then, she would have ended up locked away in Chungmyeong Detention Center too. Konghu pushed himself up with his hand on the floor, thanking her sincerely for helping him out. He warned her not to get too involved. If Eclipse caught wind of her helping him, they might come after her next. But Soyeon rested her hands on him and assured him she wasn't worried. At her level, ordinary hunters wouldn't stand a chance against her. She told him not to stress about her safety. Konghu turned toward her with a soft smile and told her to focus on using her strength for herself. Soyeon mentioned she'd packed him a decent amount of cash and provided a hack phone that was nearly impossible to track. The protagonist asked if her guild was still operating in the gray zone. Konghu recalled from the original novel that it was true. It suited her perfectly then, and it still did now. With a sad smile, Soyeon placed her hands over her heart and quietly asked if he'd thought about joining their guild again, like old times. Before she could say more, Konghu cut her off, raising his hand to stop her. He told her there was no point holding on to the past. Soyeon looked at him through tear-filled eyes, then smiled softly through the sadness, admitting he was right. She'd expected that answer. She fulfilled his request, telling him that all the details were already saved on the phone. She even had a friend who was the leader and could help. With one last smile, hands pressed gently to her chest, she wished him well and told him to take care of himself. Konghu glanced at Soyeon with a grin and thanked her, saying he hoped things would turn out well for her too. A while later, the protagonist asked the driver to pull over at Taejun Station. The driver, smiling, asked if he could turn on the radio. Resting his hand on the armrest and staring out the window, Konghu nodded. The broadcast crackled on, reporting breaking news. The Manhwa Guild had completely wiped out the White Rose mercenary group. Hearing that, the protagonist's thoughts drifted back to the events of the novel. After Judgment Day, everything had changed so fast that no one even realized it until it was too late. In another scene, a man sat quietly in his car, dark aura swirling around him. He glanced out at the empty streets and muttered how strange the day felt. It was the weekend, yet the roads were deserted. Turning to the girl driving, he asked if she felt the same. But the moment he looked closer, the dark energy stripped the skin from her face, leaving nothing but a skull. Terrified, the man shouted in horror as the skeleton pressed a scythe to his neck. Elsewhere, more skeletons, each armed with scythes, stood overlooking the rooftops of a building in Gangnam, Seoul. On the news, a reporter held a microphone, explaining how the sky had turned purple, visible from far away. But before she could finish her report, a massive green monster snatched her up and ran off. Chaos spread. Countless monsters poured from dungeons cloaked in mysterious veils. And in the middle of it all, those who awakened powers became known as hunters. As fear took over, people believed Judgment Day had arrived. Hunters who once fought monsters soon started killing humans. At first, they claimed it was in the name of God. Later, they didn't bother giving a reason at all. Just as everything seemed lost, the so-called savior of the world appeared, Sherwan. He was in Seoul when it all happened, gathering healers and protectors, forming what became known as the Manhwa Guild. Snapping out his thoughts, Kang-hoo sighed. Now it made sense why everyone was desperate to get to Seoul. It was the safest place left. With a faint smile, Kang-hoo recalled that the White Rose Group had been under Hunter Sherwan's watch for a while, accused of organizing the terrorist attack at Exit 11 of Gangnam Station. But the truth was different. White Rose wasn't a terrorist group. They were never behind the attack. The real mastermind was Sherwan himself. Kang-hoo knew exactly what would happen if he exposed the truth. Going up against Sherwan meant certain death. There was no winning against someone like that. The protagonist glanced down at the phone in his hand, thinking this was exactly why he'd asked for help joining a mercenary group. Guilds were within his reach, sure, but this path suited him better. The driver turned and informed him they had arrived. Kang-hoo looked ahead, his face serious. Being a mercenary, taking on missions through a group like this, was the safest move for now. Waiting for him was Lee Yeren, holding a folder in one hand. She greeted him warmly, mentioning that Soyeon had already filled her in. Extending her hand with a smile, she introduced herself. Kang-hoo shook her hand, his expression unreadable, silently deciding it was too soon to reveal anything important. Instead, he gave her a fake name during the introduction. Yeren smiled politely and, after flipping through the folder, mentioned she had a solid position open in information gathering. Without hesitation, the protagonist declined. He wasn't interested in something like that. He wanted high-paying, difficult missions right from the start. Yeren raised an eyebrow and asked if she'd heard him right. After all, wasn't he just level 10? Kang-hoo confirmed it with a nod. Yeren laughed loudly, bringing a hand to her mouth as if it were the funniest thing she'd heard all day. Wiping a tear from the corner of her eye, she teased him, saying reckless confidence like that was dangerous. But the mood shifted fast. Yeren's expression hardened as a green aura flared around her, mana swirling thick in the air. Her constellation stirred, asking if she wanted it to deal with his corpse. Kang-hoo faced her calmly, a mischievous grin tugging at his lips. Isn't being a mercenary all about skill, no matter the level? Right before that moment, Kang-hoo had found it strange meeting a character he himself had created. A system notification popped up, confirming her constellation was a neutral type, Chaos Observer. It could block and distort vision. Yeren was a mage and a buffer with a contract ranked well above average. She was one of the characters Kang-hoo had designed to one day stand against the 13 stars. He knew earning her trust would be crucial. Clenching his fists, Kang-hoo repeated, "Isn't being a mercenary all about skill, no matter the level?" Yeren closed her eyes for a moment, then addressed him by his fake name, reminding him that fiction and reality weren't the same. With his back turned, Kang-hoo responded, "And neither are prejudices." Sliding her glasses into place, Yeren smiled faintly and agreed. "Then let's put it to the test." Moments later, they stood facing each other, wind swirling between them. Yeren formed a mana circle in her palm and calmly said, "There's just one thing I want to check." Yeren spread her arms wide, mana swirling around her as she smiled. She told him to see if he could dodge her skill. With a calm look, the protagonist asked if this was just a test to see if he could protect himself. She nodded, explaining that if he could dodge it, it meant he might be capable of counterattacking too. As the mana glow intensified, Kang-hoo shielded his eyes from the blinding light. Recognizing the technique she was using, fog puppets that could track targets from long distances. It was the fog tracker. Sliding his hand aside, Kang-hoo kept his expression serious. It wasn't an attack meant to kill, but if he failed to avoid it, the evidence would stay on him and the test would be over on the spot. Clenching his fist, he called out for her to begin. Yeren smiled and raised her hand, responding with the same command. In an instant, the fog tracker, laced with green light, shot toward him. Kang-hoo braced himself, shifting into position to dodge. As the mana surged closer, he glanced up at the constellation with a grin, ready. The attack smashed into the spot where he'd been standing, sending smoke billowing through the area. Yeren turned, scanning through the haze, her face filled with shock. "No way," she muttered. Across the street, Kanghu was already sprinting along the building's edge. Yeren couldn't believe it. At his level, even managing a small leap was supposed to be difficult. But he moved like a trained assassin. Could that have been a short-range jump? With a smirk, she pointed 2 fingers at him, signaling her constellation. "Think you can dodge this one too?" She launched a second wave of mana, even stronger than the first. The Chaos Observer moved swiftly, and Yeren thrust her hand forward, aiming right at Kanghu. But as the beam tore through the air, Kanghu twisted his body mid-fall, smiling as he spun away from the strike at full speed. Yeren shielded her face from the blast, stunned as the dust cleared. He dodged it again. And what was that just now? Teleportation? Before she could react, Kanghu was already behind her, sword pressed to her throat, his expression serious. Looking her in the eyes, he suggested they wrap up the test. Yeren stepped back from the blade, laughing as she smiled. Kanghu wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, thinking to himself that she was quicker than he expected. No wonder she'd made it to the rank of mercenary commander. Yeren raised her hand, grinning with curiosity, and asked if he'd trained before. With a straight face, Kanghu replied that he hadn't. She casually pushed his sword away with 2 fingers and commented that no typical level 10 hunter should be able to pull off moves like that. Kanghu looked at her, surprised. "So, did I pass?" he asked. Yeren smiled as she glanced up at the sky and said she figured he could handle level 50 missions. Sliding his sword back into its sheath, Kanghu looked off to the side and simply said that sounded good. A bit later, they sped through a city of light-colored buildings. Yeren brought her fist to her mouth with a playful smile, asking if he was interested in installing bulletproof windows. Apparently, some persistent sniper had been tailing her lately. Leaning his head on his hand, Kanghu stared out the window. "A sniper? Huh?" he asked. Yeren rested her cheek on her palm, still smiling, and mentioned that Eclipse freaks had been paying her a lot of unwanted attention lately. Kanghu quietly thought to himself that this was nothing more than a battle over territory. Yeren glanced down at the paper in her hand and said the next job was tracking down a bandit. Since she was the client on the request, it could end up being pretty useful for him. Just then, the Chaos Observer, slightly flushed, floated over to him, holding out a sheet of paper. The assignment was clear. Locate Kim Mukyun, a level 50 mage, and head to the Abandoned Ruins dungeon in Gyeonggi. The goal? Retrieve a rank 3 item called Vardz's Boots. Clutching the paper tightly, Kanghu asked if Mukyun needed to be brought back alive. With a grin and her glasses perched on her head, Yeren told him that killing the target was perfectly fine. After all, too many civilians had died because of Mukyun. The Hunter National Security Agency wouldn't mind if he was taken out on the spot. Kanghu smiled back and said he'd get started immediately. Not long after, Kanghu stepped into the Abandoned Ruins dungeon. He thought back to Yeren's warning. Mukyun was likely in hiding, and the ruins were huge, so finding him wouldn't be easy. But as Kanghu looked around with a smirk, he realized this was actually the perfect place for his first real mission. After all, this was the same dungeon his character had used as a hideout in the original story. He already knew the layout, and there were plenty of mid-level bosses lurking around that could prove useful. The protagonist scanned the area, gripping his weapon tightly. Turning to the side, he quietly muttered, "There they are." Without hesitation, Kanghu slid the edge of his sword across his finger, drawing blood. A rabbit with glowing red eyes locked onto the dripping blood, its gaze sharpening. Moments later, a swarm of rabbits with furious expressions and razor-sharp claws charged straight at him. Kanghu calmly sidestepped the first attacker, vanishing with a short-range teleport. Reappearing in an instant, he sliced the rabbit clean in half. Again and again, he repeated the same move, teleporting with blinding speed and cutting down each rabbit one after another. When the last rabbit lunged at him, Kanghu flashed forward, ending it with a final slash. Bloodied sword in hand, he stood quietly, eyes focused on the path ahead. Yeren's words echoed in his mind, "Get the item for the client," and the rest was up to him. She had also asked what kind of reward he wanted. Kanghu had told her he only needed one thing: a license to clear dungeons packed with final bosses and mid-level bosses. Looking forward, he spotted someone new stepping into view, Ventus, appearing with a grin. Now that's a useful mid-level boss, Kanghu thought to himself. "Glad to meet you." A system notification popped up, alerting him that this target could be robbed. Ventus's eyes glowed red, and with a snarl, he declared he'd kill him. Kanghu smirked, then stopped standing around and do it. A surge of red mana erupted over Ventus as he lunged forward, dual blades flashing. Multiple clones of Ventus split off, each wrapped in a red aura, darting toward Kanghu from different angles. Ventus launched himself off the ground, raising his weapon high before swinging it down with brutal force, red mana bursting from the blade. Kang-Hu teleported at the last second, narrowly slipping out from beneath the blow. As he landed, his eyes glowed blue, and he thought to himself, that felt like the main strike, but the real attack is coming from over there. Spinning toward the second Ventus, Kang-Hu dashed forward with another short-range jump. His blade drove deep into Ventus's stomach. But Ventus wasn't done yet. Surrounded by red aura, he lifted his weapon overhead for another attack. Kang-Hu teleported again, this time reappearing right behind him. Mid-level boss or not, Kang-Hu thought, his close combat is sloppy. With a sharp kick to the back of Ventus's legs, Kang-Hu forced him to his knees. A system notification appeared, signaling that his weapon was now equipped. Without wasting a second, Kang-Hu raised his sword and drove it hard into Ventus's neck. Ventus, aura flickering, tilted his head back, eyes still glowing red as pain rippled through him. Kang-Hu shifted to the side, and in an instant, a sharp blue streak of mana shot out from his sword. Ventus's body shattered into countless fragments. A system notification popped up, letting him know he'd just acquired the illusion skill. Kang-Hu glanced at the system window and smirked. The protagonist turned his head, clenched his fist tightly, and noticed a brilliant light glowing through a building window. At that moment, the man stared at a green leaf and shouted that it was Solatium. Pointing ahead with a grin, he asked if Zhou Youngjae, a third-rank Ozen hunter, had seen this. Youngjae watched silently, deep in thought. So he took out Ventus by targeting her weak spot. Impressive. Meanwhile, the huntress turned toward her boss with a smirk, recalling the moment she'd seen this guy at the shop. She remembered Kang-Hu asking the shopkeeper for Severo brisket, cobalt blood, and a monster sleeping potion. Snapping out of her thoughts, she remarked that he was clearly planning to hunt monsters in the dungeon. Peering out the window, the man frowned. This guy, he's skilled. I've never seen him around here before. The boss narrowed his eyes. Someone like him shouldn't be running around in a dungeon like this. The huntress, wearing a playful grin, looked over and called him out by his status, reminding him that this newcomer was nowhere near his level. Raising her fist, she asked if they should go drag him in. Confidently, she assured them Youngjae could handle him without breaking a sweat. But the boss shook his head. With a mocking smile, he said there was no need. Easier to just let him tire himself out, then strip him clean. The huntress chuckled and gazed back out the window. Knew you'd say that, she said. We'll just wait till Kang-Hu wears himself down and then move in. A system alert popped up, notifying Kang-Hu that he'd reached level 16. Next milestone skill unlocks at level 20. Pressing his finger to the system screen, Kang-Hu made his choice. He'd dump all his points into stamina. With his natural mana hypersensitivity already heightened, there was no reason to invest in that anymore. Stamina was the key. Letting out a deep breath, Kang-Hu held the Solatium close. Finally, I feel somewhat alive. Solatium, a soothing, pain-relieving herb. Perfect for dulling mana hypersensitivity. Rarely found in regular dungeons since it only grows in the wild and is almost impossible to cultivate on a large scale. And the only person in the entire country who knows how to grow it is right at the center of this whole mess. Kang-Hu looked off to the side, his expression hardening as he thought to himself. This place used to be known as the demilitarized zone. It's a long way from here, and if he doesn't prepare soon, it'll be too late. If Kang-Hu loses control of his mana hypersensitivity mid-fight, it'll be over for him right then and there. The protagonist placed a hand on his head and kept walking down the dungeon street. After a while, a car sped down the same path. Behind the wheel, Yeren glanced around cautiously, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Just a year ago, the signal wasn't this bad, she muttered. It's only gotten worse. From the car's phone, she'd once mentioned that interference was inevitable. Nothing could be done about it. Especially now, caught between Eclipse and Black Lion. Things would only keep spiraling. Yeren's gaze flickered to the rearview mirror. Makes sense, she added quietly. She'd been used to checking her surroundings for a long time now. Keeping her guard up was second nature. Pushing forward, she asked if there was a hunter worth recommending. The car jolted as it rolled over scattered debris, skidding slightly as she corrected the wheel. She recalled another conversation over the phone, someone complaining about being short-staffed lately. With a grin, Yeren pressed the accelerator, weaving through the rubble. That's why he called me, she thought aloud. Still smiling, she admitted she wasn't sure if she could even suggest a hunter he'd approve of. On the other end, he held his phone, returning the same smile. Yeren repeated her question. Is there any hunter you'd actually consider? She figured anyone she mentioned would just get dismissed. Sherwan flipped through a stack of resumes, scanning the names and photos. I've adjusted my standard a bit, he said. Yeren's expression turned serious as she maneuvered the car forward. She remembered him saying he wanted to raise someone up from the lower ranks. I might have someone, she said. Sherwan glanced away, smirking. Really? That's so. Yeren admitted the guy might need more time. She didn't want to rush to any conclusions. Sherwan looked down at the photo on the resume, then back at Yeren. "You're never wrong," he said. "Shame we lost him to that accident." The commander let out a small sigh and smiled faintly. "That was ages ago. No point dwelling on it." Yeren nodded. She'd keep her eye on him. Then she turned and asked Sherwan if he had any intel she could use. Sherwan nodded. "Yeah, got some inside info on the criminal groups. I'll send it over by email." Later on, Yeren glanced at her glowing phone, smiling as she thanked him. Sherwan, cheeks slightly flushed, replied modestly that it was no big deal. He could pass along that kind of information anytime. Turning to the man beside her, she mentioned that their guild was always on the lookout for skilled people. He told her to send someone truly capable his way. Off to the side, a man with his mouth wrapped in manna shot him a quick glance. Yeren, her voice cold and firm during a call, had once promised she'd handle things perfectly. Letting out a deep sigh, she muttered to herself how odd it was for someone to have such high expectations placed on them when they'd only just taken on their first assignment. Meanwhile, Kong Hu's expression darkened as he thrust his weapon forward, striking the mid-level boss Ibria with brutal force. Ibria looked down at the sword piercing her, coughing heavily. The protagonist leaped back, bracing himself with one hand against the ground. With a glare, Ibria raised her clawed hand, aiming to strike. Kong Hu locked onto the incoming attack, keeping his focus sharp. He activated his abduction skill, dropping to one knee as he targeted her hand. The attack phased straight through him, smashing into a nearby stone. Ibria blinked in confusion, watching as her hand passed harmlessly by. Quickly raising her arm, she lifted the vanishing stone. Kong Hu darted to the side, triggering his illusion skill while thinking to himself about the weakness in her capture technique. He knew exactly how to exploit it. With a grin, Ibria hurled the stone, now pulsing with red mana. Kong Hu lunged forward, sliding low across the ground with his hand outstretched. The stone slammed into the earth, exploding into fragments and kicking up a thick cloud of dust. Through the haze, Ibria spotted something odd. Kong Hu's hand beneath the rubble shifted to a glowing blue hue before disappearing entirely. Her eyes widened. Without warning, the protagonist, now wrapped in mana, reappeared behind her. Drawing his sword, he drove it straight into her stomach. Ibria, her eyes glowing red, looked up and muttered something in her own language. Kong Hu yanked the blade free, sending blood splattering around him. A system notification appeared, mid-level boss defeated. His level had just gone up. The protagonist glanced off to the side, calmly thinking that his next stat points should go straight into endurance. Above Ibria's fading body, a system window appeared. It notified him that skills from a defeated target were being stolen. With the proficiency of his stealing skill maxed out, it worked across a fixed radius. Kong Hu looked at the system window, gripping his vanishing sword. Lifting his hand, he activated the stealing skill and directed it at a knife lying nearby. A hand formed from mana shot out and snatched the knife. Now holding the weapon, the protagonist examined it with a firm expression. If he handled it properly, using stolen items like this could massively boost his combat efficiency. Without hesitation, he gave the blade a quick swing while kneeling. Meanwhile, the huntress watched the scene unfold through her binoculars, jaw hanging open. "Take a look at that monster," she told her team. Young Jay, sweat beading on his forehead, stared ahead. "He's an actual killer. Did he just take down Ibria without a tank?" The huntress turned, asking what he was doing now. Is he testing his skills or something? Then, looking to the boss, she wondered aloud if it wasn't time to show him some reality. Young Jay rested his hand on the window frame, deep in thought, until someone called out to him, snapping him back to attention. The boss spun toward them, scowling. "Quiet," he barked. "We wait for him to wear himself out." The others quickly agreed, voices shaky with fear. Elsewhere, Mukiun ripped a chunk of meat with his teeth, his eyes locked on a slip of paper in his hand. It confirmed that Black Lion had officially approved him. Time to pass the word on to Yeren. With a cold, blue gaze, he sat atop a pile of corpses and tossed the half-eaten meat aside. "Good news for me," he muttered. Mukiun lowered the paper, smirking. "Bet Yeren's sweating bullets, trying to track me down." Mukiun crumpled the paper, his grin turning wicked. "Eclipse and Black Lion, not too bad. Finally, I'll get a ton. Been a long time." His gaze drifted ahead, and for just a moment, fear flickered across his face. Kong Hu set his eyes on the tall building where Mukiun was hiding. The protagonist glanced up, his expression serious as he clenched his fists. From above, Mukiun sneered. "Looks like another fool to rob," he muttered, slamming his fist against the wall. "Come on out already." Surrounded by black wolves radiating dark mana, Mukiun gave a wicked grin. "Time to feed." At his command, the wolves burst forward, leaping from the edge of the building straight toward the protagonist. Kong Hu calmly lifted a chunk of meat that materialized in his hand. One of the wolves lunged, jaws wide open and drool spilling out. Mucky-yun watched from above, frowning as the wolves stopped to tear into the meat. Seriously? Falling for something that's simple? Without hesitation, the protagonist gripped his sword tight and swung it upward, driving the blade straight into the body of a dark wolf. As he moved, he bit down on the meat himself, his gaze sharp. Mucky-yun's voice rang out in shock. What the hell is this? The protagonist shot him a glare. What? Want to buy the good stuff? He picked out the best piece, knowing exactly how tempting it was. The wolves that had surrounded the meat vanished in an instant. Kang-hu, his voice cold, warned Mucky-yun, if you want to keep living, hand over what you stole. Mucky-yun bared his teeth and raised his hand, shouting an insult at Yeren. Standing at the building's edge, he dared the protagonist to come take it. If you think you can, he taunted. Kang-hu pushed off the ground, sprinting to the side. Enough wasting time. Mucky-yun grinned to himself. Let him try. No way he's getting past my traps. Looking down from above, he thought smugly, run all you want. He'll blow himself sky high either way. As the protagonist activated his mana tracking skill, clusters of mines lit up in his vision. TCH. Way too many, he thought. Without slowing down, Kang-hu leaped forward, weapon in hand, leaving thick trails of smoke behind him. Mucky-yun scowled from above. This freak. Kang-hu charged ahead, smoke swirling at his back. Mucky-yun narrowed his eyes. No way he dodged them all. Flaring his mana, he raised his hand in frustration and shouted, You really think I'm scared of you? Right then, a system window popped up. The constellation Mucky-yun leans toward evil. The Chaos Fighter is offering techniques to weaken enemy senses and vision. Mucky-yun raised his hands, dark streams of mana swirling ominously around him. With a booming voice, he declared that his body was protected by his constellation. Lifting his arms, he unleashed rays of black mana, shouting that he'd drag Kang-hu into hell using black magic. In a flash, Kang-hu teleported out of the beam's path. The protagonist leaped high, dark smoke billowing beneath him. Looking ahead, he sized Mucky-yun up. Around level 50, a black mage backed by the constellation of lost senses. Without hesitation, Kang-hu dashed forward. I think I know exactly how to handle this. Mucky-yun smirked, clenching his fist. You're not getting away this time. Activating his blindness skill, a massive black circle appeared before him. Kang-hu's eyes narrowed at the sudden void, but kept charging ahead. Not yet, just a little longer. Waiting for the perfect moment, Kang-hu raised his sword. Now, Mucky-yun laughed from the shadows. How did you get through? Kang-hu tore through the dark space with ease. Simple, he said. I'm the one who created this ability. Mucky-yun's face twisted in rage. Lies. In response, Kang-hu unleashed his abduction skill. A massive hand shot forward, closing in on Mucky-yun. Sweat formed on Mucky-yun's brow as he shouted. Is this some kind of monster skill? An illusion whispered behind him. It's all fake. Just an illusion. But Kang-hu pointed his blade directly at Mucky-yun. Movement cancel. The sword drove straight through Mucky-yun's body. Without wasting a second, Kang-hu pulled the blade free, his expression unshaken. Mucky-yun, struggling, raised his hand and activated Mana Burn. A powerful burst of dark mana shattered the illusions and sent Kang-hu flying back. With fury in his eyes, Mucky-yun fired beams of mana. Burn in hell. As Kang-hu retreated, he analyzed the relentless attacks. Too fast. Is he using an artifact? Launching himself out a window, Kang-hu pushed off the wall, regaining his balance. Mucky-yun gathered a deadly sphere of mana, glaring down at Kang-hu. You worthless trash, he yelled, his red eyes glowing. The next second, he fired a searing beam of mana straight at Kang-hu, roaring, Die. The protagonist took a direct hit from the dark mana and collapsed. Watching with a grin, Mucky-yun ordered Kang-hu to fall back. But his smile faded when he noticed countless illusions of the protagonist standing before him. Frustrated, Mucky-yun raised his hands, mana surging around him, and shouted, calling the protagonist a freak. Using the momentary imbalance, he lifted his hands high and unleashed a massive mana explosion. The illusions, unfazed, charged straight ahead without a scratch. Glaring, Mucky-yun extended his hand and yelled out, demanding to know what was happening. Kang-hu placed a hand on his head and pressed his sword to his side. Mucky-yun, now drenched in sweat and unable to react, called out loudly. But it was too late. The protagonist drove his sword straight through Mucky-yun's body with force. Mucky-yun collapsed, one hand bracing the ground as he coughed. Pressing his hand over his wound, he let out a strained laugh and asked how he'd been fooled. Looking down at him with a bloodied face and a smirk, Kang-hu replied that he was curious about that himself. The master of mobile warfare commented that it was a brilliant tactic. Turning to the system window that popped up before him, the protagonist declared that this was it. The system message read that the constellation Master of Mobile Warfare praised his strategy, using a bit of holy power to grant him a positive effect. His experience had increased by 0.1%. Kang-hoo glanced at the window, wondering if this was what real support looked like. After all, plenty of constellations observe hunters, but not all offered help. Support drained their power, and most wouldn't waste it. As the protagonist stared at the glowing yellow window, the constellation Dimension Looter chimed in, saying this barely counted as support. Such a tiny effort almost felt like an insult. With a grin, Kang-hoo told him not to stress. Choosing him was the best move, and he'd make sure to prove it. The Dimension Looter scoffed, calling him insane, and urged him to focus on finishing Mukian. Without hesitation, the protagonist swung his sword at the leg of the crawling Mukian. Mukian let out a panicked shout, throwing insults at Kang-hoo. Still lying on the ground, Mukian pointed a trembling finger and barked out if capturing someone like him was even worth it. Did Kang-hoo really believe it would change anything? With a weary expression, Kang-hoo replied that if taking down someone like Mukian could actually change the world, he would have done it long ago. The protagonist raised his sword with confidence, ready to strike. Mukian's eyes widened in terror as the mana-coated blade came rushing toward his face. A system window flashed, confirming the target had been eliminated. The Chaos Fighter's contract had been stolen, and the constellation was now under the control of the Dimension Looter. Until the contract ran out, Kang-hoo couldn't remove the effect and would inherit all the abilities of Chaos Fighter. With the sword fading from his grip, the protagonist tapped on the system window. New skills unlocked: blindness and light chaos. Kang-hoo let out a satisfied chuckle, saying his luck just kept getting better. Looking ahead with a smirk, the protagonist mentioned it was time to claim one more prize. Grabbing Mukian by the collar, he dragged him up and muttered that stripping men wasn't exactly his thing. Kang-hoo rummaged through the body, tossing items aside and commenting on the haul. For level 50 gear, it was nothing special, but the protagonist figured it was still worth keeping. Slipping on a mana glove, he noted how perfect it would be paired with a throwing dagger. Kang-hoo tried on a vest, remarking that its health effect could use an upgrade. Holding up a mana ring, he admired its stamina boost. An item like this was too valuable to waste. Finally, the protagonist studied an amulet in his hand with a grin. The amulet of the god of evil. It consumed 1 mana per second during awakening, but in return, skill cooldowns were reduced. Glancing at the system window, Kang-hoo shoved his hand into his pocket, pleased. This was exactly the kind of buff he needed. Still smiling, the protagonist looked forward, thinking this was the item he'd been searching for. Kang-hoo decided to sell off all the level 9 gear. There'd be good profit in it. If things went smoothly, he could hit level 20 before long. With a confident clench of his fists, Kang-hoo left the building, already thinking ahead. The Killer Devourer skill would activate soon. After some time passed, the protagonist scanned the area. It was quiet, too quiet. Not a single monster in sight. The setup was perfect for an ambush. From a tall building nearby, a bright light glinted through the window. Peering through binoculars, a huntress smirked and called for everyone to check out the target. With a loud order, she told them to finish him. Young Jae grinned, asking if they were kicking things off. Another man, gripping a bag, glanced at the glowing light in the building. The boss gave a nod, signaling the start. Dropping the bag to the ground, the man confirmed loudly, request accepted. Young Jae shouted for them to wear him down properly. Dozens of white rabbits with glowing red eyes turned as one. Their jaws opened wide in a frenzy as they charged straight at Kang-hoo. The protagonist, gripping his bloodied weapon, watched them rush in and smirked. There they are, he muttered. With a swing of his blade, a surge of mana slashed through the swarm, cutting the creatures clean in half. A system window popped up, level 20 reached. Kang-hoo, still holding his weapon, smirked as he looked ahead. This was what he'd been waiting for. Another notification appeared. He'd unlocked the assassin class's main skill, Quick Strike. But thanks to his constellation, it had evolved into Bleeding Strike, boosting the bleeding effect with every hit. From above, the huntress glanced down and scoffed. Too easy. Young Jae, smirking beside her, disagreed. He just let his guard down for a second. Before the words even settled, the boss, gripping his weapon, launched himself at Kang-hoo with explosive speed. Yin, scowling, sent a wave of mana barreling forward. Kang-hoo narrowly dodged the blast, stepping aside with sharp focus. He had the newcomer. Who was this guy? Another one looking to rob him? A little closer, and that attack might have taken his head. The boss, his sword crackling with a red aura, snarled. Did I really miss? Yin darted to the side, swinging his sword wide. Not this time, he roared. Kang-hoo didn't hesitate. He charged in and slashed across the boss's body. The system window confirmed it. A bleeding strike. 10 more hits, and the target's regeneration would start to fail. Kang-hoo glanced at the notification. He had to land as many strikes as possible fast. But then his eyes snapped up. Yin was still standing, still grinning, still holding his sword. That's what you call an attack? He taunted, his voice laced with menace. Behind him, the other hunters cheered, their voices echoing. It's pointless, they laughed. This fight won't end. He's only getting stronger. Yin lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air with deadly force. Kanghu backed off, realizing just how dangerous this one was. Strong, maybe even stronger than him. Kanghu dashed forward at incredible speed, slicing into the boss with another bleeding strike. Spinning around, he pointed his weapon ahead, eyes locked on young Jae, who stood unharmed before him. The boss spread his arms wide and laughed loudly. Go on, keep trying. His comrade watched with a smirk, thinking Kanghu just needed to land 4 more hits. Without hesitation, the protagonist shot forward again, smoke billowing up around him as he charged. Youngji's expression shifted to shock as Kanghu launched straight at him, his gaze dark and focused. Activating the blindness skill, Kanghu struck. Youngji's red eyes blinked into the void of darkness. Confused and under the effect of light chaos, he shouted out, What? What is this? Kanghu didn't slow down. He landed another bleeding strike, though even that was starting to feel pointless. No matter how many times he cut him, it never seemed to matter. But suddenly, young Jae turned with a wicked grin. Ah, now I can see again, he sneered, his glowing eyes locked on Kanghu. Out of tricks already? Then, without warning, young Jae winced, clutching his head. What? What is this? He groaned, clearly in pain. The confusion spread across his face. Why was his strength fading? The hunters above stared down in shock. The hunters called out, demanding to know what was happening to him. One of the others wiped sweat from his forehead, staring forward in disbelief. Grinding his teeth, young Jae roared, This can't be happening. Mana flared wildly around him, his veins bulging as he screamed. The more you hit me, the stronger I get. But then, a massive hand made of mana clamped down on him. He glanced down, just in time to see Kanghu's sword driving straight through him. Kanghu watched the trembling boss and spoke coldly. You might be a berserker, but you're still human. Lose enough blood and you die. Sliding his hand into his jacket, Kanghu glanced at Youngji's collapsed body. The huntress, now panicked, rushed forward, shouting that they needed to retreat. One of the others yelled back that this wasn't over, that Kanghu wasn't as tough as he thought. Ignoring them, the protagonist casually bit into a solatium and scoffed. Where do these idiots keep coming from? Nothing you can do about it. Guess that's just the Ozen hunters for you. A system window appeared, notifying that the target had been eliminated and the Blood Eater contract had been claimed. Kanghu looked at the notification with a grin. Now, what do we have here? The protagonist looked up with confidence. That's the second one today. Shouldn't you at least be supporting me by now? The Dimension Looter scoffed. You've lost it. A system notification appeared, confirming that the Blood Eater had been enslaved by the Dimension Looter. Until the contract expired, Kanghu couldn't remove the effect and would inherit all of the Blood Eater's abilities. This constellation was neutral, and as his health decreased, his resistance to mental attacks would only grow stronger. Kanghu raised an eyebrow. A constellation that blocks mental attacks? Not bad at all. He collected the spoils, a bracelet that resisted magical attacks, shoes that boosted his speed, and gloves designed to increase endurance. Examining the gloves on his hands, he nodded. Perfect. One for defense, and the other for throwing. Without wasting time, he stepped forward. Now then, time to finish this request. Later that night, inside a dim room, Yeren held a pair of shoes in her hands, smiling. Resting her hand on the table, she looked over at Kanghu. I didn't think you'd actually track down Bart's shoes so easily. She thanked him, her smile never fading. The first request is just a test, you know? Half the people fail it. Kanghu paused, his expression turning serious. So that means half of them die completing it. It was only through cold logic and careful planning that the odds leaned in his favor. Yeren slid a folded paper across the table. Like I promised, here's your reward. Full access to a dungeon with mid-level bosses. Everything you need to know is written here. Kanghu unfolded the paper. It described a dungeon hidden in the cargo pass near Gaepyeong Station, guarded by 4 mid-level bosses and a single main boss. Yeren glanced at him. Satisfied, reading over the details, Kanghu smirked. This is the place. The 5 skills I need are all inside this dungeon. Leaning on the table, he looked up. I'll head out tomorrow afternoon. Then, holding out several items, he asked, Interested in buying these? Yeren looked over the gear with surprise. These are pretty decent. I'll pay a good price. With business handled, she moved on, ready for the next request. Kanghu pointed to the photo on the paper. This guy. Yeren nodded. Yeah, it's from the Public Security Agency. His name's Hyo Youngtae, charged with stealing government property, robbery, and assault. The bounty's sitting at 300 million, plus a full month of access to any dungeon under level 100. Yeren studied the paper in her hands, her expression serious. Are you sure you can handle this? She asked. We don't have a single lead. The last sighting was near Yangpyeong Station, and after that he completely vanished. Kang Hu smiled calmly. Don't worry, I've got my own ways of finding him. Not long after, Kang Hu stood among a cluster of buildings lit by bright neon signs. Phone pressed to his ear. Selling off his spare gear had earned him 250 million won. Now that his wallet was full, it was time to move forward. On the other end of the line, a man's voice answered, Who's this? Kang Hu glanced at the screen. I'm putting in an order. 10 batches of solatium. Deliver them to Yongsan Station. Order confirmed, the man replied without hesitation. Kang Hu looked up at the glowing signs above. There was still time before the dungeon raid started. Might as well grab a drink and pick up some information while he waited. Inside the bar, chaos broke out. A man launched a blast of mana in anger, sending someone crashing to the floor, clutching his neck and coughing up blood. Instead of fear, the crowd watched with excitement, entertained by the scene. Ignoring the commotion, Kang Hu approached the counter and confidently slid over a stack of bills. 1 glass of solatium. Behind the bar, Benny paused, shaker in hand. Solatium? She repeated with surprise. Smiling, she scooped up the bills. Didn't expect anyone to order that. Not exactly a popular taste. Leaning on the table, Kang Hu replied, It's just my style. Benny turned back with a grin. Hang tight. Kang Hu rested his fist against his mouth, thinking. Bartenders in places like this always knew something useful. Of course, whether the info was true or not, that was another story. But then he froze. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted someone familiar, Cha So-hee, one of Eclipse's operatives. What was she doing here? Sweat beaded on his forehead. Don't tell me they're tracking me. Just then, Benny placed the glass in front of him. First time seeing someone like you around here, she said with a smile. Shame we won't be seeing each other again. Kang Hu narrowed his eyes. And why's that? Benny leaned in close, covering her mouth with one hand as she whispered with a smug expression. Word is, Eclipse has their eyes on this place. Kang Hu tightened his grip around the glass. So that was it. Eclipse planned to snatch up the hunters gathered here and force them into labor at the mines. Classic human trafficking play. Lifting the glass to his lips, Kang Hu glanced away, thinking how ridiculous it was that he couldn't even sit down for a quiet drink without getting dragged into something like this. Draining the glass, he stood up, realizing he'd better move fast. But before he could take a step, both he and Benny snapped their heads toward the entrance as the room went dead quiet. Kang Hu felt a chill run down his spine. Eclipse operatives had just walked through the door. A girl bolted toward them, shouting, Is that really Eclipse? One of the men standing nearby stared ahead in shock. Why are they here? He muttered. One of the Eclipse men grinned. Better run while you can. We're taking everything we came for. Without warning, they rushed forward, shouting about securing their goods. One of them grabbed a guy by the arm and slammed a mana-charged fist into his stomach, dropping him on the spot. Another swung his weapon at a nearby man, then turned toward Kang Hu. What are you staring at? He sneered, lifting his axe. Looking to get hit next? Before the attack could land, Kang Hu blinked behind him, teleporting in an instant. The worker barely had time to react. Wah! So fast. Kang Hu's blade shimmered with mana as he slashed clean across the man's neck. The body hit the floor. From the corner, Cha So-hee watched with a cold gaze, rubbing her chin as she observed the chaos unfold. Without hesitation, she leapt to the side. Kang Hu frowned. What's she? Before he could finish the thought, Cha So-hee hurled a knife straight into the chest of another Eclipse worker. Kang Hu watched in shock as the man staggered, clutching the blade. Cha So-hee calmly walked over, yanked the knife free, and raised her hand again. The wounded man stuttered, Why? Before he could get the words out, Cha So-hee drove her foot into his chest, sending him crashing across the room. Kang Hu glanced calmly at Cha So-hee, wondering what exactly she was planning. With a playful smile, Cha So-hee looked him over. First time seeing you, but you look familiar, she said. Which guild are you with? Kang Hu kept his expression steady. One that doesn't like being tied down. Cha So-hee placed her hands on his shoulders, her grin widening. Maybe we should talk business sometime, she said, glancing toward the Eclipse members. But first, let's clean this up. The Eclipse workers shifted nervously, unsure what to do next. Change of plans, Cha So-hee said quietly. Take them out. The workers lunged forward, shouting for backup as they charged. Kang Hu watched them come, unfazed. This won't be easy. Cha So-hee raised her hands, still smiling. Guess I'll give you a hand. Kang Hu glanced at her, wondering if she was trying to test him. He wasn't about to let her outdo him now. Gripping his weapon, Kang Hu focused on the oncoming enemies. Cha So-hee darted ahead, and Kang Hu hurled his sword straight into one of the workers. The man dropped instantly, a gaping wound in his chest. Now's our chance, one of the others shouted. Take him down. Kang Hu stretched out his hand. His sword flew back through the air, stabbing straight through another worker. Without pausing, Kang Hu summoned a new sword, slicing through one man's hand before turning and slashing another across the neck. Cha So-hee glanced over, surprised. Was that telekinesis? Kang Hu, grinning, raised his bloodied sword. Emergency exit. Move. They sprinted forward. Behind them, the remaining workers yelled to stop them and cover the rear. Cha So-hee ran alongside Kang Hu, laughing. A hunter who can use magic too? Impressive. Kang Hu glanced down at his glove, remembering what he'd said before. Perfect match for a dagger. Snapping out of the thought, Kang Hu smirked as he glanced back at her. She can figure out what she wants. I'm not here to explain myself. Kang Hu stretched his leg forward, halting as several Eclipse workers rounded the corner. A voice echoed through the club's speakers. Attention, customers. In an effort to stir chaos in this club, Eclipse has planted blackline insiders. A full takeover is underway. Weapons drawn, the workers charged forward with furious expressions. One swung a mana-charge hammer straight at Kang Hu, but he dodged back just in time. Without hesitation, Kang Hu raised his weapon and slashed into one of the workers' necks. Then, driving his elbow forward, he struck another directly in the throat with a burst of mana. A system window flashed before him. Notification. The Constellation Apostle of Justice is impressed by your actions against hypocrisy and evil. She has consumed holy power to grant you a positive effect. Experience increased by 0.1%. Kang Hu smirked as he turned to the next opponent. So this is justice, huh? With a wild glare, he dashed toward an oncoming worker and drove his sword deep into the man's skull. Hard to believe a world like this exists, he thought. Just as Kang Hu called out, thanking him for the backup, another group hurled mana-infused axes his way. Kang Hu sidestepped the attack, the axes slamming into the wall behind him, leaving cracks in their wake. Without slowing, Kang Hu stepped onto one of the embedded axes and launched himself forward. Activating his skill mid-air, he slashed through multiple workers with a mana-coated dagger. So that's the Apostle of Justice, he thought as he landed, dropping to one knee. Nearby, Cha So-hee ripped her dagger from fallen worker's skull. Looking down at the scattered bodies, she nodded to herself. Knew it. As Kang Hu bashed a door open with a heavy kick, he glanced over his shoulder and gestured toward the passage with his thumb. Cha So-hee clenched her fists and grinned. Glad I didn't let this one slip by. Sometime later, under the starry night sky, a frustrated Eclipse worker pressed a hand to his earpiece and barked orders. Search the area. I want every corner checked. Meanwhile, behind a nearby wall, Kang Hu and Cha So-hee waited quietly. She looked at him and smirked. How about we do this without any trouble for once? With a grin, she handed him a business card. The pay's good. Think about it. Kang Hu took the business card from her hand with a smirk, glancing to the side. If something urgent comes up, get in touch, he said before turning to leave. Watching him go, Cha So-hee pressed a finger to the mic in her ear and reported back to her superior. That wraps up the test. The rest of the investigation should be simple. Just tell me a name. She smiled to herself as she added, You're talking about Kang Hu, right? There was a brief pause before she continued. There were a few minor issues, but the benefits outweigh the losses. Later, in the middle of a busy station, Kang Hu stepped off the train and scanned the area. Judging by Cha So-hee's reaction earlier, it seemed that he is not wanted yet. Just in case, it might be best to avoid Taejun for a while. He couldn't shake the irritation building inside him. Eclipse's influence was spreading faster than ever. It was getting out of control. They had even been watching the trains heading toward Gapyeong. Instead of risking that route, he figured it was safer to slip out through Yongsan Station. Sometime later, Kang Hu placed his suitcase on the rack, sat down, and checked the Solatium delivery. Smiling, he held the package in his hand. At least this part went smoothly. With his hands tucked into his pockets, he thought back. In the original story, Kang Hu had picked up Solatium near this station a few times. Good thing he remembered. His thoughts were interrupted by a nearby conversation. Turning slightly, he overheard a man grumbling into his phone. Kang Hu raised his hand to his face, unsure if he really needed to play along with whatever was going on. The man on the phone complained loudly. There aren't any dungeons left to find in Seoul. Frustrated, he pulled the phone from his ear and shouted, Why isn't anyone doing anything about this? Turning back to the call, he barked, Just get over to Yunghwa Station already. Before long, people gathered around a massive sign hanging from a tall building. The once respected Yunghwa Guild, sworn to protect, had turned the area into their personal monopoly over dungeon access. Still, this was the only place where the public security agency kept things running properly. And that alone was enough to control such a massive market. Of course, everything here came with a steep price. The market was nearly 1.5 times bigger than anywhere else, and there was no shortage of valuable items. Kang Hu gripped the dagger in his hand and muttered, Time to ditch this training sword. And fast. A system window appeared, notifying Kang Hu that the weapon in his hand was Heaven's Bliss, a level 5 weapon that boosted strength by 50 points. He glanced down, forming a stone in his palm. With barely any effort, he crushed it into dust. Looking at the crumbled remains in his hand, he smirked. Now, that's real power. Another system notification followed. Heaven's Bliss. Skill, if no battles occur for over 30 minutes. Stamina, recovery, speed doubles. Gripping the dagger tighter, Kong Hu smiled to himself. Plenty of possibilities with this one. Unlike other hunters, he didn't have to stress about mana. If he wanted to push his mana hypersensitivity to the limit, managing his physical endurance took priority. Yeah, I'll take it, he said quietly. Later, Kong Hu walked through the street, dagger in hand, casually observing his surroundings. He slowed his steps when a conversation nearby caught his attention. A young boy, holding his father's hand, looked up at his mother and asked if they could have chicken for dinner. The mother smiled and nodded. Of course. This is Seoul, after all. The father closed his eyes and added confidently, the Public Security Agency and the Manhwa Guild are here to keep us safe. Kong Hu kept walking, shaking his head. That's nothing but wishful thinking. A sudden scream snapped him out of his thoughts. Turning his head, he spotted the boy's father on the ground, clutching a bleeding wound on his cheek, pleading, please, just leave the kid alone. The attacker, holding the boy in his arms, looked down at the man. You think I'm joking? He pressed his fingers together and sneered. If you're going to beg, do it properly. The boy, crying, pounded his tiny fists against the man's body, desperately calling for his dad. Onlookers watched in shock. Voices rose from the crowd, calling out for someone to contact the Public Security Agency. Kong Hu stared ahead, his face serious. Is this really happening in broad daylight? In Seoul? Unbelievable. Monsters like this just walking around. He smirked to himself. Guess I'll do them a favor, on behalf of the guild. Kong Hu froze, staring ahead in shock as the men suddenly turned toward the commotion. It's Chai Guanhyung from the Manhwa Guild, someone shouted. A system window flashed. Notification. Constellation of harmful incense. Demon of war. Specializes in swordsmanship and spatial manipulation. Kong Hu's eyes narrowed. Never thought I'd run into one of Shawan's people here. Someone like him shouldn't be getting involved in something like this. So why is he? Guanhyung casually tossed a sleek black bank card toward the kidnappers, smiling as it hit the ground. The masked man picked it up and looked it over with interest. And what's this supposed to be? Guanhyung held out his hand. Spend whatever you want. Just hand over the kid. Before the man could even finish considering it, he shoved the boy aside with force, barking, Don't even think about moving. The boy tumbled straight into Guanhyung's arms, crying out in fear. The father clenched his fists, terror plastered across his face. Long black claws sprouted from Guanhyung's hands as he vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a swirling stream of smoke. Kong Hu glanced over. So he's got spatial abilities, definitely not someone ordinary. The men turned, startled, as Guanhyung reappeared, summoning a dense wave of dark mana that sealed off any chance of escape. One of the men cautiously held out his hand toward the smoke. What is this? Guanhyung didn't give them time to figure it out. He advanced without hesitation, his weapon slicing through their bodies with dark magic. As the dust settled, Kong Hu noticed a familiar face. It was the same hunter he'd seen earlier at the station, now staring in horror at his fallen ally. You killed him? The hunter stammered, looking back and forth in disbelief. Panicked, he raised his hand, begging, Please, we did what you asked. Just spare me. Outside the dark sphere, onlookers whispered, confused. What's going on? Is this some kind of skill? We can't hear anything. Sweat dripping down his face. The trembling hunter reached into his pocket, pulled out his weapon, and shouted, lunging forward in desperation. Guanhyung smiled coldly, met the attack without hesitation, and struck him down in one swift move. As the smoke cleared and his skill faded, Guanhyung stepped forward, calmly announcing, It's over. You're all safe now. Kong Hu stared ahead, his expression serious. As expected from Guanhyung, he thought, using independent hunters like this to boost the Manhwa Guild's reputation, all just another move to tighten their monopoly. Let them enjoy the moment while they can. It won't last. Soon, everything will belong to him. Meanwhile, a man handed over a stack of papers, bowing slightly. Sorry to bother you in person, but this is all the information we have on the fugitive you mentioned. Chaso he sat back in her chair, calmly flipping through the documents. When her eyes landed on Kong Hu's photo, she smiled. I thought that face looked familiar. Up on the mountain, a man stood with his hands behind his back, looking into the distance. Kong Hu turned toward him. I think it's time. Can I enter? The man glanced at another hunter and nodded. The dungeon's ready. Then his gaze shifted back to Kong Hu. But you're only level 20. That's well below what we recommend for this dungeon. You sure you're ready for this? Kong Hu smirked. If I'm going to steal those skills, I have no choice but to push my level up. Without that, I wouldn't stand a chance. Looking at the system window, he tapped his finger against it. Level 50. That's the minimum. If I want to climb faster, there's no time to waste. Kong Hu glanced ahead with a grin. Let's get started. Later, wind and sand whipped across the barren path as Kong-Hu pressed forward, shielding his face from the storm. Squinting ahead, he muttered, "I can't see a thing out here." Looking back at the faint trail he left in the sand, he exhaled. If I hadn't marked the path, I would have been lost already. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and glanced up at the cliff. Raising his hand to steady himself, he muttered, "That was close. Almost fell. Is this really the end of the road?" But before he could turn back, something caught his eye. Through the swirling dust, dozens of glowing red eyes watched him from the shadows. Kong-Hu tightened his grip on his weapon, recognizing them immediately. Lizards. He raised his weapon and took a step forward. Good. If I clear them out, I can reach my goal even faster. As the lizards lunged, Kong-Hu swung his blade, slashing through the air. Meanwhile, Cha-Sahi studied the papers in her hand, thinking it over carefully. Looking up, she asked calmly, "So what's the conclusion?" The man commented that it seemed like Kong-Hu had managed to attack using mana and somehow got lucky getting past a level 100 hunter. But thinking back, that didn't quite add up, especially since Kong-Hu successfully landed another hit afterward. Lowering his head in defeat, the man muttered that pulling off something like that at just level 10 was impossible. Turning his attention to the photo of the magic circle drawn in blood on the toilet floor, she spoke up, saying she had overheard him. Then, handing him a few sheets of paper, she admitted that she had actually met Kong-Hu just a couple of days ago. With his hands clasped behind his back, the man narrowed his eyes and demanded to know what she meant. She explained that, based on her estimation, Kong-Hu had to be at least level 100. Raising her hand, flames of mana swirling around her, she nervously asked how that could be possible if the man couldn't even detect his level. Meanwhile, Kong-Hu launched his dagger straight at the lizard, a grin on his face. The creature clutched its pierced stomach and hissed something in its own tongue. Looking ahead, the protagonist thought to himself that this was exactly what he'd expected. Kong-Hu had landed a direct hit to the belly, but it wasn't enough to finish the job. If he wanted to wipe them all out, it would take ages. Sliding on his glove, the protagonist funneled mana into his dagger and slashed through the crowd, leaving the lizards wounded but not dead. Scanning the area, Kong-Hu noticed there were only 2 left untouched. Without hesitation, he hurled his dagger again, piercing one right through the stomach. One by one, the lizards collapsed, chattering in their strange language. Smirking, blue aura swirling around him, the protagonist raised a finger and motioned for them to come at him again. In an instant, the lizards surged forward, tearing up the sand as they charged. As Kong-Hu glanced back, he reminded himself of a critical rule when hunting monsters. If a creature dies without the hunter dealing any damage, the kill doesn't count. But what if he made sure to land at least one blow on each of them? Gripping his dagger tightly, Kong-Hu dashed forward, slipping past the lizards as the thought clicked. This changed everything. The lizards, not giving up, lunged ahead at full speed, shouting in their own tongue as they closed the distance. The protagonist launched himself over the cliff with a powerful leap, activating his jump skill. The lizards, their eyes glowing red, glared at Kong-Hu as he landed safely on the opposite side. Glancing back, he watched as the lizards plunged into the abyss. They hit the bottom with a heavy crash before vanishing completely. One after another, system notifications popped up, confirming that several regular monsters had been eliminated. His level climbed to 27. With a wide grin, Kong-Hu shouted out in triumph, celebrating his success. Meanwhile, elsewhere, she rested her hand on her hip, staring down at the magic circle drawn in blood on the toilet floor. With a curious expression, she asked if Kong-Hu had really been the one behind this. She couldn't help but wonder, why would he perform a blood ritual like this? Did he actually summon the constellation? Looking straight ahead, her expression grew serious. Raising her phone to her ear, she answered the call from her master. He asked if her investigation was complete. Leaning against the wall, she replied that she was still working on it. This fugitive, she admitted, wasn't just some ordinary runaway. The master responded that he'd suspected as much. Walking down the hallway, she requested backup, asking him to send another person. Curious, he questioned why. Looking up, her thoughts drifted to the fallen powerhouse. Someone had said the wrong thing, pushed her too far, and she'd ended up killing them. Back at the cliff, Kong-Hu's gaze lingered on the vanishing lizards. The protagonist raised his hand, clutching his weapon close to his face while holding a mana stone in his other hand. Memories flashed back to the days when he worked in the mines, extracting these same stones. Shaking off the thought, he tossed the stone aside. Speaking aloud, he figured that by now, they had probably realized he was the fugitive. Clenching his fist, he declared that he wasn't going to be captured without a fight. Suddenly, from within the swirling sand behind him, a mid-level fire boss emerged, fists tightened and ready for battle. Unfazed, Kong-Hu turned around, a smirk on his face, and welcomed the challenge, saying he'd been waiting for this moment. Without hesitation, the protagonist gripped his weapon tightly and announced that he was about to unleash his first ability. Up on the mountain, a man silently observed the scene below. Drawing his bow and nocking an arrow, he took careful aim. Moments later, the defeated monster lay motionless in the water, and the system confirmed he'd successfully stolen the fire modifier skill. Shin Kanghu looked ahead, clearly pleased, as the system informed him that the newly acquired skill could evolve based on his constellation. It even allowed him to add fire attributes to any weapon he wielded. Off to the side, his pursuer watched in silence, shaken by what he'd just witnessed. He couldn't wrap his head around how Shin had managed to take down a mid-level boss so easily. This guy wasn't just good, he was skilled. First, he'd used his dagger to provoke the fire boss, then led him straight into an oasis, finishing it off himself. Those kinds of tactics weren't something you'd expect from a low-level player. This was definitely the kind of person who deserved the leader's attention. A while back, Li Aaron placed Shin's file in front of him and then turned away. He asked if she was seriously assigning him to tail this hunter. Looking at Shin's photo, she confirmed it. The test results were exceptional, but his level was still a concern. Turning back to him, she reminded him to step in if things got risky. With a satisfied glance, she added that teamwork shouldn't be forgotten. He thought to himself that with a bit more development, Shin's talent could become something incredible. Standing from his hiding spot, he decided to keep following. Not long after, a dagger shot toward a monster, but it deflected the attack with a barrier and immediately countered, smirking as it commented that its opponent must be a defender. Looking over the battlefield, Shin quickly assessed the situation. There was a mid-level boss covering the rear, another guarding the flank, and a third holding the front. Watching them move together, he muttered that hopefully their payout would match their combined strength. He recalled what Li Aaron had told him earlier. Back then, he'd given her a nod, promising to get in touch after handling Hyo Youngtae. As he was about to leave, she stopped him, pointing out that they had strong clients and suggesting he work with them instead. Crossing her arms, she added that clearing an entire dungeon solo wouldn't be easy. Shin had paused, considering her for a moment before flashing a grin. He told her he had no plans of joining anyone. He worked alone and intended to claim everything for himself. Back in the fight, Shin executed a short-range jump, circling around the enemies to attack from behind. But when he struck, the barrier held strong. His attack failed to break through. Shin Kanghu moved swiftly, using teleportation and space capture to throw the enemies into complete disarray. Landing a few steps back, he thought to himself that this was perfect. This should be more than enough. The monsters exchanged confused glances, but Shin wasn't finished. Activating abduction, he noted that this was the maximum range the skill would work. Without slowing down, he dashed toward the boss, rolling smoothly beneath it, then approached another and muttered that this was exactly why he avoided working with team. One of the monsters stared at him, clearly surprised. Shin continued, saying that relying on others meant giving up control, and without calculating every move, failure was certain. With a quick teleport, he appeared again, this time right in front of a monster, who froze in fear. Shin didn't give a chance to react. Using a short-range jump, he slipped past its guard and shattered its defense, sending it flying. The system immediately confirmed the defeat of two mid-level bosses. The last remaining boss, enraged, charged straight at him, swinging wildly. But Shin teleported again, vanishing before the monster could land a hit. Caught off guard, the monster spun around just as Shin reappeared inside its barrier. Smirking, Shin commented that the trick didn't work this time. He slipped around the monster, driving his sword straight through it. The creature gave him one last pitiful look before collapsing. The system chimed in, announcing that the final mid-level boss had been eliminated and his level had risen to 29. Pulling his sword from the fallen boss, Shin glanced at the system messages that appeared next. Apparently, he'd unlocked the front, flank, and rear defense skills, which had automatically merged into a new ability, Defensive Barrier. It was a powerful, reinforced shield that would hold until its usage time ran out. With a leaf between his teeth, Shin studied the details carefully. Interesting. The skill had already been pushed to its maximum level, and he knew it would come in handy. From a distance, the observer watched quietly, realizing Shin was even more impressive than expected. Maybe he really didn't need any support. Still, it was too early to say for sure. As Shin moved on, the observer stood and kept his eyes on him, thinking that the truth would reveal itself during the fight with the main boss. Before long, an undead monster appeared before Shin. The observer watched silently as Shin faced it and finally spoke. "So we meet at last." The undead greeted him with a wicked grin. Pointing straight at the creature, Shin declared that from the very beginning, this was the opponent he'd been after. The undead unleashed a barrage of dark purple fireworks, but Shin Kanghu dodged every blast with precise short-range jumps. Slipping behind the creature, he went in for an attack, but the undead quickly cast flight magic and soared into the air. From above, the monster launched a flurry of wind arrows. Sprinting across the battlefield with a leaf clenched between his teeth, Shin thought to himself how difficult it was to keep up with this one. As the wind arrows cut through the air, one shattered the leaf in his mouth. Shin blinked in surprise. This monster wasn't holding back in the slightest. From behind, the undead switched to defensive magic, clearly preparing for another wave of arrow attacks. Shin knew if he tried getting close now, he'd have to take some hits. In that case, bleeding would be inevitable, but luckily, he had his signature skill, Blood Flower. Just imagining the monster snapping its fingers and killing him in an instant was enough to make Shin realize that with Blood Flower, he could turn the tables just as fast. As he dashed across the battlefield, arrows raining down around him, Shin's mind raced. He needed a plan. He couldn't afford to reveal his other skills just yet. Dodging relentlessly, Shin smirked to himself. So far, he'd only shown his short-range jumps. The boss had no clue about his real trump cards. The undead, growing more irritated, kept pressing the attack. From the sidelines, the observer watched quietly, noting how neither of them had managed to land a decisive blow. Was it really taking this long just to find a weak spot? Frustrated, the monster gathered its power and fired off an enormous spell. Shin grinned. Finally, you're getting serious. Dark purple fireworks exploded again, and several glowing spheres shot toward him. This is the perfect time to show you my ace, Shin muttered, slipping past the blasts. Using abduction, he pulled the monster closer. The boss, furious, roared and unleashed another spell. Shin was caught off guard for a second, realizing the creature had been charging it all along. A massive explosion erupted across the battlefield, the shockwave nearly reaching the observer's position. But in the next moment, Shin reappeared right behind the monster. Go ahead, fire at me all you want, he taunted. The undead glanced back, confused, then smirked as it spotted another projectile already flying toward Shin. But Shin just laughed, celebrating a bit too soon. Raising his hand, he activated a defensive barrier, blocking the incoming strike. Then, without wasting a second, he unleashed fire magic straight at the monster. Staring it down, his voice turned cold. Burn. And the flames engulfed the creature completely. Burns and Konghu watched with satisfied expressions, remarking that the fire attribute was proving to be quite useful. From a distance, the observer quietly noted that Shin had managed to defeat Alicia, even with his current level. It was clear this was something the leader needed to hear about. Meanwhile, the system notified Shin that he'd successfully stolen the skill Blood Flower from the monster. Standing before the burning remains, he muttered that his most important goal had finally been achieved. With a grin, he glanced over his shoulder, commenting that even his little spectator had taken off. A new system message appeared, announcing his level had risen to 32. He'd also unlocked Acceleration, a basic assassin class skill. Still chewing on a leaf, Shin kept scrolling through the updates, noting that his levels were climbing steadily. Another notification followed, revealing that the War Demon Constellation was impressed with his combat strategy. In response, it had spent a bit of holy power to grant him a small buff, boosting his experience gain by 1.3%. Shin smirked to himself. That was an unexpected bit of help. He hadn't thought the constellation would actually support him like this. The system suggested he should show some gratitude. With a proud smirk, Shin agreed aloud. Spotting some loot left behind near the monster's remains, he scooped it up, commenting that it might come in handy later. Some time passed, and a car pulled up near a house. Inside, Cha So-hee was on the phone, assuring her master there was no need to worry. She had found Konghu. Standing at the entrance with a small team, she pointed to the door and mentioned that he had locked himself inside. But that wouldn't last long. Smiling, she ignited her hand with flames and said she'd check for evidence once they got inside. Not far away, some agents stood by the door, texting that Eclipse had tracked down the house, and they were already searching for clues. Peeking through the peephole, he spotted CHA, so he's still talking on her phone, confirming that, just as she expected, there wasn't a single trace left behind. Dong, cigarette dangling from his lips, chuckled and admitted he was feeling a bit jealous of Konghu. Surprised, she asked what he meant by that. As people scoured the apartment, Konghu Dong explained that nothing seemed capable of stopping Konghu. He was cautious and relentless, exactly the kind of person who could keep up with them. CHA So-hee teased that, by the sound of it, he must really like him. Konghu Dong shrugged, saying it was just that Konghu had a kind of careful determination that Cha So-hee lacked. And if Konghu ever came under his command, he'd make one hell of a rival for her. Hearing that, CHA So-hee froze, her mind racing. Could he really be planning to replace her? They handed her a stack of papers, and Konghu Dong asked if they'd found anything worthwhile. Glancing through the documents with a grin, she replied that there was definitely something he'd be interested in. From what she could tell, the owner of the house seemed to be a hunter. Meanwhile, Cha So-hee clutched her phone shyly, quietly typing a message. As she and her team left the apartment, she mentioned that she was always ready to take on missions from the master. Judging by what they'd uncovered, it looked like they had found some promising clues. Elsewhere, Kang-hoo stepped out of the dungeon, thinking that defeating Alicia had been a key objective, but stealing blood flow had been his real goal. Still, the loot wasn't bad either. Selling off the green magic stone had made for a nice profit, and the ring that boosted bleeding effects was bound to come in handy. On top of that, even a skill book was a good find. It wasn't exactly a match for his class, but he already had a plan to make use of it later. As he moved farther from the dungeon, his phone finally picked up a better signal. Glancing at the screen, he noticed messages from Soyeon. She mentioned that she'd tried calling him, but hadn't gotten through. Now she was warning him. Eclipse was investigating, and she was pretty sure they were after him. Kang-hoo read the message with a satisfied smirk, glad he'd been tipped off before things escalated. Thinking back on Cha So-hee, he couldn't help but feel impressed by how quickly she'd managed to track him down. That part was still unexpected. Looking over Soyeon's messages, his expression grew serious. She was most likely an informant for the Flower Guild, which operated under the Manhwa Guild. Slipping the phone back into his jacket, he considered the situation. If Eclipse was already tracking him, it wouldn't be long before they found their way to Yeren, too. Yeren, after all, was just getting started in this world. She had no real reason to protect him after he'd refused her help. And with Eclipse and Blue locked in a rivalry, neither side would benefit from sharing any info about him. As he boarded a carriage, Kang-hoo thought about Hyo Young-tae. He still needed to track him down as planned. Looking ahead with a focused gaze, he decided it was time to find the right partner for this mission. Meeting that person was his next priority. Not far away, Dahun held his head in his hands, staring at the house. After a moment, he muttered to himself that this was the only shot they had at catching Hyo Young-tae. The bespectacled man tried to reassure him, saying he understood the concern. It was a comrade from his homeland, after all, but there was no need to worry. Yangpyeong district wasn't even part of their jurisdiction. Checking his watch with a grim look, Dahun muttered that this was the last possible place Hyo Young-tae could be hiding. Without wasting time, he climbed the stairs, knocked on the door, and called out to see if anyone was home. The door creaked open, and a white-haired man appeared, eyeing him cautiously before asking who he was. Dahun asked if someone named Hyo Young-tae happened to live there. The man frowned, questioning who Dahun was and why he was looking for anyone there. He claimed he lived alone, and there was no way Hyo Young-tae could be inside. For a moment, Dahun peered past him, spotting a gun resting on the table inside. Narrowing his eyes, he asked if the man was a professional hunter. The man glanced at the gun, then scoffed, saying that just because he owned a gun didn't mean anything. In a world like this, it was smart to keep one close, just in case. Without another word, he shut the door. Checking his watch again, Dahun sighed, thinking it looked like this wasn't the right place after all. But then the door cracked open just slightly. The man peeked through with a smirk, pulled out a gun, and aimed straight at Dahun. In one swift motion, Dahun drew his swords, slashing across the man's hand and slicing off several fingers along with part of the gun's barrel. The man howled in pain as Dahun pushed his way into the apartment, his expression cold and unflinching. "So I wasn't wrong after all," Dahun said flatly. The man stumbled back, clutching his bleeding hand. Dahun watched him for a moment and added that maybe next time he should remember to take the safety off. A sharp kick to the back sent the man sprawling to the floor. Dahun pressed his katana to the man's head and demanded answers. Trembling, the man admitted he'd only met Hyo Young-tae once. He said the only thing he knew was that Hyo Young-tae warned him to kill anyone who came asking questions. Beyond that, all he knew was that Hyo Young-tae preferred to keep to himself and was good at staying hidden. Grinding his teeth in frustration, Dahun pressed for more. Is anyone helping him? But the man had nothing else to give. Later, stepping out onto the street, Dahun declared the investigation in Yangpyeong was officially over. As he glanced to the side, he noticed a group of police officers approaching. Unsure what they were doing there, he knew one thing. He couldn't afford to be spotted. Sliding behind a nearby wall, he decided it was best to stay out of sight for now. One of the police officers glanced toward the column, noticing something unusual. He asked the others if they saw anything strange over there. Dahun's heart pounded. This felt like an ambush. He froze, unsure of his next move. Just then, Kang-hoo casually approached the officers and asked if they were from the public security agency. They looked at him, confused, and Kang-hoo flashed a friendly smile, saying he had a small favor to ask. Awkwardly, one of the officers explained they were in the middle of a mission and now wasn't really the best time. Pointing off to the side, Kang-hoo told them that a hunter had stolen something from him out on the main road. While the officers were distracted, Dahun quietly slipped away, disappearing down a narrow alley. Leaning against the wall, he let out a relieved breath. "Talk about lucky," he muttered. As he peeked back, Kang-hoo turned his head slightly and looked right at him with a knowing smile. Later, Dahun stood alone, pulling a book from a shelf. Flipping through the old photos, he paused as memories resurfaced, him standing beside his comrade, back in the day. His friend had congratulated him on being accepted into Seoul, saying he'd heard how tough it was to get in, let alone work there. He mentioned that Da-hun was now working with the Manhwa Guild, right? Da-hun had let out a laugh, about to reply, but his friend cut him off. Good. Then I'll leave this place in your hands, he said, pointing to himself. Don't worry. I'll handle things here. You got Seoul. I've got this. We each do our part. Da-hun stared at the photo in silence before turning around to see Kang-hoo approaching. With a serious look, Da-hun asked, That was you back there on the street, wasn't it? How did you know about this place? Kang-hoo stepped closer and said that your name is Yu Da-hun. Level 362. Seoul Metropolitan Police Department. Da-hun raised an eyebrow. So, you've been digging into me? Slowly reaching for his katana, he asked if Kang-hoo was with the police, too. But Kang-hoo casually extended his arm to the side. Not exactly, he replied. But I do know why you're after Hyo Young-tae. Da-hun narrowed his eyes as Kang-hoo offered him a hand. So, Kang-hoo said, how about we work together? Yerin sat in the office with the observer, apologizing with a polite smile, saying it was a shame he wasn't interested in her proposals. Still, she laughed, adding that despite that, he was a good client. Maybe good enough that she'd consider recommending him to Sherwan. Suddenly, a loud voice interrupted them, asking why they couldn't come inside. Both of them turned toward the door, startled. Yerin looked uneasy and asked what that noise was. The door swung open, and a woman entered, spinning a sheet of paper in her hand with a satisfied grin. She announced that she had finally found exactly what they needed. Yerin stood from her chair, her expression turning sharp. Why are you here? She asked coldly. But the woman just smiled, assuring them not to worry. She only came with good intentions. Handing over the document, she asked if they recognized the name on the file. It was none other than Kang-hoo. At the same time, Da-hun stood in silence, then finally asked if Kang-hoo actually had something worth offering him. Kang-hoo extended his hand and questioned if Da-hun really thought this would all end just by finding Hyo Young-tae. Da-hun stared at him, puzzled, and Kang-hoo raised a finger, explaining that things weren't so simple. Even as an officer of the Seoul Metropolitan Police Department, he hadn't been able to dig up proper information about his own friend. Da-hun pictured himself back at his desk, a fellow officer walking up behind him, telling him there was nothing more they could do. Hyo Jung-tae's case was under Yangpyeong District's jurisdiction, and their hands were tied. Kang-hoo recalled the officers he'd encountered, pointing out that Hyo Young-tae was practically within reach now. Da-hun's expression hardened. What are you saying? Kang-hoo explained that Hyo Young-tae wasn't just some random fugitive. He had powerful protectors, high-ranking ones. So high, in fact, that even the public security agency had taken notice. Da-hun thought back to the man's apartment, remembering his gut feeling that something was seriously off. He recalled the man with glasses insisting Yangpyeong District wasn't under their control, and now the pieces were falling into place. Swallowing hard, Da-hun asked, who's backing him? Kang-hoo didn't hesitate. One of the key figures in the Manhwa Guild. The realization hit Da-hun like a punch. He replayed everything in his mind, connecting all the clues. Then he turned away, shaking his head. This is insane. That can't be true. Kang-hoo simply shrugged. Believe what you want. But just know this, we're both after the same target. Kang-hoo said they could meet tomorrow at 6 p.m. in the square. He assured Da-hun that it wasn't some kind of trap and told him if he had any doubts, he was free to investigate on his own. Da-hun stayed quiet for a moment, thinking it over. Kang-hoo added that, in return, he intended to keep his word, and he hoped Da-hun would cooperate. Meanwhile, Cha So-hee stood by the table, holding up a piece of paper. Do you know this guy? She asked. Yerin glanced at the name and frowned. So his real name was Kang-hoo. If Eclipse had sent her here, that meant they were seriously interested in him. Holding the paper tightly, Yerin replied with a straight face that she didn't know anything about him. Cha So-hee gave her a sharp glare and accused her of lying. She pointed at Yerin, saying she'd clearly already done her research. Yerin ran her hand through her hair, then admitted that maybe she did know him, but things hadn't worked out because of certain conditions. Giving Cha So-hee a cold glare, Yerin warned that if that was all she came for, she should leave before starting a fight she couldn't handle. Cha So-hee gritted her teeth. Don't lie to me, she warned, her tone deadly serious. After Cha So-hee left, Yerin turned to the observer and told him to follow her. They needed to see exactly where she was headed. With a smirk, she added that getting information on that lunatic might just help tighten their connection to Kang-hoo. Later, Hyo Jung-tae sat in silence, staring at his phone. A message popped up saying someone was looking for him. He stepped outside, grinning. Idiots! They couldn't even find me hiding in plain sight. Standing in front of the door, he let out a whistle. Kang-hoo noticed him and watched quietly before following, and suddenly said going home at 3 p.m. Hearing his voice, Hyo Jung-tae raised his eyebrows in surprise. Kang-hoo, serious as ever, told him he was late. Right then, The system notified that Hyo Jung-tae possessed a skill granted by a harmful constellation, Dark Priest. This ability allowed him to blend into the shadows, completely hidden from view. The system also noted that hunters serving neutral or good constellations focused on sharpening their combat abilities, giving them an edge in battle. Hyo Jung-tae shot him an irritated glance, muttered his name, then exhaled and smirked, saying it was just a misunderstanding. Without warning, he activated blindness and dashed away from Kang-ho. Glancing back, he thought to himself how smoothly he'd cast the skill without drawing attention. Plus, Kang-ho had pretty high resistance to abilities anyway. With a sharp gaze, Hyo Jung-tae faced him and remarked that it seemed Kang-ho had been looking for him all along. Kang-ho stayed put, silently calculating. If this guy knew about his abilities and his hideout, then leaving him alive wasn't an option. Without hesitation, he launched a barrage of daggers. At the same time, he turned on the man clutching his shoulder, who was trembling and insisted he knew nothing. She stared at him for a moment, then coolly claimed she had no idea who Kang-ho was. With a snap of her fingers, flames engulfed the man. She turned her gaze back, recalling the past, when Kang-ho had once cheerfully said they could reach out to him if something urgent came up. Irritated, she looked ahead, thinking how he told them to contact him. Yet now he was the one who'd vanished. He'd known her identity from the start. That's why he ran. She remembered what the boss once said. If Kang-ho joined his ranks, he'd give her serious competition. She stomped her foot, stood quietly for a bit, then muttered that if the boss's words were true, Kang-ho was definitely her enemy. But then she chuckled, saying mistakes happen, and figured the boss would probably forgive her if she accidentally killed Kang-ho. Just then, a flurry of daggers flew at Kang-ho, but he quickly activated a barrier and stood his ground. Hyo Jung-tae shot him a puzzled look, surprised to see him using shield. After all, Kang-ho was an assassin. Without wasting a second, Hyo Jung-tae darted aside and unleashed another wave of daggers. Kang-ho hadn't expected such a relentless attack and scrambled to dodge. Watching him evade everything, Hyo Jung-tae clicked his tongue, begrudgingly admitting Kang-ho was holding up well, even if the distance helped. Sliding to the side, Hyo Jung-tae drew more daggers, ready to close the gap and fight head-on. But Kang-ho suddenly used abduction, catching Hyo Jung-tae off guard. "What the hell is this?" Hyo Jung-tae blurted out. Kang-ho didn't answer. He drove a dagger into him and activated bleeding, then looked straight at him and said calmly that he'd already marked the perfect spots to avoid any counterattacks. He effortlessly countered every move his opponent made, smirking as he claimed he could read them all like an open book. Hyo Jung-tae winced in pain, clutching his ear as he muttered that things weren't looking good. He'd have to pull back. Kang-ho conjured another blade, hurling it straight at him while scoffing that running was pointless. Jung-tae's face twisted in fear as Kang-ho activated blood flow, sending him crashing to the ground, groaning. As Kang-ho approached, Jung-tae clutched his neck and croaked out, asking if Kang-ho even realized it was backing him. Without hesitation, Kang-ho replied that he knew. It was Guan-hyung from the Manhwa Guild. Jung-tae looked up, stunned, asking how he found that out. But Kang-ho just sent another dagger flying his way, telling him to shut up and sleep. Later, Da-hun emerged from the hangar, lost in thought, wondering why Kang-ho had made him that offer earlier. Nearby, Kang-ho casually waved a hand and mentioned he almost crossed paths with some agents. Da-hun glanced at him, confused, and asked what he meant. Kang-ho explained he'd heard the agents liked solving things through an app, but more often, they relied on those watches. Da-hun glanced down at his own, wondering aloud if his friend's account was still active. He stared quietly at the screen, and Kang-ho pointed out that if security really wanted to wipe out that account, they likely wanted to erase him too. Raising a finger, he added that whoever was covering for Hyo Jung-tae wasn't aiming for that. They probably wanted to sweep everything under the rug. With the public safety department under pressure, keeping things quiet was the easier option. But someone had managed to log into the account, dig up the records, and track down that villa. Da-hun looked over in shock, and Kang-ho reminded him that he'd kept his end of the deal. Now it was Da-hun's turn to help. As Da-hun wandered down the street, his mind raced. If what he suspected was true, and both the Manhwa Guild and security department had messed up, he had no idea how to handle it. Finally reaching Kang-ho, Da-hun apologized for being late. Kang-ho, arms folded, calmly said he'd been waiting, then asked where Hyo Jung-tae was. Da-hun casually gestured behind him, saying there was no need to worry about that. Kang-ho grabbed him by the hair, lifted him up, and said he'd brought him along. Da-hun looked at him, surprised, realizing that Kang-ho had used stealth, which was why he couldn't sense him earlier. Scanning the area, Da-hun noticed the crowd, and Kang-ho explained that he'd picked this busy time on purpose. With so many people around, if they moved now, they might uncover who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. But if Da-hun wanted revenge, Kang-ho wouldn't stand in his way. Looking him straight in the eye, Kang-hoo asked what he planned to do. Before Da-hun could answer, a man in a police uniform shoved through the onlookers and approached them. He asked if Da-hun was the one who reported Hyo Young-tae. Da-hun gave a nod and gestured toward Hyo Young-tae. The officer smiled, thanking him for his help, saying they'd been after Hyo Young-tae for quite some time. Pulling out his phone, the officer told Da-hun to enter his hunter registration number to claim the reward. Da-hun typed it in and handed the phone back. The officer thanked him again, and Da-hun thought to himself that not only did he earn 300 million won, but he also secured the chance to rent a dungeon. Sometime later, Da-hun leaned against a wall when Kang-hoo walked up beside him, saying he was honestly surprised Da-hun hadn't gone after revenge. Da-hun let out a satisfied sigh, saying his friend would have never made that choice if the roles were reversed. Looking up at the sky, Da-hun said they both dreamed of a world where people could actually trust one another. He hoped that someday the Manhwa Guild and the Public Security Agency could become places like that, where justice was real and mistakes were fixed. But his face hardened as he added that if they truly meant what they said, neither the Manhwa Guild nor the Public Security Agency could be let off the hook. Meanwhile, Kang-hoo kept his hands in his pockets, thinking how this was starting to feel just like the story of Da-hun, the one who led a rebellion against the Public Security Agency. In that story, Da-hun was branded as the villain, the enemy of the Manhwa Guild. Kang-hoo thought back to Da-hun attacking Sean, wondering if maybe Da-hun was turning out just like him. Da-hun believed Kang-hoo was on his trail because of the Hyo Young-tae case, but this time, Kang-hoo hadn't left behind a single clue, so things should be fine. He raised his hand and said he was honestly surprised. He never thought Kang-hoo stepped in just for the reward. Kang-hoo shot him a serious look and made it clear he wasn't here to do charity work. Smirking to himself, he thought the real prize was slicing off Gwon-hyung's arms and legs. Holding a piece of paper, Gwon-hyung asked if that meant Hyo Young-tae had been caught. Police officer nodded, confirming it. Hyo Young-tae had been taken to the hospital. His condition was beyond terrible. Gwon-hyung let out a long breath, shut his eyes for a moment, then tossed the papers aside, saying Hyo Young-tae was worthless to them now and should just stay quiet. Looking over seriously, he demanded to know who was really behind all of this. One of the men nervously glanced at his phone and said he'd managed to get the registration number of the hunter involved. But as he stared at the screen, his face paled. "What's wrong?" Gwon-hyung asked, already irritated by the sudden silence. The man stammered that the information was gone, completely wiped from every public security system. The account had triggered an error message, the kind that only shows up when someone's officially dead. Gwon-hyung slammed his hand on the table, glaring at them. "And you expect me to believe that?" They immediately bowed, trying to explain. One of them said he'd even gone to Yangpyeong in person, but didn't find anyone suspicious, and came right back. Gwon-hyung waved his arm in frustration, ready to strike him, but before the slap landed, a voice calmly told him to stop. Everyone froze as a portal opened, and Sherwan stepped out. Smiling, he held out his hand and casually asked what was going on. Back in an earlier moment, Da-hun glanced at Kang-hoo, admitting how shocked he was that Kang-hoo actually helped him out. But Kang-hoo, arms crossed and looking serious, said it was all about the reward. Charity wasn't his style. Though in the back of his mind, Kang-hoo thought it was even better than that. Not only did he cash in on the bounty, but he also managed to snatch a few of Hyo Jung-tae's items, and among them was an ability to restore stamina, a skill far too valuable to pass up. Da-hun nodded and said now it all made sense. Why Kang-hoo helped him get revenge. Kang-hoo, keeping a serious expression, replied that there's no worse enemy than someone who was once a friend. Da-hun gave him a puzzled look, and Kang-hoo explained that to take down the Manhwa Guild, he needed a weapon. And this was his way of gaining a strong ally. Da-hun laughed, saying Kang-hoo sounded like the protagonist of some story, pulling a move like that. But in his mind, he figured the role of the hero belonged to someone else. Kang-hoo? He was more like the villain lurking in the background, growing even darker when the spotlight hit someone else. With that, Da-hun said he'd just head back to Seoul and left. Watching him go, Kang-hoo thought about how much he'd obsessed over the so-called villain role. But was this really the plot of the novel he always wanted to write? Meanwhile, Gwon-hyung wasn't letting it go. He demanded answers, asking again what exactly they were doing in Seoul. Irritated, he wondered who this guy was and how he could pull something like this off. He even shut off the cameras to cover his tracks, yet somehow, things still didn't add up. Just then, Jang Shawan stepped out from the portal and told him to relax. With a smile, he joked that maybe Gwon-hyung was just in a bad mood. The others greeted Jang Shawan cheerfully, but Gwon-hyung turned his gaze away, clearly annoyed. After that, he ordered everyone to clear out. Under hypnosis, they smiled and agreed without question, leaving immediately. Later, Gwon-hyung and Sherwan sat across from each other. Gwon-hyung, looking frustrated, admitted the tool he'd used had been broken, and it felt like someone had done it on purpose. Before he could say more, Sherwan cut him off, reminding him of something he'd always said. Gwon-hyung glanced over, confused. What are you talking about now? With a serious look, Xuan told him he needed to stay calm. Wasn't that always the rule? Guan Hyung tensed, a bit unsettled, but Xuan brushed it off, saying it didn't matter who was responsible. Whoever dared to stand in their way would end up reduced to ashes. Meanwhile, over at Yangsu Station near Baiyang Mountain, Kang Hu stood before a statue, finally understanding where it was. Thinking back, he recalled the story. This was exactly where the main character, Sherwan, had been. Even though this place was supposed to be a hidden dungeon. Kang Hu stared at the entrance, his expression serious, before making his way inside, thinking that, this time, he'd managed to find it first. As he stepped in, a mid-level boss called Shadow appeared before him. Kang Hu immediately realized this one wouldn't go down easy, especially if it attacked from behind. The monster opened all its eyes at once, activated Shadow's step, and lunged forward. Multiple shadows shot toward Kang Hu in an instant. Timing was everything now. He quickly threw a dagger over his shoulder, waiting for the perfect moment. The dagger flew through one shadow, then another, piercing several at once before slamming into the ground. Without missing a beat, Kang Hu summoned his sword, launched himself at the main shadow, and swung. But the monster activated its exchange skill, switching places at the last second. Kang Hu froze for a moment, stunned by the sudden swap, as the real shadow charged toward him, ready to strike. But what the monster hit was only an illusion. Kang Hu seized the moment, lifted his dagger, and without hesitation, unleashed an attack. The shadow glanced around, too late to react, as Kang Hu launched a blade straight at the boss, finishing it off. As the monster crumbled, Kang Hu thought everything had played out perfectly. Thanks to the illusion, the boss hadn't even noticed the attack coming and couldn't predict where Kang Hu would strike next. Most importantly, Kang Hu had attacked at the exact right moment. The system notification appeared, confirming the mid-level boss had been eliminated. Several skills were stolen from the target, including Shadow Step, now mastered at maximum proficiency. His Shadow summons increased to 5, and he gained the ability to instantly teleport to a selected target without casting time. Shadows would vanish if they moved beyond 100 meters or took direct damage. But within that range, they could move freely, making it nearly impossible for enemies to track him. Reading the details, Kang Hu grinned. This was exactly what he needed. Now his story could truly begin. Another notification popped up. His level had jumped significantly. He'd reached level 33. Holding the blade tightly in his hand, Kang Hu said this was only the first step, and it was a success. Elsewhere, Guan Hyung smiled and warned him not to get too comfortable. Nothing's ever perfect, he said. Sherwan raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? Sherwan stepped closer, his face turning serious. You should know by now, he said. The whole world rests on me. Then, with a chilling look, he added, everything, even choice and justice, is mine to control. At that moment, without warning, a projection of the main boss, its level completely unknown, appeared beside Kang Hu. Instantly on guard, Kang Hu recognized him right away, just like in the story. Meanwhile, Guan Hyung stood frozen, silent for a long moment before finally asking if Sherwan truly wanted to play the role of the protagonist. With a chilling look, Sherwan confirmed it. This time, he was the protagonist. Kang Hu braced himself, realizing what was coming. A fight against another version of himself. The projection wasted no time, activating short-distance leap and lunging straight at him. Kang Hu narrowly dodged the attack and countered with a swing of his blade. Their weapons clashed, and Kang Hu thought to himself that this battle was going to stay close quarters. Using illusions here was pointless. The boss could easily track him through mana. They both knew exactly how to counter each other's moves. Their blades collided again, the force sending shockwaves through the space. Kang Hu quickly teleported behind the boss and unleashed a bleeding strike, but the boss threw up a barrier just in time. Kang Hu ignited his blade with flames and smirked, saying things were just getting interesting. Raising his sword, Kang Hu taunted him. Let's see how long you can keep this up. Shadows materialized around them. The boss looked momentarily surprised before launching into an attack with Shadow Step, cutting through one of the shadows. But Kang Hu was already a step ahead. He activated exchange, switching places, leaving the boss frustrated. Kang Hu struck again, landing another bleeding strike. The boss managed to block with his barrier, but cracks started to form under the pressure. Seeing the barrier weaken, the boss went on the offensive, charging at Kang Hu with his own bleeding strike, only to hit another shadow. From above, the real Kang Hu descended, aiming straight for him. The boss barely got his barrier back up to block the blow, but now he was starting to panic. In desperation, he swung wildly, trying to land a hit, but Kang Hu easily dodged and slipped behind him. The boss hurled a dagger back, only to realize too late it was another shadow standing there. He spun around, fear flickering in his eyes, and immediately activated his barrier again. Kang Hu grinned darkly. That's right. Let's see how much longer you can last. Without hesitation, he unleashed another bleeding strike. The shadows closed in from every side, forcing the boss to throw up his barrier yet again. But Kang Hu could tell he was running on fumes. Just as Kang Hu had warned, the boss was nearly at his limit. His mana wouldn't hold out much longer. Kang Hu used exchange one final time, appearing behind him. With one last, powerful swing, Kang Hu whispered that there was no way he'd ever be able to rebuild his mana reserve now. Kang Hu landed a bleeding strike straight into the boss. Beaten and bleeding, the boss glared at Kang Hu with frustration, then clenched his jaw, leaped back, and made a quick hand gesture before launching another bleeding strike. With a grin, he admitted he hadn't felt this alive in ages. As the boss vanished, Kang Hu echoed the same thought, feeling the rush from the fight. He chewed on a leaf while glancing at the system message and muttered that hypersensitivity to mana really paid off. The system notified him that he'd unlocked a one-time skill enhancement. Clicking on the system window, Kang Hu smirked, saying it was worth pushing through the hidden dungeon just for this moment. He pressed the button, watching as his skill rose from maximum level to ultimate. Pleased, he remarked this was his very first ultimate level skill. Looking up, he thought to himself that, in doing this, he had just stolen an opportunity right out of Shawan's hands. Holding both a book and a crystal, Kang Hu commented how lucky he was to trigger this one-time dungeon. Eyeing the items, he admitted the skill book was already a huge win, but finding redstone inside? That was unexpected, rare, and valuable. Redstone was key to upgrading items and skills. He carefully stashed the items away, thinking that if Shawan had gotten his hands on them, it would have been a serious headache. Best to keep them hidden for now. Opening the book in his hands, Kang Hu said he planned to use it. After all, this skill was tailored perfectly for the assassin class. As he flipped through the pages, the system warned him about rear attacks. Striking from behind would now deal 33% more damage than previous hits. The system confirmed the skill had been fully learned. Kang Hu clenched his fist in front of him and declared that, in his next fight, he'd test just how powerful this new skill really was. For now, it was time to move on and track down why. The next day, near Pyeongtaek subway station, Yeren raised her hand and mentioned this was the first time she'd seen him outside the academy. As he sat down at her table, she got straight to the point. Flashing a satisfied smile, she showed him the 100 million won he had sent her and asked why he did it. Kang Hu recalled Cha So-hee's face and explained that she'd been actively searching for him lately, growing more impatient by the day. If anyone dug up information, she would have been sent straight to the Yangpyeong district immediately. But for now, things were still quiet. Yeren, lost in thought, recalled hearing how she'd been burning hunters alive in her search for him. She casually spread her hands and said that, honestly, protecting client information was her top priority. Cha So-hee, there was nothing for him to worry about. Yeren nodded and added that there was something else she should know. He'd caught Hyo Youngtae. She raised an eyebrow and asked what exactly he meant by that. Looking down, he explained that by taking Hyo Youngtae himself, even if the job got completed, Blue Eyes wouldn't see a single coin from it. That was his way of settling the score. She looked at him in surprise, trying to figure out if he was seriously saying he'd managed to catch Hyo Youngtae without leaving any trace behind. Studying him, she felt increasingly impressed, wondering just what else he was capable of. Resting her hand on her face with a playful smile, she asked what she should even call him now. After all, she knew his real name. He glanced away, thinking that with Cha So-hee constantly getting involved, things were only going to get more complicated from here. Turning back to her, he suggested that for safety's sake, they stick to using a pseudonym. She agreed with a grin, then passed him a folder and said they could finally move on to the next assignment. This time, the client wanted to explain the details directly, wanted to see Kang Hu's skills for herself. With a satisfied wave of her hand, she introduced herself as Sangmi, mentioning that she was relying on her brother for this one. Kang Hu smiled back and assured her he wouldn't disappoint. Ahead of them, a secure bus waited, heavily guarded by hunters equipped with magic bullets. The cost of such protection was sky high, but safety was all but guaranteed. Kang Hu leaned back in his seat, thinking he could finally relax until they arrived in Ulsan. But after a while, voices caught his attention. Someone nearby muttered about not knowing what to do next and wanted to end everything quickly. Kang Hu opened his eyes and glanced to the side with a frown, thinking how strange this all felt. If those were really guards, they should have been more alert. Deciding it wasn't his problem for now, he shut his eyes again, figuring he could just keep resting. But as he drifted, he noticed her staring at him, clearly confused. Then, sensing something off, Kang Hu quietly summoned a blade and glanced down, just in time to see one of the guards approaching him. Kang Hu glanced sideways just as the guard raised his gun and fired at his seat. But the shot hit nothing, leaving only a hole where Kang Hu had been. Shocked, the man asked if he'd really just vanished. In an instant, Kang Hu reappeared behind him using teleportation. He struck the guard hard in the back, and the system notified him that attacking from behind now dealt 33% more damage than the previous blow. Pulling his dagger free, Kanghu told him it was pointless to resist and that trying anything else was just a waste of effort. The whole bus went silent for a moment as everyone stared in shock. Then, the others quickly drew their weapons. One of them demanded to know what Kanghu thought he was doing. Kanghu glanced around, sizing them up. There weren't too many. He figured handling them wouldn't be a problem. Across the bus, someone sat calmly, wearing headphones. Above his head burned a red mark, and the system informed Kanghu that this man possessed a neutral constellation called the Father of Music. While listening to classical music, his recovery rate increased by 5 times. Kanghu met his gaze, realizing they weren't just ordinary passengers. Constellations, and none of them were ones he remembered creating. As Sangmi reached for her weapon, Kanghu quietly told her to stay out of it. He'd take care of this himself. She smiled, more than happy to watch him work. Without wasting time, Kanghu cast blindness. The others groaned, struggling to see through the sudden darkness. Kanghu activated Shadow Step and launched his attack. One of the armed men managed to turn toward him, asking if Kanghu thought this was some kind of game. But as the blindness wore off, all he saw was Kanghu closing in, dagger flashing. Before he could even pull the trigger, Kanghu struck him down and immediately used exchange to switch places with another. The man he'd stabbed stumbled, clutching his wound as Kanghu slashed at the next target, cutting deep into his side. The man tried to counter, but Kanghu used exchange again, slipping behind yet another opponent and cutting him as well. The man with the headphones glared at Kanghu, clearly irritated. "You're really not afraid of anything, are you?" he muttered before firing. But Kanghu dodged with another exchange, avoiding the shot and closing the distance in a blink. He slashed across the man's side, then used dash and boost to push forward, placing himself directly in front of the remaining enemies. The guy with the headphones wiped the blood from his face, let out a laugh, and said it was impressive, but not enough. Next time, he promised, he'd get his revenge. Kanghu grinned and asked, "Why wait for next time? Why not settle it now?" Remembering his top-level ability, Bloodburn, Kanghu snapped his fingers. Instantly, blood erupted from every wound his enemies had suffered. The bus kept moving as bodies collapsed around him, leaving only one opponent still breathing, the man with the headphones, now down on one knee. Music still played in his ears as he healed rapidly. Sangmi, watching from the side, stared at him in surprise. Meanwhile, Kanghu smirked and asked if he was seriously listening to music right now. The man aimed his gun at Kanghu, smiled, and declared that Kanghu had to die. Pushing off the leg of one of his fallen allies, he leapt forward, but Kanghu's blade met him midair, piercing his throat. He hit the floor, motionless. The other passengers cowered behind the seats, terrified. Sangmi, smiling, raised a finger and announced that Kanghu had officially passed. A system notification popped up, confirming the target's death and that Kanghu had successfully stolen the contract with the Constellation Father of Music. Now, while listening to classical music, his recovery speed would increase 5-fold. Looking at the system window, Kanghu chuckled. "Guess it's classical music from now on." Nearby, the Dimension Looter grumbled that this was all a waste of time. But Kanghu slipped on a glove and shrugged, saying it wasn't so bad. This item's power scaled with his endurance. He added the new shoes, pleased to find they boosted his agility even higher. Glancing down at the bodies scattered across the bus, he remarked that the rest of the loot should sell nicely. Sangmi stepped closer, asking if he wasn't even going to praise her. With a playful smile, she said she made a pretty good assistant. As the leader of Taewa River, she officially entrusted him with his next task. Kanghu blinked, surprised by her words. Organizations like Taewa River were just small side notes in the novel's background. Barely any details, just names with no real significance. Yet here was one of their leaders standing right in front of him. Sangmi unwrapped a lollipop and casually stated the mission. The payment? 250 million won. The job? Bring her Gong Taisu's left hand. Kanghu looked off to the side, thinking for a moment, before saying he had one more condition. He agreed to handle Sangmi's request, but in return, he wanted a meeting with the leader of the Abyss. Among all the guilds standing against the Manhwa Guild, none were stronger or more united than the Abyss. Even though, according to the story, the Abyss eventually collapsed from internal conflict, Kanghu knew he'd need their strength if he wanted to bring down the Manhwa Guild. He never expected an opportunity like this to come so soon. With Taewa River being one of the Abyss's allied organizations, this was his perfect chance to get closer. Sangmi smiled wide and said it was an interesting condition. They discussed it once she saw the results of his work. Sometime later, they arrived at their destination, walking through the streets. Hunters nearby glanced at them but stayed silent. Sangmi grinned and pointed out the dungeon ahead. This was where Taesu was often spotted. They approached the gate, dark energy swirling around it. Dozens of hunters lingered nearby, watching closely. Kanghu glanced around and commented that, judging by the mood, no one seemed eager to step inside. He asked if they were all really here for Taisu's head. Sangmi smiled again and confirmed that he was exactly right. She asked if he was familiar with fireworks, the method used to take down a single powerful target, no matter the losses. It's a high-risk strategy where sacrifices are expected, but in the end, the last ones standing get the prize. Kanghu thought to himself that he'd rather not be the sole survivor this time like he was in the story. But with his knowledge of all the constellations involved, maybe now he could change how it ends. Sangmi explained that he wasn't the only one aiming for the prize. About 100 people had gathered for the same job, all receiving the request at once. Looking around, Kanghu admitted it was quite the crowd. Sangmi continued, explaining that Taesu, the leader of Red Blood, was the target. In Ulsan, most people refused missions the moment his name came up. Warlords, criminals, business elites, Taesu killed them all without hesitation. That's how he earned the nickname, the Butcher of Ulsan. To him, even level 200 professionals were nothing more than playthings. Just then, a voice called out loudly, drawing everyone's attention. Turning toward the sound, they spotted Taesu himself, standing with a group of armed guards. One of them suddenly shouted that they should all get out of there. Sangmi glanced over and asked if he'd noticed her left hand. She depended on it for nearly all her magic, 99% to be exact. To her, that hand was worth more than her own life. Hunters like them would love to snatch up a reward like that, always waiting for the perfect moment. And once she left the dungeon, that's when the real show would begin. Kanghu didn't say a word. He simply turned around and walked off, his face serious. Sangmi blinked in surprise, calling out that they should stick together. They still needed to regroup near the Taewa River. But Kanghu just waved her off with a grin. Go on ahead, he said. I've got some things to take care of. From there, Kanghu made his way to a shop crowded with people. He spotted a small item displayed inside a box and asked for the price. 500 million, the seller replied. Kanghu opened his system window, pulling up his inventory. He offered up everything he had, asking them to cover the remaining balance with the sale value of his gear. The seller agreed without hesitation. Kanghu picked up the ring, noting its pain relief effect and impressive stamina boost. Finding something like this on the 4th floor was nearly impossible. With the purchase complete, Kanghu stepped back into the street. As he walked, he couldn't help but think that, while the ring was a solid find, it still wasn't exactly what he was after. He hadn't noticed any constellations on Taesu herself, but her subordinates had them. That meant there was definitely more going on behind the scenes, even if she was just putting on an act. Looking around, he wondered where she'd gone. Maybe it was time to make a habit of checking the market thoroughly before making any moves. For all he knew, she was browsing a different stall. Just then, he noticed someone nearby. A system window floated above their head, revealing they carried the Shrine constellation, a neutral type that boosted magic and arrow accuracy by 5 times. Kanghu smirked. Found her. It was a girl with long hair. Taesu. She stepped outside, and Kanghu casually followed. Watching her, he couldn't help but admire her outfit. Without the constellation giving her away, he never would have guessed it was her. Soon after, Taesu boarded public transport, and Kanghu noticed several others with constellations climbing aboard as well. Looked like the whole crew was on the move. Gathering his energy, Kanghu focused it into his hands. A bus ride with them? Sounded like fun. With that, he activated his skill, leaping high into the air and landing smoothly on the roof. Kanghu sprinted across the rooftops, tailing the bus from above. Still, he couldn't shake the thought. If they kept crossing paths like this, someone was bound to get suspicious. He had no choice. It was time to stick to his own 2 feet and figure out exactly where they were headed. Once he knew that, their plan would unfold on its own. Meanwhile, Taesu wore a broad grin as she spoke. She couldn't wait to see the looks on the mercenaries' faces once they were completely surrounded. The man beside her laughed, saying the mercenaries wouldn't even see it coming. Once they hit them from behind, it was game over. But Taesu suddenly slowed, her expression souring. Something fell off. Without warning, she rushed ahead, leaving the others behind in confusion. Drawing her gun, she carefully peeked around the corner. Nothing. No one was there. She scanned the area in silence, then returned to the group. What kind of premonition was that? She muttered to herself. Not far from them, Kanghu hid quietly, watching it all unfold. Cha So-hee, that's how she made it through the fireworks in the original story. It all made sense now. A few others jogged over, asking Taesu if something was wrong. She shook her head, saying she just felt like someone had been following them. From his hiding spot, Kanghu grinned to himself. Now he knew exactly what to do. He'd give them a surprise of his own with an attack from behind. Sometime later, Sangmi waited at the dungeon entrance alongside the other hunters. She glanced around, annoyed. Where is he anyway? She muttered. He was already late. A guy nearby leaned in, telling the captain he was worried about that outsider. Maybe the guy was actually a spy sent by the Manhwa Guild. After all, That's how they took care of the White Rose, quietly, without ever finding the real culprit. Maybe they should bring in the Abyss for backup. Sangmi just smiled and told him not to worry about it. After all, the guy had ties to the Abyss. She figured that Yeren, the leader of Blue Eyes, spent more time trying to play neutral with the big organizations than building real connections. But Sangmi? She knew how to pick talent. If she vouched for someone, they had both the skills and the instincts to back it up. There was no reason to interfere. Not yet. She'd give a little more time. Then, Sangmi's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. What the hell? The hunter beside her noticed. Something wrong? He asked. Sangmi slid her phone back in her pocket and told them all to get ready. With a serious look back at the group, she added, "We're starting soon." Just then, the fake Tae-soo and his guards appeared from the gate. One of the hunters spotted them and quickly called out to the others. He's already left. Right after that, everyone drew their weapons, shouting that it was time to strike. The guards quickly formed a circle around Tae-soo. One of them called out, telling the others to protect the boss at all costs. Hunters charged in from all directions, yelling that they'd take him down. One guard stepped forward, weapon in hand, daring them to try. Suddenly, in the chaos, one hunter grabbed his own teammate by the collar and shoved him forward, catching him completely off guard. That poor hunter barely had time to react before a guard swung a bat covered in nails straight into him. The hunter who betrayed him grinned wickedly and shouted, "Let the fireworks begin." Kicking the body aside, he unsheathed his weapon. One of the guards pointed out that the fool had activated a barrier. The hunter tried to respond, but before he could get a word out, a surge of magical energy slammed into his head. The blast caused a small explosion, forcing one of the guards to shield his face as debris flew past him. When the dust cleared, the hunter was on the ground, and so was the guard, momentarily stunned. From a distance, Tae-soo watched it all unfold, smiling wide. "Now the real fireworks begin," he said. A nearby hunter, eyes wide, asked where that attack had even come from. The guard climbed back to his feet, let out a laugh, and said, "Now it's getting good." The hunter just stared in shock as the guards lunged forward, overwhelming one of the hunters within seconds. Grinning, one of the guards turned to the others. "Hope you're ready to enjoy the show," he said. Realization hit the hunters hard. One of them glared and shouted that this was a setup from the very start. But before he could do anything, his gaze shifted, and that's when it happened. A storm of magical projectiles rained down on them. Explosions ripped through the group, sending hunters flying as screams echoed through the area. The blast was so strong, it left few standing. The survivors coughed and staggered to their feet. What? What was that?" one of them gasped. They looked around in confusion, still dazed, trying to figure out what hit them. From atop a nearby building, Tae-soo smirked and said, "At this range, I could hit you with my eyes closed." Off in the distance, Kang-hoo watched the scene unfold, a faint smile on his face. Exactly what you'd expect from someone with a shrine, he thought. His eyes stayed locked on Tae-soo as she prepared more magic projectiles, the guard stationed firmly at her side. Tae-soo glanced over at the guards with a wicked grin and burst into loud laughter. Without holding back, she unleashed a barrage of magic projectiles straight at the hunters gathered near the dungeon entrance. As explosions erupted, Tae-soo kept laughing. "Isn't it beautiful?" he shouted. From a distance, Kang-hoo watched closely. He knew the moment her cooldown hit, that was his chance. Smirking to himself, he activated one of his skills. A massive hand made of energy shot out and grabbed Tae-soo, catching him completely off guard. In an instant, he vanished from the battlefield. The guards immediately panicked, shouting for their boss. Tae-soo reappeared nearby, confusion all over his face, just in time to see Kang-hoo charging straight at him with a cold, determined gaze. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Kang-hoo didn't answer. Instead, he lunged forward, aiming his dagger right at her. Tae-soo barely managed to dodge the strike, slipping just out of reach. Kang-hoo didn't slow down. He attacked again, but this time Tae-soo triggered a skill at the last second. He paused, realizing what he'd done. A short-distance blink? If he can't go far, then, spinning around, he spotted him reappearing just behind him. Without wasting a second, Kang-hoo dashed toward him, activating his bleeding lunge skill. His dagger sank deep into his shoulder. Tae-soo cried out in pain, glaring at him. "You freak," he shouted. In response, he thrust out his hand, channeling a blast of raw energy. The resulting explosion leveled the nearby building, sending debris everywhere. Tae-soo stood amidst the wreckage, gasping for air, clearly exhausted. From behind cover, Kang-hoo watched carefully. He was even stronger than he expected. He stepped out, and Tae-soo immediately noticed him. "You can at least tell me your name," he scoffed. Kang-hoo just smirked, snapped his fingers, and said, "You'll figure out." The moment he did, his bleeding skill activated. Blood erupted from his wound, catching Tae-soo completely off guard. He screamed, coughing up blood as the pain overwhelmed him. Then, in an instant, his body crumpled to the ground, trembling violently. The magic holding his illusion snapped, fading away. Lying there, he glared upward. "I'm going to kill him," he growled. But as he looked around, his anger turned to confusion. Where was he? He reached down, ready to grab something, but froze. Staring at the ground, his eyes widened. Her hand was lying right there, separated from her body. Just as he was about to grab his hand, Kanghu suddenly activated his abduction skill, snatching it away. Taesu instantly noticed and shouted in shock, demanding to know what he'd just done. Without wasting a second, Kanghu bolted, sprinting off as Taesu chased right after him. But Kanghu didn't even glance back, racing ahead with a sly grin on his face. Taesu, clearly irritated, turned away and called him a brainless freak. Storming out of the building, he barked that everyone needed to get moving immediately. But as he stepped outside, he spotted several hunters approaching. Channeling his magic, he called out loudly, asking if they seriously thought he hadn't noticed them lurking. He ordered them to show themselves without delay. Then his eyes widened. Every single one of his guards had been wiped out. Sangmi stood among the hunters, wearing a wide grin. Her mind drifted back to when she first heard the plan. The Taesu who entered the dungeon was just bait. The real one was waiting at a distance, ready to provide cover fire. They would corner the mercenaries, forcing them to hide, and then head toward the building set to explode. The real Taesu would escape, but minus his left arm. Back in the present, Sangmi dashed forward, gripping her massive sword. She admitted she had no clue how he'd managed any of this, but that didn't matter now. Releasing a devastating burst of energy, she sent a shocked Taesu flying. His scream echoed as the force hurled him into the air. Moments later, his lifeless body hit the ground. Meanwhile, near the dungeon entrance, the hunters launched their attack on the remaining guards, who were struggling without backup. Taesu's double stood frozen, staring in disbelief, unable to make sense of what was happening. Why wasn't anyone helping them? Before he could process it, one of the hunters reached him and drove a massive sword straight through his body. Smiling with satisfaction, the hunter shouted that they'd finally caught Taesu. But his grin quickly faded. The body began to shift and morph. The spell had worn off. Staring at the scene, the stunned hunter blurted out, "Had it all been a trick?" Suddenly, loud noises and the shouts of guards echoed through the air, immediately drawing everyone's attention. Without hesitation, Sangmi charged straight at them, flashing a wide grin as she swung her massive sword. Looking the guards dead in the eyes, she loudly ordered them to surrender. She sprinted forward, not slowing down for a second, while the guards and hunters stared her down. The guards looked tense, clearly rattled by the situation. Moments later, the rest of the hunters rushed in behind her, shouting that they were joining the fight too. Before long, the battle was over. One of the guys sighed and pointed out that they'd nearly gotten into serious trouble, and the damage done was beyond repair. But Sangmi's focus shifted when she received a message. A hunter nearby asked how she'd even known where Taesu would show up. It turned out Kanghu had sent her a message, reminding her not to forget her promise. Sangmi recalled how he'd asked to meet the leader of the Abyss. She quickly replied that, thanks to all the chaos, she'd be tied up for a bit. But as soon as things settled down, she'd get in touch with him. Letting out a frustrated sigh, she mumbled that he'd already taken off. The least he could have done was say goodbye. Meanwhile, Yeren glanced down at the severed hand and remarked that, just as expected, he really pulled it off well. She admitted it was nice seeing him back in Taejon. Kanghu, curious, asked what exactly he'd been up to. Yeren explained that she and Soyeon had fed him fake intel. Then, pulling out her phone, she added, "Oh, by the way, did you see the news?" She showed him a video of Kanghu sprinting away while holding Taesu's hand. His identity hadn't been exposed, but the clip was making the rounds. Kanghu stared at the screen, his expression turning serious. In his mind, he couldn't ignore the fact that the plan was starting to veer off course. It would have been fine if this only affected Taesu, but now Swin was caught up in it too. He needed to tread carefully. Breaking his thoughts, Yeren gave him a gentle smile and asked if he planned to keep working with them. With a sly grin, Kanghu replied that he would, at least until a better deal came along. She laughed, teasing him about his strange sense of humor, before handing over a folder. Inside was information on his next target. The name? Ju Gubin, a killer known for preying on minors. His last known location? Ground Zero. This should help, Yeren said. Kanghu took the folder, his mind already racing. Things were accelerating faster than he expected. He needed to get ready before heading out. At the same time, Sherwan was watching the news on TV. He had no clue who pulled it off, but whoever it was did a solid job. Definitely some entertaining news. He made a call, and the person on the other end confirmed it was the Manhwa Guild strategic squad behind the move. She reminded him they needed to gather every bit of intel on the Taesu incident and track down the hunter who sliced off his arm. Meanwhile, over at the Whole World Guild in Suwon, Kanghu was lounging on a couch in the office when a man across from him spoke up. It was their first time meeting, and he introduced himself as Han Sung-hyuk, the leader of the dungeon management team. With a sour expression, Han said he had no idea where Kang-hoo got his information from, but handing out dungeon licenses to random strangers wasn't how they operated. But Kang-hoo simply smiled and replied that for 100 million, all he wanted was a one-time pass into the Boltman dungeon. Han paused for a few seconds, quietly considering it. Then, without warning, he shot up and rushed to the door, his voice suddenly respectful as he told Kang-hoo he was free to enter. Grinning to himself, Han thought Kang-hoo had to be a fool. That dungeon was worthless with terrible profits, and now he was about to cash in 100 million just from this guy's visit. Before long, Kang-hoo was inside the dungeon. Controlling his dagger with precision, he swiftly cut down ghost after ghost. With a clean catch of his blade, he took out another monster charging at him in a single strike. The system alert flashed. His level had just reached 37. Kang-hoo glanced at the notification, noting that this time, his stats leaned into endurance. Without slowing down, he pushed deeper into the dungeon until he stepped outside, where fires crackled all around. Standing in the middle of it all was the boss, Boltman. The monster spotted him and warned him to stay out of trouble. If he knew what was good for him, he'd leave now. But Kang-hoo wasn't interested in listening. He dashed forward at full speed. Boltman focused his energy into his palm, sneering as he asked if Kang-hoo wasn't scared. Then he hurled molten lava his way, announcing that he'd burn him to ash. Kang-hoo activated dash, narrowly slipping past the waves of lava. In a flash, he used Shadow Step, sending a clone sprinting ahead. Boltman's mouth began to water as the scent of food hit him. Tilting his head back, he took a deep breath, locked eyes on the clone, and unleashed a massive blast of fire energy with his signature move, Burn and Eat. The clone shattered into particles of magic, which Boltman eagerly absorbed. Feeling his mana refill, he let out a satisfied sigh, declaring how delicious it was. Kang-hoo watched with a grin, remarking that, just as he thought, Boltman was really enjoying his meal. Charging forward, Kang-hoo called out that this time he'd serve up something extra special. After all, he'd been saving this moment ever since absorbing the main boss Alicia and holding on to that rare skill book. Now was finally the time to use it. As Boltman unleashed another wave of flame attacks, Kang-hoo swiftly activated acceleration, dodging with ease. Then, with a quick shadow step, he sent two clones racing ahead. Boltman licked his lips, thrilled at the sight of more food. Without hesitation, he fired up his Burn and Eat skill once again. But Kang-hoo was already a step ahead. Grinning, he pulled out the skill book he'd been saving, gave it a quick swing, and thought to himself that everything was unfolding exactly as planned. With all his strength, he tossed the book into the fire, sacrificing one of his clones in the process. Smirking to himself, he figured, why let the boss go hungry? Boltman's attack struck the book dead on, and Kang-hoo chuckled, thinking the taste was about to blow him away. As Boltman devoured the flames, Kang-hoo and his clones split up, dodging from opposite sides while the boss sucked up the surrounding fire and energy particles. Boltman paused, savoring the flavor. Something was definitely different this time. He couldn't quite place it until a glowing skill book suddenly materialized above his head. His eyes shot up in confusion. A system alert flashed, decapitation skill acquired. Boltman froze, stunned, as a surge of magical energy erupted from the book and flooded his body. Then, another system window popped up, warning him that he was now unable to use any skills or weapons. More and more system alerts filled the space around him. Looking completely baffled, Boltman glared at Kang-hoo and demanded to know what he'd just done. Kang-hoo casually drew his dagger, flashing a sly smile. Just my skills, he replied. Boltman snarled, calling him an insignificant pest. Furious, he conjured fire above his head and launched a barrage of blazing magic with his Fire Rain skill. Kang-hoo's clone didn't react, standing perfectly still. The result? A massive magical explosion that tore through the area. Boltman smirked, convinced he'd finally finished him off. But as the flames and smoke cleared, his grin vanished. There was no one left at the center of the blast. Boltman glanced around the area, his expression uneasy as he muttered, wondering where Kang-hoo had disappeared to. Before he could react, Kang-hoo appeared right behind him, having used the exchange skill. Without wasting a moment, Kang-hoo raised his hand and activated the abduction skill, yanking Boltman straight toward him. As Boltman turned with an annoyed glare, Kang-hoo coldly said it was time to wrap this up. Channeling fire energy into his fist, Boltman swung hard, shouting that he'd burn Kang-hoo to ashes and calling him a freak. Kang-hoo stayed calm, blocking the attack with a protective barrier. Just a few more seconds, he murmured. Then, gripping his dagger, he smirked and said that this should be enough. With a swift slash, he activated the bleeding skill, slicing deep before yanking the dagger back. Boltman's roar of pain echoed through the dungeon. The impact shattered Kang-hoo's barrier, forcing him to dodge out of the way. He glanced down, noticing his dagger had snapped, just as he expected. Without hesitation, he turned and dashed away from the dungeon boss, a sly grin on his face. Boltman glared after him, furious. Refusing to let Kong Hu escape, he summoned streams of lava to block off every possible path. But Kong Hu simply snapped his fingers and said coolly that running was never part of the plan. The bleeding effect from his earlier strike took its toll. Boltman's body weakened, and with one final groan, he collapsed to the ground. The system chimed in, announcing the defeat of the main boss, leveling Kong Hu up to 39. Along with the level up came a new skill stolen from his target, Disaster. Kong Hu smirked at the system window. This was exactly what he was after. He recalled that, no matter the monster's class, there was no penalty for learning their skills. In other words, any stolen ability would work at full power. It was best to take these from those with flaws in their training. Still grinning, Kong Hu reached into his pocket, pulling something out. With a satisfied nod, he said this was all he needed. Preparations for Ground Zero were officially complete. Kong Hu pulled out the solatium with a satisfied look and started eating it. A while later, over at Seoul Station, Kong Hu stood among a small crowd, thinking he really had no choice but to keep pushing forward through Seoul. His gaze drifted up to the massive screen mounted on the building, where Shawan's face was on full display. Just the sight of it was enough to ruin his mood. The news was reporting that the master of the Manhwa Guild and the master of the Fortune Guild had officially reached an agreement. People around him were buzzing with excitement, amazed by the announcement. Someone pointed out that even in America, people knew about the Guild of Fortune now. They were about to become globally famous. Kong Hu kept his eyes on the screen, thinking how heartwarming this all would seem if he didn't know the truth about the Chaso called 13 Stars. Sherwan and his crew, 13 hunters hailed as heroes in his own story. But in reality, they were the ones responsible for destroying the world. The worst part? Their influence stretched across the globe. With connections everywhere, they could sway public opinion effortlessly. Even if they operated as a single unit, people would still blindly see them as a heroic army. And now, this was his karma for writing them into existence in the first place. As he stood there, a girl approached and casually asked if Seoul was as boring as it seemed. Kong Hu turned to face her with a sharp, serious look. She went on, complaining about the outrageous prices. Everywhere she went, people seemed ready to devour her wallet. Didn't he agree? But Kong Hu's focus wasn't on her words. He noticed a faint red glow above her head, a sign of a constellation. Strange energy radiated from her, and almost immediately, a spell started to take hold. Suddenly, memories of the two of them sitting together in a cozy cafe flickered through his mind. Except they'd never met before. Recognizing the illusion, Kong Hu shut his eyes briefly and cleared his thoughts. Telepathy. He remembered exactly what was real and shook off the effect easily. The girl blinked, surprised. The skill hadn't worked. If that was the case, he must be a higher level than her. Kong Hu met her gaze calmly and told her it was a pretty weak attempt. Then, his expression darkened. In a cold, serious voice, he warned her that he had no intention of letting anyone poke around inside his head. And now, judging by her constellation, everything made sense. A system message confirmed it. Fox, an ominous constellation. If the target lacks telekinesis resistance and is of lower level. The system window popped up, confirming the information. Kong Hu recognized her immediately. You, one of the infamous 13 Stars. A new system message followed, revealing that the Silent Maiden was a neutral constellation. Its power concealed the presence of other constellations, leaving only the two main ones visible. In the midst of this, the Dimension Looter chimed in, finding it amusing that there existed a world even he couldn't breach. Kong Hu kept a calm expression. There wasn't much he could do against her right now, but there were still ways to guard himself from telepathy. Skills like hers implanted pleasant, fake memories, tricking people into lowering their mental defenses. But in contrast, holding on to memories of pain could temporarily boost those defenses, keeping the mind from breaking. Chunghwa smiled, commenting that she always thought Sherwan was the only interesting one in Korea, but it seemed she was wrong. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a business card, explaining that she only handed these out to people strong enough to block her abilities. If he ever grew bored of staying in his country or needed her help, he was welcome to call. Kong Hu glanced at the card, instantly recognizing the symbol. She was from a Shinta guild, one of China's top 5 most powerful guilds. No doubt about it. She wasn't just anyone. Taking the card, he nodded, saying he'd hold on to it, just in case. As Chunghwa turned to leave, she promised they'd meet again. Kong Hu stayed where he was, thinking quietly to himself. If he ever planned on challenging the 13 Stars, having allies would be essential. Later, he arrived at Ground Zero. Standing at the entrance, he finally breathed out, saying he'd made it. Pulling up his map, He reminded himself that before starting his real objective, he needed to find the treasure first. But as he scanned the area, dark energy began gathering behind him, slowly taking shape into the silhouette of a girl. Kanghu immediately sensed the mana in the air. His innate hypersensitivity allowed him to detect and draw mana, but there was a downside. Using it too much could overload his body. The symptoms were brutal: headaches, weakness, and if it happened during battle, death was almost certain. Managing that overload would be key, and with the brutal fights ahead, there was no room for mistakes. That's why this time, he couldn't pass up the chance to find mad solatium. In the novel, this rare plant was far stronger than regular solatium. Consuming it completely suppressed mana hypersensitivity for 30 minutes. There were side effects, of course, but in combat, it was worth the risk. The only problem? It only grew here in Ground Zero. In guarding, it was always the same crazed farmer. Kanghu studied the map, pointing out that he'd check these 6 zones first. He numbered them the same way he used to pick his lottery numbers. Folding the map, he said this run wasn't just for treasure. He was hoping to pick up some new skills and maybe level up in the process. Not long after, Kanghu came across a plant monster blocking his path. With a single slash of his dagger, he sliced through the stem, sending the creature crashing to the ground. The system confirmed the kill, a standard monster down. Wiping the sticky slime off his face with an annoyed look, he glanced back at the body and muttered that these things just never seemed to end. Ground Zero was crawling with mutant creatures, and every step came with new threats. As he moved forward, he stopped in his tracks. Lying ahead was the body of a fallen hunter. Kanghu eyed it carefully, thinking to himself that in a place like this, even a moment of carelessness could mean death. Approaching the body, something fell off. Decomposition in Ground Zero happened slowly, yet this corpse looked unusually clean. Activating his mana tracking skill, Kanghu spotted a faint concentration of mana within the body. Looking closer, he spotted a small bird nestled inside. Of course, he thought, there shouldn't be mana lingering in a corpse. Glancing down at his dagger, Kanghu realized exactly what this was, a trap set by the Black Guide. They lured unsuspecting hunters with bait like this, and anyone reckless enough to touch the body risked being cursed with ghosts, just like Yaren's fog tracker. Once they latched on, they never stopped haunting. Staring at the dead hunter, Kanghu couldn't help but drift back to old memories from his past life. He remembered 2 men walking down the street, whispering about their next target. They were making sure no one stepped in to save Park Minsung. Shaking off the thought, Kanghu turned away and quietly left the body behind, his expression slightly somber. But as he looked up, his attention locked on a wild solatium growing straight out of the wall. This was exactly what he'd been searching for. Standing beneath it, he admitted this task had been trouble from the very start. There was no room for mistakes. Speed and precision were everything. Activating his jump skill, Kanghu launched himself into the air toward the plant. But just as he neared it, the tree above him started to pulse with energy, and glowing eyes opened across its bark. Without hesitation, Kanghu shot his hand out and plucked the wild solatium in one clean motion. At that moment, the tree's roots burst from the ground, striking out toward Kanghu. He quickly dodged to the side and grabbed onto a nearby ledge. Lifting his head, he spotted the crazy farmer standing above, watching him closely. Without wasting time, the monster commanded its roots to attack. Kanghu leaped off one of the roots jutting from the wall, using his skill to propel himself high into the air as he greeted the monster mid-flight. The crazy farmer swung his clawed hand, aiming a powerful strike, but just before impact, Kanghu vanished. Using his teleportation skill, he reappeared behind the monster, channeling fire energy into his dagger before driving it deep into its back. Flames erupted from the wound, and the monster let out a piercing scream. The system chimed in, confirming the rear attack skill had activated, boosting his damage by 33%. Still, Kanghu was caught off guard. Even after a direct hit like that, the monster somehow survived. Grabbing the cliff's edge, the crazy farmer tried to recover, but as it leaped from the ledge, Kanghu watched calmly, storing his dagger away. The monster hit the ground hard, and the system notified him of its defeat. His level jumped to 40, unlocking a new assassin class skill, Quick Dodge. A second notification appeared, mentioning that Quick Dodge's effectiveness would scale depending on the power of his constellation. Kanghu glanced over the update with a small smile. Every new skill still managed to surprise him. Turning around, he nodded to himself. This meant one more weapon in his arsenal. But his attention shifted as he noticed a lingering dark energy near the tree. Drawing his dagger again, Kanghu prepared to face whoever was hiding. Activating his skill, he swiftly climbed up the tree, scanning ahead with a sharp gaze. "Why are you following me?" he asked, his tone serious. The dark energy faded, and a girl stepped into view, surprised he'd noticed her. Kanghu felt a jolt of recognition. He knew exactly who she was, young Yuri. Memories of his past life surfaced. She'd been a perfect student, daughter of a wealthy businessman, and close with Guan Hyung, the school president. But after her father's company collapsed, people's attitudes toward her, including Guan Hyung's, changed overnight. In his story, she ended up playing the role of an antagonist, though he realized now he hadn't really thought through the details of her character. Back in the present, Yuri gave him an apologetic look and said she hoped she hadn't ruined his mood by tailing him. With a slight smile, she added that she was honestly impressed. He had just arrived in Ground Zero, and yet he was already dodging the black conductors with ease, and even managed to take down a crazy farmer. Yuri froze in shock when she saw Kong-Hu suddenly grip his dagger and swing it in her direction. Instinctively, she covered her head with her hands, closing her eyes in fear. But instead of feeling pain, she heard a monstrous scream echo behind her. Slowly opening her eyes, she looked up in confusion. Kong-Hu had already driven his dagger into the monster that had crept up behind her. With one smooth motion, he pulled the blade free, glancing down at the fallen creature. "Annoying insect," he muttered, brushing it off like it was nothing. Yuri, still blushing from the close call, quietly thanked him. Kong-Hu stood tall and, without looking back, warned her not to follow him anymore. Then, without another word, he leapt from the branch and disappeared into the distance, leaving Yuri sitting alone, watching him go. With a soft smile, she looked away and whispered that she had just wanted to talk to him a little longer. Later, Kong-Hu took down another crazy farmer, and, as the monster's body vanished, he casually pulled out his knife, chewing on a piece of solatium. "Amazing," he said as he glanced at the system window. It showed he'd collected 6 mad solatium, enough to cover all 6 zones. Now, he could finally move forward with the real task. But his attention shifted when he spotted 2 creatures nearby. Taking a moment to observe them, he realized they were angel-type monsters. Staying calm, he passed by without engaging, wondering if these monsters were native to this part of Ground Zero. Before long, he arrived back at the same corpse he'd found earlier. But this time, his focus wasn't on the body itself. It was on the hidden threat nearby. Looking carefully into the darkness, Kong-Hu thought to himself that the killer who left this corpse behind wasn't the real danger. The true threat was the one controlling the bird. The black conductor, a mass of wandering spirits fused into one. Impossible to spot in the night, it moved silently, blending perfectly into the shadows. By the time a hunter noticed its presence, it was already too late. If it couldn't kill its target directly, it would attack the mind, stealing sight, crushing sanity, until the victim eventually took their own life under its control. But Kong-Hu wasn't planning on falling into that trap. With a sharp gaze, he activated Shadow Step, leaving his clone standing motionless in place while he crept toward the corpse. The small bird, sensing his movement, spotted him reaching for the dagger clutched in the dead hunter's hand. In an instant, the bird lunged to attack. But Kong-Hu was ready. Right as it struck, he switched places with his clone, dodging the ambush exactly as planned. Kong-Hu gripped his new dagger with a sly smile. "Perfect. I was just in need of a fresh weapon," he said to himself. The bird lifted its head, releasing a surge of energy with a piercing scream. Without hesitation, Kong-Hu turned and sprinted away from the monster. While running, he took another bite of solatium, glanced back, and muttered, "Looks like it's starting." Behind him, a dark, spirit-like figure emerged, chasing after him. Kong-Hu smirked. "Closer than I expected. Didn't think you'd show up this fast." He launched himself over a wide abyss using his jump skill, but the black conductor quickly caught up. The monster swung its arm to strike, but Kong-Hu activated his speed skill, easily dodging the blow. For several minutes, Kong-Hu kept running, the relentless creature right behind him. His breath grew heavy from the constant sprint, his body starting to feel the strain. Just as the black conductor reached out to grab him, Kong-Hu swapped places with his clone, descending from above. Looking back, he called out, "Hey, idiot, I'm already here." The shout caught the monster's attention. As it turned, a loud scream echoed from the black conductor. What it didn't notice were the 2 angel monsters standing nearby. Hearing the noise, they reacted instantly, making loud cries of their own. The disturbance quickly drew the full attention of the black conductor. Watching from above with a calm expression, Kong-Hu observed the scene unfold. In his mind, there were only 2 ways to take down the black conductor. One was to fight it with a powerful dark force equal to its own. The other was to overwhelm it with light or divine energy. But neither of those options were his problem anymore. With its territory invaded and rival powers closing in, the black conductor would be under attack until the very end. Kong-Hu glanced down at the dagger he'd taken from the dead hunter and smiled. Might as well hold on to this one. Returning to the corpse, he checked the hunter's ID card. It was the first time he'd seen a name. Even though the man was gone, Kong-Hu figured the least he could do was make sure his body made it back to his family. Resting his hand on his forehead, Kong-Hu paused for a moment. "I'll wait a bit longer," he thought. Then, turning to leave, he muttered, Now all that's left is figuring out the next part of the mission. With an empty gaze, he walked forward into the distance, unaware that Yuri was quietly peeking out from behind a rock, silently watching him go. Kang-hoo gripped his phone, recalling Yaren's words about the mission's purpose. Without hesitation, he slipped the device into his inner pocket, his gaze sharpening as he activated his mana tracking skill. Kang-hoo's eyes narrowed as an orange glow flickered from behind the mountain. Drawing his sword, he muttered, "Looks like I found the target." Nearby, Gubin stood beside a blood-soaked corpse, slipping on a manic glove while grinning. "This is exactly what we need," he shouted. "Ground Zero, the land of opportunity." A system window popped up, identifying Gubin as a deranged killer tied to a sinister constellation. Even his kills earned him points. Stroking his chin with a sly grin, Gubin mused, "Maybe one more kill, and I'll level up." But his smug thoughts shattered when he spotted a sword flying straight at him. Panic flashing across his face, he quickly activated ice armor to deflect the attack. Looking ahead, he spotted Kang-hoo, who coolly retrieved his sword using mana. "And you are?" Gubin demanded. Kang-hoo stood firm, sword in hand, eyes locked on his enemy. "Don't think I owe you an answer." Gubin scowled, blue mana crackling around him. "Idiot," he snarled. Ice armor encased his body, and another system window revealed his neutral constellation. I switch, granting him the freeze skill and amplifying his ice abilities. With a sneer, Gubin hurled an ice projectile straight at Kang-hoo. "If you won't talk," he bellowed, "I'll make you." He unleashed a relentless barrage, laughing wildly. "Let's see how long you can keep running." Kang-hoo's expression remained focused as he dodged each strike, using his acceleration skill. Observing Gubin, he quickly realized this opponent wasn't just any mage. Thanks to his constellation, his magic was on a whole other level, far beyond Hyo Jungti's abilities. Even the blindness skill wouldn't help here. First priority, break that armor. Without delay, Kang-hoo activated acceleration again, sprinting straight at Gubin. Sweat beaded on Gubin's forehead. "Is this guy serious? Charging me head-on." He raised his hand, and with a burst of power, sharp blood blades shot from a nearby corpse, slicing toward Kang-hoo. Seeing the attack, Kang-hoo's eyes widened. He can weaponize blood? There was no avoiding it completely. "Guess I'm taking a few hits." The blood blades tore into him. Activating his resistance skill, Kang-hoo was sent flying, wincing as he realized that even with defenses up, the damage was unavoidable. A system window appeared, explaining that with the quick dodge skill, Kang-hoo could evade any attack launched within 5 meters. At its highest level, the skill activated instantly, and during each dodge, a resistance barrier kicked in, further boosting his evasion power. Kang-hoo had originally picked up the basic dodge skill from the assassin class, but thanks to his constellation, it had evolved into quick dodge. Testing it out for the first time now, he realized just how valuable the upgrade really was. Meanwhile, Gubin clenched his teeth, shooting a dark glare as he shifted his hand to the side. "What a shame," he sneered. "Could have taken you out in one shot." With a scoff, he added, "Guys like you aren't even worth my time. I'll just finish you off and take whatever you're carrying." Kang-hoo, eyes fixed ahead, calmly asked, "Why are you killing children?" At that, Gubin raised a hand over his face, his expression turning restless. "Oh, who are you?" he muttered. It felt like there was a hit out on him, but from who? Without moving an inch, Kang-hoo repeated coldly, "Answer the question." Suddenly, Gubin's anxious look twisted into a crazed grin, his eyes welling with tears. He shouted, "You mean those kids? Fresh, delicious, and completely clueless about this world." He laughed loudly. "But you know what the best part is? Why get close, act all friendly, and then crush their hopes right before I kill them. If only you could see their faces, absolute perfection." He licked his lips. "They were nothing but toys to me." Without wasting another second, Gubin swung his arm, unleashing the ice fence skill. Instantly, towering blocks of ice shot up, covering the entire battlefield. Kang-hoo tightened his grip on his sword, shifting into a fighting stance. "I've heard enough," he said flatly. "Now it's your turn to be the toy." With that, he summoned his clones, sending them charging straight at Gubin. Watching the clones close in, sweat trickled down Gubin's face. "What is this for real? Is he actually trying to corner me?" Kang-hoo kept pushing forward at incredible speed, his clones closing in from every angle. Gubin frantically drew his ice swords, his nerves starting to spike as he glanced around, trying to figure out what was happening. Kang-hoo and his clones sprinted straight toward Gubin, forcing him to throw his palm to the side and summon a wall of ice blocks. "You've left me no choice," he shouted. "I'll grind you into dust." Activating his ice rampage skill, the blocks shot forward, shattering the clones into nothing as they dissolved on impact. Gubin wiped the sweat from his brow, planting his feet in a defensive stance. "Got them," he yelled, thinking the fight was turning in his favor. But Kang-hoo didn't slow down. Charging straight ahead, his focus razor-sharp, He closed the distance in a flash. Gubin snarled, summoning fresh ice blocks in his palm. Fine. My skill recharges faster than yours, he roared. But Kanghu was faster. With a single dash forward, his blade ignited in flames as he activated Flame Stream. Not quite. Mine's faster, he replied calmly, driving the burning sword straight into Gubin's side. Blood sprayed from the wound as Kanghu pulled back. Been keeping an eye on you. Looks like you fell for it. Gubin's face twisted in shock and rage. Gritting his teeth through the pain, he reached out, grabbing for the blade. His thoughts scrambled. He couldn't focus. Desperate, he tried to swing his sword back at Kanghu, but before the attack could land, Kanghu vanished. In the blink of an eye, Kanghu reappeared behind him using the teleportation skill. Gubin whipped his head around, sweat dripping down his face. What? How did you? Kanghu said nothing, holding his blade steady as a system window flashed, warning him that using skills would drain 25% of both his physical strength and mana. Without hesitation, he leapt forward. The blade, now glowing with a fierce red aura, slashed through the air. Time to finish this. As he struck from behind, the system window confirmed a 33% boost in damage for back attacks. Kanghu unleashed the decapitation skill, slicing deep into Gubin's back. Blood poured from a wound as Gubin's body crumbled under the force. Kanghu took out his phone, glancing at the screen. The system reported that using decapitation drained a quarter of his strength and mana. But if the enemy's health dropped below 33%, the skill guaranteed an instant kill. Looking over at Gubin's blood-soaked body, Kanghu watched as glowing microparticles formed into a small tripod in his hand. Gubin, barely clinging to consciousness, blinked in confusion from the ground. What's happening? He muttered, his voice trailing off. Kanghu raised the phone to his ear, his expression serious. I'm listening, he said. You've kept me waiting long enough. After the call connected, he carefully placed the phone on the tripod. I'll make sure your daughter is avenged, he added firmly. At the same time, on a nearby monitor, CCTV footage from the Seoul station played. Watching the train patterns, it became clear Kanghu was heading north. Elsewhere, a woman held her phone to her ear, her face just as focused. Looks like he's definitely on his way to ground zero, she thought to herself. Closing her eyes briefly, she placed her hand on the table and spoke into the phone. Once he's done, there's a good chance he'll come back to Seoul the same way. Keep tracking him. Understood. The man on the other end replied before ending the call. Her calm facade broke. Veins bulged in her forehead as she shouted out insults aimed at Kanghu. With a wicked grin, she added, he's not getting away with this. I'll make sure of it. Back on the battlefield, Gubin sat slumped on the ground, blood streaming from his mouth. He looked up at the camera nearby, apologizing over and over again. Shaking, he forced himself to stand, turning to the camera one last time. I'm sorry, he muttered weakly. Watching the feed, the man behind the camera lowered his head, his voice filled with sadness. That's enough. I hope my daughter saw this. Covering his face with his hands, he trembled. Thank you. Public security couldn't do it, but Kanghu, you did. Kanghu glanced at the screen, his expression unchanging. I was just doing my job, he said quietly. I hope she can rest easy now. Gubin turned toward Kanghu, blood spilling from his lips. That's enough. You've finished your mission, he coughed out. Kanghu didn't hesitate. Activating the bleeding skill, he sent another brutal wave of blood bursting from Gubin's wounds. Extending his blood-soaked hand, he gave a cold nod. You're right. It's over. A system window popped up, confirming Kanghu had stolen the Ice Switch constellation. From somewhere, the Dimension Looter's voice echoed, commenting, what a useless constellation. He never even developed it. Kanghu raised his bloodied hand, his weapon fading as he looked down at Gubin's body. I'll handle it, he said plainly. Sitting beside the corpse, he gripped the item Gubin had dropped. Selling this could net me 1,000,000,000, he muttered, a faint glint of satisfaction flashing in his eyes. Kanghu turned toward the phone, his expression firm. With a quick tap of his finger on the screen, Yerin appeared on the call. Looking directly into the camera, she said, you did well. Smiling, she added, the client paid way over the agreed amount. I've just transferred 2.5 billion to your account. Kanghu glanced at the screen. I have another job for you. Surprised, Yerin asked. Oh, what kind of job? I need you to recover the body and confirm the identity, he said plainly. Yerin grinned. Consider it done. That won't be a problem. Sliding his hand into his pocket, Kanghu turned away. Without looking back, he asked, Yuri, are you finally going to tell me why you're still following me? From behind a nearby rock, Yuri stepped out quietly. Her face was downcast, fists clenched, beads of sweat trailing down her skin. There's a dungeon, mid-tier boss inside, she murmured. Then, rubbing her head with an awkward smile, she asked, want to check it out with me? Before long, they stood before the remains of a towering, crumbling building. Kanghu eyed a support column, noting how unstable the entire place felt. Looks like this whole thing could fall apart any second, but I guess that's just part of the charm, he thought. Ground Zero was littered with hidden dungeons, and there were still plenty of valuable things waiting to be found. I didn't think you'd actually come, Yuri admitted, glancing over with a smile. Thanks for that. Kang-Hu shrugged. Any dungeon is worth my time, so this works out for me. As they climbed the stairs, Kang-Hu watched her closely. This'll be a good chance to see what she can do. If she's decent, she might just come in handy against the Yunhua Guild, he thought. Looks like I finally found a partner. Later, Yuri pointed ahead, calling out, "Look at that." They stopped in front of an old, massive tombstone, a deep crack splitting through its surface. Yuri turned back to him, surprised. Can you read it? Most of the writing's destroyed. Kang-Hu stared at the broken inscription, his gaze serious. It's Latin, he said. It says anyone tainted by blood will be trapped here forever. Kang-Hu glanced down with interest. Let's give it a shot, he said. Might as well see what makes this place so special. They made their way down the stairs into the dark depths of the building. With his hands tucked in his pockets, Kang-Hu turned to Yuri. So, what kind of boss are we dealing with? Yuri tapped her cheek, thinking for a moment. It's a monster that specializes in long-range attacks. I barely managed to get close last time. She sighed. Even when I did, my first strike got blocked by its self-defense skill. Kang-Hu continued down, nodding. Doesn't sound like this is going to be easy. Reaching the lower floor, Kang-Hu's eyes widened slightly at the sight of two monsters waiting below. One of them gripped a weapon in trembling hands, growling low before the pair charged forward. Kang-Hu's expression stayed calm as he raised his hand. A dagger materialized in his grip. I'll take the lead, he said. Yuri nodded sharply. Got it. The first monster lunged, raising its weapon high and slamming it down with full force. But Kang-Hu activated his skill, slipping away untouched. In a flash, he teleported behind the creature, his dagger glowing with fiery mana. A system notification appeared, confirming the bonus for striking from behind. 33% more damage. Kang-Hu drove the blade into the monster's back, igniting its body with burning energy. The creature howled in agony. The second monster wasted no time, lifting an arrow and launching it straight at Yuri. Without flinching, Yuri raised her hand, forming a sphere of mana in her palm. A blue portal opened within it, swallowing the arrow in an instant. A moment later, the arrow reappeared from a second portal, this time right in front of the other monster. It pierced through its chest, sending the beast flying backward. Kang-Hu watched the creature fade away, then turned to Yuri with a grin. Not bad. Her skill and reaction time are impressive. Level 200, maybe? Just then, the gate ahead opened, releasing a wave of bright purple light. Yuri stepped up beside it. We're almost there, she said. As they crossed through the gate, a faint stream of mana brushed against Kang-Hu's clothes. It carried a clear message. An intruder had been detected. Yuri glanced over at Kang-Hu with a grin. This is the first time I've seen skills like that. A capture skill? Only monsters are supposed to use those. She clenched her fists, her excitement growing. And even those mage-type skills, none of this belongs to the assassin class. Closing her eyes for a moment, she raised her voice. At this pace, we'll clear the dungeon in no time. Kang-Hu watched her calmly, tapping through the system window. Good thing she's not questioning any of this, he thought. Thanks to her help, his level had climbed even higher. Reaching level 50 was within sight, but from here on out, he wouldn't be able to unlock any new class skills until level 100. Suddenly, a mana beam shot toward them. Kang-Hu spun sharply, and they both leaped to the side, dodging just in time as smoke trailed through the air from the blast. Looking at the lingering smoke, Kang-Hu tightened his fists. Looks like we found our boss. Yuri nodded, her expression focused. Yeah, it's him. Ahead of them, the mid-boss Sportula glared with glowing green eyes. He dragged his sword through the air, leaving a thick line of smoke in its path. Raising his blade high, he sneered. I need to finish what I started. Kang-Hu observed him carefully. Long-range attacks, strong defense, typical for this one. Turning to Yuri, he asked, think you can drop one right on his head? She blinked, surprised. You sure about that? Just focus, Kang-Hu replied firmly, clenching his fist. With a nod, Yuri raised her hands, forming a ball of mana in her palm. Got it. I'm on it. She smirked to herself. Guess I can trust him with this. Without hesitation, Kang-Hu activated his short-distance jump skill, launching himself towards Sportula. The boss swung his sword with brutal force, but Yuri reacted instantly, opening a portal in front of Kang-Hu. In a flash, Kang-Hu shot into the portal, disappearing from sight. Sportula slashed the air where the portal had been, only to freeze when Kang-Hu suddenly emerged from the other side. Right behind him, Kang-Hu dashed past, and without slowing down, dove into another portal Yuri opened in sync. Sportula lashed out again, sending dust flying as his blade sliced through the air, but it was no use. Yuri kept the portals flowing smoothly, thinking these sudden close-range attacks are throwing him off completely. Sportula's eyes widened in shock as Kong-Hu shot out of a portal directly above him. The boss swung his sword upward with force, but Kong-Hu slipped into another portal just in time, avoiding the attack completely. Frustrated, Sportula slammed his sword into the ground, sending up a massive cloud of smoke. Turning with a fierce green glow in his eyes, he let out a deafening roar. Yuri narrowed her eyes. This is it. Now's the moment, she thought. From above, Kong-Hu's dagger dropped down, spinning through the air. Right after, Kong-Hu himself launched out of a portal high above Sportula's head. The boss noticed just in time to twist aside, but Kong-Hu calmly raised his hand, calling the dagger back to him. First, let's deal with that self-defense skill, he muttered. Sportula responded immediately, slamming his sword down with immense power, causing a bright explosion to erupt where Kong-Hu had been standing. Seizing the opening, Yuri thrust her hand forward and summoned a massive portal. Perfect timing, she thought. Kong-Hu shot through the portal, appearing right in front of the sprinting Sportula. Raising his dagger high, he drove it down with full force into the boss's neck, activating the decapitation skill. As Sportula stumbled and his body began to fall, Kong-Hu quickly leapt away, landing safely. With a grin, Yuri clenched her fist, lifting her gaze. Now's the perfect time, she shouted. But Sportula wasn't finished. He turned sharply, roaring again, blood pouring from his shoulder. Gripping his sword tightly, he unleashed another blinding explosion. Kong-Hu dropped from a portal behind Yuri, landing beside her. Surprised, he glanced ahead. Yuri, her palm glowing with radiant mana, focused. Did he just tell me to aim behind him? Sportula spun toward her, standing in front of flickering bursts of lightning. With a confident smile, Yuri stretched out both hands. I'm not sitting this one out, she yelled as powerful lightning surged forward, crashing straight into the boss. Sportula, his green aura fading, let out one final roar before collapsing to the ground in a cloud of smoke. Kong-Hu's attention shifted to the system window, flashing before him. A message confirmed he'd stolen skills from the defeated boss. What should I do with him? Leaving him here isn't an option, Kong-Hu thought, then smiled faintly, tapping his finger on the system window. Looking over at Yuri, who was still beaming, Kong-Hu glanced ahead. Before long, the two of them made their way deeper into the building, the center glowing softly with light. As Kong-Hu walked ahead, he couldn't help but think how much faster they'd handled that boss than expected. With her strength, he thought, we might just have a shot against the Manhwa Guild too. He glanced at Yuri and smiled, but before he could say anything, she pointed forward, her expression filled with surprise. Look over there, she said. Kong-Hu summoned a dagger into his hand as his eyes locked onto a man sitting beneath a beam of light. Arms crossed, the man stared at the ground. As Kong-Hu approached, he narrowed his eyes. Is this really the boss? He just looks like a man. Suddenly, the man shut his eyes, and blood poured from them. Both of them froze, staring at the unsettling sight. Without warning, a massive red beam burst from the man, shaking the entire ground. Yuri raised her hands defensively, fear in her voice. What is happening? Kong-Hu stayed calm, aiming his dagger. With a swift throw, the blade shot forward and tore straight through the man's body. A system window flashed, confirmation that the main boss had been eliminated. No skills were available to steal. Kong-Hu blinked in surprise, gripping his dagger. Then, without pause, stones began crashing down from the ceiling. Kong-Hu grit his teeth, glancing up. The dungeon's restarting. He spun toward Yuri. Get us out of here. Now. She didn't hesitate. Lifting her hands, she unleashed her power, and a dark wave of smoke shot off to the side. On it, Kong-Hu clenched his fist. Time to move. Activating his skill, he dashed forward, narrowly avoiding a massive stone crashing down behind him. Boosting his speed with acceleration, he sprinted through the crumbling corridor. As he ran, a thought hit him. Could that boss have taken over Hunter? With no time to dwell on it, Kong-Hu formed a rose in his hand. This thing's valuable, he thought. But if I don't use it now, I'm dead. Without hesitation, he bit into the rosebud, gripping the stem tightly. Almost immediately, green mana wrapped around him as he surged forward. Kong-Hu grinned, a rose petal clenched between his teeth. I had a feeling this thing would be strong. But the effects were beyond anything he'd imagined. Every ache vanished, and his senses sharpened like never before. Kong-Hu dashed forward at incredible speed, his body surrounded by a powerful aura. With an ominous grin, he shouted that it was time to get out of this tomb. Meanwhile, dark smoke whipped through the crumbling structure. From within it, Yuri emerged, gasping for air. Panic filled her as she hurried ahead, unsure of what to do next. It felt like she drained too much mana. Teeth clenched, Yuri stumbled and collapsed to the ground, catching herself with her hands. As she looked up, she spotted Kong-Hu racing further ahead. Reaching out desperately, she called for him to wait. With her hand trembling and her gaze downcast, she tried to speak, but the words faltered, and she fell silent, lowering her head and closing her eyes. Kanghu glanced back and asked what she was doing. Still radiating mana, he extended his hand toward her and asked if she was injured. Startled, Yuri slowly raised her head, only for her eyes to widen in shock. A massive stone was crashing down from above, aimed right where Kanghu stood. Yuri cried out, warning him to look up. Without hesitation, Kanghu turned his head just as the stone smashed down, only to ricochet harmlessly off him. Yuri stared in disbelief, questioning what had just happened. Unfazed, Kanghu knelt and placed his hand on her shoulder, steady and focused. Rising to his feet, with Yuri now on his back, Kanghu said they just had one more push to make. He urged her to hold on tight, and without wasting a second, he shot forward, weaving through the cascade of falling debris. They burst out of the collapsing tomb, narrowly avoiding the deadly rockfall. Landing on one knee, Kanghu let out a heavy breath, his exhaustion clear. Yuri dropped onto the sand, relieved, remarking how close it had been. Kanghu silently agreed. It had been just in time. Checking his system window, Kanghu noticed that the skill he'd taken from the mid-boss had leveled up. With the increased mastery, the skill's cooldown had shortened. This would definitely come in handy down the line. Standing before the ruins of the tomb, Kanghu glanced toward the system notification confirming his skill's upgrade. Satisfied, he turned his attention back to the path ahead. With a faint smile, Kanghu rested his hand on the sand, wondering aloud if all this was really worth the danger they just faced. Yuri thanked him. Wrapping her arms around her knees, she smiled softly and admitted that if she'd been alone, there's no way she would have made it out alive. Lowering her gaze, she confessed that back there, fear had frozen her in place. Those exact thoughts had been weighing on her mind. Kanghu looked at her curiously and asked what she meant. Lifting her head calmly, Yuri explained that she once held a leadership role in the Manhwa Guild. Reflecting on the past, she said that, at first, she was nothing more than a guide, helping direct other hunters. Then, one day, Guanhyung approached her. He'd held out his hand with a cheerful smile, telling her the Manhwa Guild always gave their all to protect their team. He claimed they were the best guild in Korea. Trusting his words, she joined them. But it wasn't long before everything fell apart. During one raid, Yuri suffered a serious injury that left her unable to continue. When Guanhyung realized she wouldn't be of any use clearing the dungeon, he shot her a cold, dismissive glance. Turning away without hesitation, he told the others they were moving on. Yuri had stared after him in shock, propping herself up on one hand. Guanhyung glanced back, brushing her off and saying there was no point wasting time. She'd shouted at him, furious, accusing him of lying about protecting the team. But with a twisted grin, Guanhyung told her those rules only mattered if someone's life was actually worth something. And really, wasn't it the fool's fault for being deceived? Frozen in disbelief, Yuri could only watch as he walked away, his smirk lingering as he called her nothing more than a disposable toy. Snapping back to the present, Kanghu spoke seriously, saying abandoning an injured teammate like that was no different from murder. Yuri smiled faintly as she looked down, agreeing with him. Surviving that day had been nothing short of a miracle. If not for the contract she'd made with the constellation of space, she doubted she'd even be alive now. Still holding her knees, she turned toward Kanghu and said quietly that, in the end, she was just lucky. Kanghu glanced over with a serious look, telling her he didn't believe it was just luck. He said that constellations don't form contracts with hunters for no reason. There had to be something special about her they recognized. Yuri blinked, staring ahead in surprise. Turning toward him with a small smile, she asked if he really meant that as a compliment. Kanghu thought to himself that he was only stating the truth. Looking down, Yuri admitted that his words actually made her feel a little better. Shifting her gaze to the ruins behind them, she said that was exactly why she came here. There was no one around to betray her. But as she lowered her head, she quietly added that being alone wasn't easy either. Then, turning slightly with a faint smile and flushed cheeks, she said she wished she could start trusting people again. Suddenly, pain shot through Kanghu's body like a bolt of lightning. He braced himself with one hand, leaning to the side. Before he could collapse, he placed his hand on Yuri's shoulder, gave it a light squeeze, and then dropped down. Startled, Yuri looked at him lying there and quickly asked if he was okay. Exhausted, Kanghu let out a heavy sigh and told her not to worry. It was just the aftereffects of the solatium. A bit of rest, and he'd be fine. Lying there, he glanced at the damp cloth resting on his forehead, his face turning slightly red. Yuri thanked him for everything that happened that day. Her own cheeks flushed as well. Kanghu looked at her and smiled. Sometime later, at Imjin River Station, Kanghu sat quietly, thinking that with Ground Zero's harsh environment, Yuri's skills were bound to grow fast. His mind drifted back to the past, remembering himself holding a phone, telling someone he needed to finish the job and that he'd planned to work alone. Snapping out of the memory, Kanghu figured they'd definitely cross paths again, probably more than once. Pulling out his phone from his jacket, he noticed there was still some time before the train arrived. He decided to pass the time on Huntergram, a social network made for hunters to share info. As he scrolled through the latest news, a photo of Guanhyung popped up. The caption proudly labeled him as part of the Manhwa Guild, the so-called best guild in Korea, highlighting his supposed dedication to safety and teamwork during dungeon raids. Kang Hu stared at the phone in his hand, thinking to himself that none of it was true. As he kept scrolling, something else caught his eye, a post saying Taewa River had taken control in Ulsan. That made him think of Sangmi. Smiling to himself, he glanced back at the screen and figured things must have worked out for her. Memories flashed back of Sangmi raising her hand with a grin, saying she'd contact the Abyss as soon as her part was done. Coming back to the present, Kang Hu figured it was only a matter of time before he met the leader of the Abyss, if Sangmi kept her word. Suddenly, the Dimension Looter chimed in, saying it was good news, though clearly bitter they hadn't been able to absorb that constellation. Then, after a pause, the thief asked if he could throw out a question. What exactly did constellations mean to Kang Hu? Without hesitation, Kang Hu replied calmly. Maybe it was just mutual benefit. His success meant the thief's success, after all. The Dimension Looter scoffed, calling him bold, though he seemed amused more than anything else. Kang Hu wasn't like most hunters, summoning a constellation at only level 10. That was unheard of. But the Dimension Looter quickly got serious, warning Kang Hu that trials were coming. If he managed to overcome them, they would truly become one, and even greater powers would be his. Kang Hu smirked, saying that sounded just fine to him. Then, resting his hand on his chin, he asked something else. Were there any downsides to making a contract with a constellation? The Dimension Looter asked what he meant. Kang Hu explained that the constellations seemed to rule the world, and a system tied together the fates of ordinary people. He thought back to his own story, the one he'd written. Even though the system was made for those who stood behind Shirwan, something about it never felt complete. The Dimension Looter responded, saying that to constellations, that was just the natural order. Kang Hu's fight was their fight as well. That made Kang Hu pause. He asked, surprised, what exactly the thief was getting at. The thief answered simply, the constellations didn't rule the world. They were just fellow travelers. Kang Hu narrowed his eyes, asking if that meant someone was above even them. But the Dimension Looter only replied that he couldn't say more. Kang Hu smiled to himself, realizing this didn't match the story he thought he knew. Even as the writer of this world, it felt like there were things hidden from him, things he might have built into the story without even realizing. The Dimension Looter ended it there, saying that was all he was willing to reveal. Anymore, and he might just disappear. Watching Kang Hu closely, the Dimension Looter admitted he wanted to keep going. The more time passed, the more certain he felt. Fate was pulling them tighter together. Kang Hu looked away, smiling slightly, and told him not to worry. Before long, he'd surpass all expectations. The Dimension Looter laughed, saying that made him even more eager to see that day come. Just then, Kang Hu glanced down at his phone. A new message had come in from Yeren. She informed him that Cha So-hee was already at Seoul Station. Turning to the side, Kang Hu thought to himself that was quicker than expected. Cha So-hee had changed her destination. As he moved down the stairs, it hit him. This was setting up the final showdown with Cha So-hee. He'd thought they'd meet again after clearing another dungeon, but plans were shifting fast. Looking toward the open doors of a nearby bus, Kang Hu decided he wouldn't head to Seoul Station. Instead, he'd go straight to the bus station. Smiling to himself, he figured from there he could reach the terminal at Gwangju. There was a dungeon nearby, and that was exactly what he needed. Later, arriving near Gwangju Terminal, Kang Hu stepped off the bus and glanced at his phone. He reminded himself there was only one reason for coming here. This was the only place he could use the permit he'd secured from the Public Safety Department. Checking his phone again, he confirmed his hunter data had already been wiped. No one could trace him now. Before facing Cha So-hee, it was worth sharpening his skills. A sudden scream snapped him out of his thoughts. He quickly turned to see a girl clutching a wound on her side, surrounded by a group of men closing in on her. Jean Hyoyoung, pressing her hand to the cut, shouted desperately for help. One man, grinning and spinning a knife in his hand, sneered that she was the one who slashed his shoulder first. Another man smirked and said they'd check what she had on her before anything else. Blood running down her mouth, Hyoyoung glared at them, spitting out that they were members of the Haeyoung Guild. Kang Hu narrowed his eyes, tightening his grip on his phone. The Haeyoung Guild. In the story, they were directly under Shawan's control. Nothing more than enforcers who crushed anyone standing against the Yunhua Guild. Kang Hu clenched his fist, eyeing the group in front of him. This wouldn't be easy, but trash was still trash. Without hesitation, he activated his skill and shifted his gaze away. Meanwhile, Hyoyoung struggled against their grip, shouting at them to let her go. Kang Hu focused on one of the men and activated his detection skill. A system window popped up, revealing the man's constellation. Master of Deception, a neutral type. Not bad, Kang Hu thought. The Dimension Looter agreed, saying it was a high-ranking constellation, even if the name felt a bit plain. Who would have guessed a guy like that had something so decent backing him? Kang Hu gripped the dagger that appeared in his hand. There was no reason to sit this one out. With a confident grin, he raised the dagger and asked if they wanted a real show of deception. He called out to the group, drawing their attention as they turned toward him. With a flick of his skill, Multiple illusions of Kong-Hu appeared around him. The thugs froze, eyes wide, staring in confusion. Resting the dagger on his shoulder, Kong-Hu smirked and dared them to figure out which one was the real him. One of the men, gripping his knife tightly, scowled and muttered, "Who's this idiot?" But before they could react, Kong-Hu and his illusions rushed in. The man snarled, his blade igniting with fire mana as he raised it to strike. "What's this freak trying to pull?" He spat, stabbing forward, his burning blade cutting through one illusion after another. While chaos unfolded, far away at Seoul Station, Cha So-hee stood with her arms crossed and an annoyed expression on her face. She scowled, tapping her foot impatiently. How long has it been? Did he really take a different route? Pressing 2 fingers to the earpiece in her ear, she contacted Dongan. Dongan asked if she still hadn't caught Kang-ha. Hand on her hip, Cha So-hee sighed and admitted it was turning into more trouble than she expected. Dongan chuckled, saying he never thought this would actually give her such a hard time. Still, he was curious to see how it all played out. A man hidden behind a nearby building kept his eyes on Cha So-hee as she made her way down the street, gripping a knife tightly in her hand. Through her earpiece, Dongan's voice came through, reminding her that no matter what, she needed to bring Kong-Hu to him. Cha So-hee touched the earpiece and calmly replied that she understood. She would make sure it happened. Dropping her hand, she stood still as the wind swirled around her. Lowering her head slightly, she called out, asking who was there. Reaching toward the knife at her hip, she confirmed it was him. With a grin, Cha So-hee swiftly drew her blade and, without hesitation, hurled it forward. Her eyes sharpened as she greeted him loudly, her tone sharp and direct. The man she was targeting reacted just in time, thrusting his own knife forward and shattering the illusions around him. From behind the chaos, Kong-Hu crouched low with a grin and muttered that this was exactly who he was looking for. In one smooth motion, Kong-Hu pointed his mana-charged dagger forward and told the man to accept his reward. Activating his decapitation skill, he unleashed a powerful strike, a surge of mana ripping straight through the man's body. Kong-Hu grabbed the man by the shoulder, pulled his bloody dagger free, and a system notification appeared. Target eliminated, Constellation contract stolen. The rest of the Guanhyung stared in shock at their fallen leader. Still clutching her side, Hyoyoung watched Kong-Hu with a smile, relieved. The others, gripping their knives tightly, turned to each other in disbelief before shouting toward their boss. But the man at the front clenched his jaw, waved his knife, and roared that this freak had just killed their leader. They charged straight at Kong-Hu, shoving Hyoyoung aside and yelling for him to come face them. Without hesitation, Kong-Hu shot forward, his dagger slicing through them all, leaving streaks of mana in his wake. As the last of them fell, Kong-Hu turned slightly, smirking, and said there was no point wasting time on people without constellations. Another system window popped up, confirming he had obtained the Master Deception constellation. Every 100 levels, it would reward him with a rare item. Glancing at the screen, Kong-Hu smiled to himself, already looking forward to hitting level 100. Nearby, Hyoyoung approached and thanked him sincerely for saving her. Blushing slightly, she placed her hand on her neck and introduced herself. Then, offering him her phone, she asked if he'd mind leaving his contact information. Smiling, she added that she really wanted the chance to thank him properly. The protagonist picked up her phone, dialed his own number, and watched as Hyoyoung cheerfully waved goodbye, shouting her thanks and promising they'd meet again. With his hands shoved into his pockets, Kong-Hu silently observed her figure disappearing into the distance. Then, snapping back to the moment, he checked his phone, his expression turning sharp. A new message had arrived. The dungeon was now accessible. Reading over the notification, Kong-Hu muttered to himself that the dungeon had just opened. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Cha So-hee knelt beside a man's corpse, glancing down with a cold gaze. Was this guy really a mercenary? Or just some regular nobody? She questioned aloud. Rising to her feet and brushing off her knees, she frowned. There's no useful info on him. Did I kill him for nothing? Not far away, another man, trembling with fear, peeked from behind a building. His eyes darted nervously toward the scene. Clutching his phone tightly, he hurried down the street, frantically typing out a message. It's him. It's really him, he muttered under his breath. But before he could hit send, dread overtook him. Cha So-hee, eyes narrowed, raised her hand, flames swirling to life at her fingertips. Thought so. Hiding there, were you? Without hesitation, she pressed her fire-wreathed palm to his forehead. Flames engulfed the man as he let out a desperate scream. With the commotion over, Cha So-hee adjusted the earpiece she wore. A voice crackled through. We found Kong-Hu's location, the man reported. A small smile played across Cha So-hee's lips. Guangzhou, huh? She responded. Crouching beside the smoldering remains, she leaned toward her earpiece. Good work, she praised coolly. Rifling through the charred man's pockets, She fished out a business card and studied it for a moment. I knew Yeren couldn't be trusted, she murmured. With a flick of her fingers, the card burst into flames, turning to ash in seconds. Surrounded by swirling fire, Cha So-hee's voice hardened. Breaking Kang-hoo's rules. That was your last mistake. Game over. Back with Kang-hoo, he inspected his hands in silence, scanning over the loot scattered around him. Should be around 800 million if I sell all this, he calculated. He bent down and picked up a bell from the ground before checking his phone again. Almost 5 billion now, he noted, a grin tugging at his lips. With my savings added in, a level 3 weapon's well within reach. Kang-hoo glanced at the new message on his phone. It was from Yeren, warning him to stay alert. Word was that Cha So-hee had taken out the person assigned to track her. Now, she was on her way to Gwangju. Reading the message, Kang-hoo muttered to himself. Of course, just as I'm finishing up here, news about Cha So-hee pops up. He knew her reputation well. Level 250, backed by a powerful constellation. There was a reason people called her the hunting dog. Compared to her, his level 49 was laughable. He figured he'd need at least 2 more skills if he hoped to stand a chance. Sliding the phone into his pocket, Kang-hoo decided his next move. Reserve dungeon first, he thought, a grin creeping across his face. Then the real fun begins. Meanwhile, over near the Gwangju terminal, the ground was littered with bodies. Workers stood scattered around the scene as a man holding a bloodied axe lifted his hand to his earpiece. Boss, he said into the mic, just like you ordered. Heian Guild is wiped. We've secured the terminal's main entrance. At the same time, over at Sanan Station in Gwangju, Cha So-hee calmly raised a finger glowing with fire mana while pressing her other hand to her earpiece. It's done here too, she reported. Flames still crackled around the corpses on the ground as she rested a hand on her hip. Keep the pressure on. Don't stop now, she ordered through the mic, gazing ahead with a satisfied smile. She ran a hand along her chin. Hope Kang-hoo's paying attention. I put on quite the show. Not far away, Kang-hoo caught sight of the chaos. Not bad, he admitted. But before he could say more, Cha So-hee's sharp gaze snapped toward him, surprised to find him there. Sitting casually on a bench, Kang-hoo turned her way, a red blade resting in his hand, his grin unfazed. Been a while, huh? A while back, deep in the tall grass, Kang-hoo silently moved forward, dagger in hand. His eyes locked onto the main boss, Sejina, standing in the middle of a blazing ring of fire. With a straw hat shading his face and a menacing red aura swirling around him, Sejina gripped twin katanas, staring straight ahead. The protagonist tightened his grip on the dagger, his gaze sharp. What irritated him most was how easily the 3 clones he'd sent out were wiped away by a single gust of wind. Long-range attacks were completely useless against this boss. Even up close, every strike failed to land. Charging in head-on would only drain his energy, leaving him stuck on defense with nothing to show for it. Without hesitation, Kang-hoo sprinted straight at the boss, activating his Shadow Step skill. Sejina's eyes darted around, scanning the area, trying to spot the real Kang-hoo. Letting out a frustrated sigh, Sejina readied his katana and swung hard, aiming for where he thought Kang-hoo would appear. But the shadow vanished before the blade could connect. In an instant, Kang-hoo used his exchange skill, reappearing behind the boss, hidden among the thick foliage. Extending his hand, mana surged around his fingers. Exactly what I was waiting for, he thought. A massive hand of mana shot forward, grabbing hold of Sejina's body with incredible speed. Kang-hoo, now right behind him, smirked. Not bad. You got some fun tricks, he said, leveling his dagger towards Sejina. But this is where it ends. With precision, Kang-hoo unleashed his bleeding strike skill, driving the dagger deep into Sejina's back. The boss spun around, eyes wide with shock, letting out a pained roar. Dropping to one knee, Sejina retaliated, slashing his katana and releasing a sharp beam of mana. But by the time it cut through the air, Kang-hoo was already gone, slipping away again with his exchange skill and reappearing ahead. Still kneeling, Sejina steadied himself, pressing a hand to his leg before standing up. His eyes flicked toward the blazing circle of fire surrounding him. Clenching his weapon, sweat slid down his face as he charged toward the safety of the ring. Watching him retreat, Kang-hoo lifted his dagger with a grin. Cha So-hee, that's your safe zone, he muttered. Inside the circle, Sejina knelt once more, stabbing his katana, now glowing with mana, into the ground. Gripping the handle tightly, he unleashed his hurricane skill, winds whipping violently around him. But Kang-hoo wasn't fazed. Raising his empty hand as the dagger faded from sight, he snapped his fingers. Rot in there, he said coldly. In an instant, the bleeding strike activated again, causing blood to erupt from the wounds carved into Sejina's body. Kang-hoo calmly raised his hand overhead, blocking the splattering drops as they fell. A system window flashed in front of him. Main boss defeated. hands casually tucked into his pockets. The main character glanced over the system notifications popping up in front of him. Hurricane's skill stolen. Level increased to 51. Another message followed. Assassin class basic skill unlocked stealth. Reading through the details, he noted the mastery was already maxed out. The skill consumed just 0.1 magical energy per second, perfectly hiding his presence, until, of course, he used any other skill, which would immediately cancel it. Finishing the last line, Kang-Hu muttered to himself, "Chaso, even at max level, it can't overlap with other skills. Shame." He paused, tapping his chin thoughtfully. Though, honestly, that'd probably break the game anyway. Somewhere unseen, the Dimension Looter chuckled quietly. "Looks like you're ready. I'll be watching your next fight closely." As Kang-Hu strolled away from the battlefield, he casually remarked, "First things first, time to stock up on supplies." Back to the present, Kang-Hu stood up from a bench with an easy smile. "Been a while, huh?" he said as Chaso-he appeared nearby. She looked him over, a faint smirk on her lips. "Wow, how long have you been sitting there? Honestly thought you'd still be running from me." Grinning, Kang-Hu shot back. "Why would I? No better place to be than right next to a hunting dog." Holding out his hand, knife glinting in his grip, he added, "Chaso-he, how do you like it? Bought this one special. Figured it was perfect for catching dogs." Chaso-he's eyes shimmered with a cool blue aura. "Since you brought it up, ever considered joining the pack?" Kang-Hu snorted, tilting his head. "Seriously? You already know my answer." Chaso-he smirked, a mana triangle flashing in her gaze. "Thanks for refusing. I've been dying to kill you." Kang-Hu's eyes widened as a glowing mark appeared on his chest. "Chaso-he, much for running," he muttered. Activating his skill, he glanced over at her, spotting her constellation, the Great Sage. Its ability allowed her to detect invisible targets, exposing anyone hiding in stealth by revealing them in a faint, translucent form. With a dark glare, Chaso-he tugged off her glove and hurled a sharp insult his way, her voice echoing through the street. At the entrance to the toll road in Gwangju City, Yeren and Soyeon stood beside the fallen workers scattered across the ground. Rubbing her palms together, Soyeon let out a sigh. "I really hope Kang-Hu's okay," she murmured. Yeren glanced over and shrugged. "Relax. He can handle anything. Trust me on that." Hearing her speak so confidently, Soyeon blushed slightly. "Wow, sounds like you know him pretty well now." After a brief pause, Yeren gestured toward the car. "Come on, let's move." The car sped off down the road, weaving through the bodies of the downed workers. Sitting in the passenger seat, Soyeon stared out the window, worry lingering on her face. "Honestly, I think there's a good reason to be concerned. Kang-Hu hates it when people jump in to help him without being asked." Yeren smiled, keeping her eyes on the road. "Yeah, that sounds like him. But so what? I just want to see what all the hype's about. I'm curious to meet this so-called competent worker." Soyeon laughed and called out cheerfully, "You're unbelievable, sis." As the car rounded a sharp corner, Soyeon's smile dropped. "Look out," she shouted. Yeren's eyes widened as a large group of armed workers blocked the road ahead. Calmly, she tightened her grip on the wheel. "Looks like we found the right spot." Without hesitation, Yeren hit the gas, veering the car straight toward them. The vehicle plowed through the crowd, and with a grin, she shouted, "Look how excited they are to see us." Meanwhile, Chaso-he narrowed her eyes, her thoughts turning dark. "What a terrible constellation," she mused. "Illusions, skill, theft. Even my maxed-out stealth doesn't work on him." With fire mana swirling around her hand, she extended her arm, deciding there was only one answer left. "Fine, then I'll just burn him to ashes." A sudden blast of fire ripped through the air. Kang-Hu dodged to the side, dropping to one knee as flames shattered the ground where he'd just been standing. Without wasting a second, he triggered his skill, leaping out of range just as a powerful beam of fire tore through the floor beneath him. Catching sight of the blinding light, Kang-Hu sneered and checked the system notification. Enemy's fire damage increased by 500%. Chaso-he, she's pissed, he thought. Ahead, Chaso-he glared at him, her face tense, veins bulging with rage. With a violent sweep of her arm, she unleashed another explosion of fire, her voice echoing through the chaos. "I'm going to kill you." Kang-Hu burst through the wall of flames, his body shielded by a shimmering layer of blue mana. Rushing forward without hesitation, he activated his protective armor and extended his hand, summoning a glowing rose from thin air. With a sly grin, he bit into the rose, thinking to himself how powerful the boost was. Enhancing both his barrier and his weapon was the right call. A system notification flashed in front of him. Enhanced bleeding upgraded. From a distance, Chaso-he glared at him, her voice cutting through the chaos. "What is this? How?" she shouted, unleashing another barrage of fire mana. "How long are you planning to keep running?" But Kang-Hu didn't slow down. The rose's mana coursed through him, shielding him as he surged forward, dodging her attacks with ease. Pushing off the ground, he focused his thoughts. Mage-type opponent. Strength and defense. Max out the weapon. Getting close. With his weapon gripped tight, Kanghu leaped toward her, activating Shadow Step midair, creating multiple illusions to surround her. Close combat it is, he thought, landing confidently as the copies encircled Cha Sohee. Looking around at the shifting figures, Cha Sohee smirked. Trying this again, she murmured. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Soyeon clenched her fist and, with a heavy sigh, drove her punch into a worker's stomach, sending him crashing across the ground. Light smoke drifted around the fallen bodies as she turned to Yeren and called out. Status. Yeren ran over. He's down. But is Kanghu inside the building? Shaking her head, Yeren closed her eyes briefly. Still no sign of him. We need to move. I'm starting to think he's not even here. He might have gone to the station. Back on the battlefield, Cha Sohee's grin widened. Flames gathered at her fingertips as she raised her hand, sending waves of fiery mana streaking toward the illusions. With a single motion, she unleashed dragon-shaped flames that tore across the ground, crashing into Kanghu's copies and detonating in a burst of mana. With her hands still extended, she pulled the fire dragons back, smirking as they circled around her. Turning her head slightly, she taunted, Now do you get it? Whatever tricks you try, they won't work on me. Finally spotting Kanghu standing calmly on the rooftop, Cha Sohee narrowed her eyes and smiled coldly. This is where it ends. Kanghu tightened his grip on his weapon, his gaze locked on Cha Sohee. She's weak up close, he thought. Without wasting a second, he tossed his knife to the ground, right near her feet. Cha Sohee looked down, smirking as she stepped on the blade. What's this? She laughed. Shaking already? Dropping your weapon like that. How do you plan on fighting now? With a grin, she flung her hand forward, releasing 3 blazing mana dragons straight at him. Watch closely. I'll show you how it's done. Kanghu watched the incoming flames carefully, his eyes sharp. In the next moment, he vanished, disappearing into the waves of fire that lit up the battlefield. Cha Sohee stumbled back, eyes wide. What is he up to? She wondered. Before she could react, Kanghu unleashed his hurricane skill. A fierce whirlwind of dark mana erupted around him, pulling the fire dragons into the storm. One of the dragons roared before being swallowed whole by the swirling void. Kanghu, now cloaked in the dark aura of the hurricane, looked toward Cha Sohee and smirked. Guess my aim's better than yours. Cha Sohee's confidence wavered as she watched the scene unfold. What is he planning? The hurricane roared to life, surging high into the sky. Meanwhile, from the safety of a nearby building, Hyoung watched the battle with her arms crossed and a sly grin on her face. Looks like they're having a blast out there. Good thing I stayed out of it. Hyoung, standing beside her, smirked. Who would have thought anyone would go after Cha Sohee with that kind of skill? Unbelievable. Her gaze shifted to the side, eyes narrowing. And to think that guy was in that dungeon. The boss there had the same ability. With a quiet chuckle, Hyoung tapped her earpiece. Master, I'm keeping an eye on him. Just like you said. Back in the storm, Kanghu stood firm inside the swirling mana, his expression sharp and focused. Cha Sohee shielded her face from the wind, her teeth clenched as she fought against the raging force. Kanghu raised his hand, mana surging through his arm. In a flash, he used his abduction skill, closing the distance between them in an instant. Cha Sohee's eyes widened as she spotted the blade back in his hand. Ow! Before she could finish the thought, Kanghu drove the weapon forward, piercing straight through her with a brutal strike. Blood splattered as he lunged with everything he had. But Cha Sohee wasn't finished. Gritting her teeth, she yanked the knife free, blocking his next move as she stepped back. Lifting her hand, fire mana blazed wildly around her fingers, her lips curling into a vicious grin. Did you really think it was over? She hissed. With fury burning in her eyes, Cha Sohee fired a massive beam of mana straight ahead. Don't even hope for that. Kanghu leaped to the side without hesitation, then charged forward, his movements smooth and precise. Dropping to one knee, he pressed his hand against the ground. I never expected anything from you, he muttered. Rising swiftly, he plucked the knife from his hand and snapped his fingers. But it's not about hope. Activating his bleeding skill, the wounds on Cha Sohee's body tore open, blood spilling out rapidly. Without missing a beat, Kanghu raised his knife high and launched himself straight at her. Meanwhile, Dongin's voice came through the comms. How's it looking over there? Hyoung tapped her earpiece, a small smile forming. Prepare to be shocked. Cha Sohee's actually losing. Dongin chuckled, cigarette clenched between his teeth. No way. Cha Sohee losing her grip? Now that's something. Back in a fight, Cha Sohee clutched her shoulder, her face pale as her gaze locked on Kanghu. For the first time, fear crept in her thoughts. Is this really how it ends? Her mind drifted back. A memory surfaced. A guy sat on the floor, clutching his side as blood seeped through his fingers. Glaring up at her, he spat out, You idiot! Why'd you do this? With fire mana glowing in her hand. Cha So-hee glared down at him. Shut up. I'll make sure you never play with fire again. The guy's face twisted with fear. Play with fire? Wait, I remember now. You really lived in that house, didn't you? His voice rose with anger. And you seriously think killing me is going to bring your parents back? Cha So-hee didn't respond. She simply waved her hand, and flames devoured his body. With a cold stare, she rested her hand on her hip, watching as the fire consumed him. But there was no time to linger in the past. Cha So-hee snapped back to the present just in time to dodge a flying weapon. Shifting to the side, she glared at the man who threw it. Not bad, he taunted. You've got quick reflexes. He pounded his fist against his chest. But now it's our turn. Let's see if you can handle us. Several men charged toward her. Gritting her teeth, Cha So-hee lifted both hands, fire mana surging. With a furious scream, she hurled blazing waves toward them. One of the attackers approached, sword in hand, a grin plastered across his face. As he slashed through her side, he laughed. Take what you deserve. Watching Cha So-hee fall to her knees, the other sneered. Seriously? No decent gear? What a waste. Grinding her teeth, Cha So-hee trembled with rage. Am I really going to lose to trash like this? Dongan glanced at the group of men standing nearby, biting down on a cigarette as mana gathered around his clenched fists. With a cold glare, he asked, What do you think you're doing on someone else's turf? The men turned, startled. What are you talking about? One of them shot back. Dongan didn't waste time answering. He raised his fist and, in a flash, unleashed a powerful strike. The blast of air mana sent the men flying, crashing hard into the ground. With his fist still glowing, Dongan spoke calmly. This territory belongs to Eclipse. Cha So-hee, holding her wound as she sat near the scattered bodies, looked up at him in shock. They did this? She nodded weakly. Yeah. Dongan shoved his hands into his pockets. Then leave them to me. You follow me. Cha So-hee gazed at him, her expression hopeful. The master created this place for me. I'd do anything for him, she thought. But her mind drifted back to the words she'd overheard one day. Prudence, that's what she lacks. If I can get Kang-hoo on my side, he might even surpass her. Who does he think he is? Cha So-hee's thoughts darkened. Kang-hoo, showing up out of nowhere, trying to take what's mine? Snapping back to reality, rage burned in her eyes. Mana flared around her as she lifted both hands, fire swirling violently. Don't even think about it, she shouted. Kang-hoo eyed her carefully. Cha So-hee smirked, seeing his hesitation. What's the matter? You scared? She thrust her hand forward, mana crackling. Come on then, let's see what you've got. With her fiery aura blazing, Cha So-hee stepped in close and pressed her burning hand against Kang-hoo's body. Kang-hoo quickly activated his defense skill, his focus sharp as he glanced down at her hand. Cha So-hee grit her teeth, straining against his barrier. Is this really just a defense skill? She wondered. Pulling her hand back, flames still swirling, she glared at him. How many skills do you even have? Kang-hoo smirked and snapped his fingers. Trade secret. Nothing happened. For a moment, silence hung between them. Cha So-hee stared at him, confused, mana still burning around her. The protagonist glanced ahead, puzzled, tried to make sense of what was happening. With a faint smile, she muttered that her guess had been right. Is this supposed to be a skill that can actually harm me? She scoffed. Raising her fire-scorched hand, she glared menacingly and questioned how someone like him thought he could pull this off. Without hesitation, she lifted her arm, summoning fiery rings across the ceiling. Her voice rang out, loud and clear, declaring that Kang-hoo wouldn't make it through. The protagonist glanced at the flames, now flickering on his shoulder, startled. What is this? He thought, narrowly avoiding the downpour of fire raining from above. What kind of nightmare is this? Kang-hoo's eyes darted toward the swirling fireball of mana forming overhead. But instead of slowing down, the protagonist charged forward, weaving through the falling embers using his skill to dodge the relentless blaze. His gaze locked on Cha So-hee, realizing fire was her domain. Controlling flames was her specialty, and if she kept this up, he wouldn't hold out much longer. Kang-hoo activated his protective armor, glancing at the charred wall nearby. We'll see who comes out on top, he thought as Kang-hoo swiftly shifted to the side. Without wasting a second, the protagonist unleashed his short-range jump skill, leaping over the scorched barrier onto a separate platform. But before he could catch his breath, Cha So-hee appeared right in front of him, weapon pointed straight at him. A wicked grin spread across her face. Kang-hoo met her glare with unwavering confidence, while Soyeon suddenly struck one of the workers with a powerful punch. She looked ahead, clearly surprised, then clenched her fist and shouted to Yerin to take notice. Throwing her hands up in disbelief, she questioned aloud, What is this? Around them, several Eclipse workers turned, their expressions filled with fury. Yerin stood tall, her voice steady as she reminded the group they needed to move fast. One of the armed workers stepped forward shouting that she wouldn't get past them. But Soyeon wasn't backing down. Without missing a beat, she charged, fist raised high, and drove it straight into the worker's chest, sending him flying backward. He stared ahead, stunned, as green marks spread across his body. With calm precision, Yeren extended her hand, releasing a stream of green mana and offering a quick apology. "We're in a bit of a rush," she said flatly. Bathed in mana, she warned them to clear out if they valued their lives. In an instant, beams of green energy shot out, piercing the workers with incredible accuracy. With a steady hand, Yeren lifted her arm once more and swung, sending another wave of energy surging forward. They stared out the window, shocked by the yellow sky. A chill ran through Yeren as she realized. It was Kong who, inside, the protagonist gripped his knife tightly, blocking blow after blow from Cha So-hee, who was cloaked in blazing mana with a smug grin, her weapon ignited in flames. Under the sheer force of her strikes, his blade started to buckle. Still, Kong-hoo clenched his jaw and thought to himself, this just makes things more interesting. In a flash, he activated his teleportation skill, reappearing right behind her, ready to strike. But Cha So-hee, unfazed, glanced back and sneered. I remember that move. Without hesitation, she charged him, hand raised. The next moment, her knife drove deep into Kong-hoo's chest, shattering his defenses. Blood filled his throat as he looked down at the blade buried inside him. Cha So-hee smiled coldly. Got you at last, she said. Flames spiraled around her as she tightened her grip on the knife's handle. But before she could finish him off, her eyes snapped toward a sword rushing toward her. Kong-hoo, swinging with full force, unleashed a devastating mana slash. His attack landed hard. The knife slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. Cha So-hee gasped, clutching the gaping wound across her body. A scream tore from her throat, echoing through the room. At that exact moment, Hone's voice boomed through the comms. Seriously? Are they already done? She sighed, crossing her arms. Hyoyoung turned sharply, catching sight of Soyeon darting past. Kong-hoo jumped back, leaving only a faint trail of smoke behind. Cha So-hee, gripping her wound, scowled. Cha So-hee, he spared me? Just my hand. But her fury only burned hotter. Surging with violent mana, clutching her severed hand, she vowed to end him. Sweat rolled down her face as she conjured a massive flaming hand. You're dead, she roared. Mana surged as she unleashed a fiery blast straight toward him, shouting once again that this time, she would kill him. Kong-hoo, drained and barely holding on behind his protective armor, thought grimly. The effect of Solatium. It won't last much longer. Before he could react, Cha So-hee hurled a massive fireball his way, her voice echoing through the flames. I'll destroy you. The protagonist braced himself, throwing up his arm to shield his head as a green barrier formed around him. Surprised, he stared ahead, realizing, was this really wind magic? From a distance, Soyeon sprinted toward him, shouting Kong-hoo's name. Cha So-hee, glaring with frustration, clenched her teeth and snapped. What an idiot. How much longer are they going to get in my way? Without slowing, Soyeon grabbed the protagonist's arm and slung it over her back. Cha So-hee shifted into a fighting stance, her voice sharp as she declared that no one had called for Yeren. Calm and composed, Yeren placed her hands on her hips, mana swirling around her. In a flash, Yeren lunged forward, green mana crackling as she charged straight at Cha So-hee. Do you really not get the situation you're in? Yeren shouted, extending her hand and releasing a wave of mana. But Cha So-hee just smirked. Raising her hand, she summoned a blazing surge of fire mana, her power intensifying as she bolted ahead. Perfect. I'd love to take you on, she said loudly, racing to meet the attack head-on. Sweat trickled down Yeren's face as she quickly raised her hand, surrounding herself with mana to block the blow. As the energy clashed, smoke billowed, and Yeren glanced forward, startled by the fading flames. Did she vanish? Soyeon shifted into position, fists clenched and eyes scanning the area. Where'd she go? She called out. Meanwhile, Kong-hoo wiped the blood from his face with a weary sigh. Forget about her, he muttered. Yeren shot him an irritated glare. What is that supposed to mean? The protagonist clenched his fist, his weapon dissolving as he pressed his hand to his chest. His thoughts drifted to the very start of this battle, the unease he'd felt from the last constellation. Cha So-hee. A wicked grin spread across Kong-hoo's face as he looked away. Back on the train, the protagonist had spotted the system window floating above Cha So-hee. It displayed her skill, Survival Master. This ability specialized in staying alive, allowing her to copy enemy skills in a weakened form once per day. Serious and focused, Kong-hoo activated his mana tracking skill, wondering which of their abilities she might have stolen. When his gaze locked onto Cha So-hee, realization hit. She copied his stealth skill, and now she wasn't planning to fight anymore. Kang-hoo snapped out of his thoughts with a heavy sigh. She ran off, he muttered. Yeren shot him a sharp glare. Then what are we waiting for? We're going after her, she shouted. But as Kang-hoo looked ahead, sweat beading on his forehead, his expression shifted to confusion. Nearby, Soyeon watched in shock as Kang-hoo collapsed. Rushing to his side, she grabbed his shoulders, panic rising. Hey, what's your status? She called out, shaking him. Come on, stay with me. The protagonist, drained and exhausted, let out a deep sigh as his eyes shut. Yeren knelt beside him. He needs to rest, she said firmly. Then, glancing forward with a serious look, added, we should get him to a hospital. Meanwhile, not far away, Cha So-hee ran ahead, clutching her injured arm, fury written all over her face. Seriously? She just had to interfere, she growled, grinding her teeth. And who even is Kang-hoo? The number of skills he's using, it's insane. Plus, those are dungeon monster skills. Can he really copy those? Determined, Cha So-hee leaped forward. I've got to report this to the master. But as she rounded the corner, crouched behind a building, she clenched her fist. Long, razor-sharp claws emerged. Without hesitation, she launched herself out from behind the structure, aiming straight for Cha So-hee. Hyo-young greeted her with a chilling grin, slashing deep into the building as her mana-infused claws carved massive gashes. Turning slowly, her gaze darkened. Where do you think you're going? Cha So-hee froze, hand trembling as she touched her neck. Has she completely lost it? What is Hyo-young doing? But Hyo-young wasn't stopping. Eyes locked on her, claws raised, she advanced. Not far off, Hyo-young twirled her hair with a smirk. Cha So-hee should really figure out how bad things are getting, she said lightly. Maybe I'll explain. Memories of the past flickered through her mind. Hyo-young tapped her earpiece, her smile growing wider. Master, what do you want me to do with Cha So-hee? Across town, Dongan stubbed out his cigarette in an ashtray, staring at his reflection in the window with a wicked grin. Get rid of her, he said coldly. A hunter who can't finish the job doesn't deserve to live. Hyo-young returned from her memory with a grin. Master's orders are to kill you, she said calmly. Cha So-hee clutched her neck, terror flashing in her eyes. What? What are you talking about? Without another word, Hyo-young lunged, claws slashing as she launched her attack. Sometime later, Kang-hoo slowly opened his eyes, blinking at the bright light around him. Is this a hospital? He muttered in surprise. Turning his head, he spotted Soyeon sitting beside his bed, tears welling up as she quietly whispered his name, almost as if in a dream. Bathed in the soft glow of the room, Kang-hoo looked at her silently, saying nothing. Eventually, he got dressed, left the hospital room, and shut the door behind him. As he walked down the hallway, he pressed his phone to his ear, classical music playing softly in the background. Closing his eyes, Kang-hoo let the music fill the silence for a moment, but then a sharp ringing cut through the air. Annoyed, he glanced at his phone. A message had popped up. Yuri, he said, raising an eyebrow. She'd sent him a photo of a flower. Kang-hoo stared at it. So, she just happened to find it. Guess she got lucky. In her message, Yuri added that she had her own old man now. Kang-hoo sighed, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket and continuing down the corridor. That's when he spotted Yeren leaning against the wall. She noticed him and smiled, arms crossed. Looks like I was right. Figured this might happen to you. Resting against the wall, Yeren tilted her head. You should be taking it easy. You're still in pretty rough shape. Removing his earpiece, Kang-hoo looked at her. Is Blue Eyes okay? She blinked, caught off guard. With a serious expression, he added, I didn't expect Eclipse to get involved in this. Yeren shrugged, touching her chin with a grin. Don't stress about it. Those Eclipse freaks? They're nothing special, and I'm not exactly weak. Kang-hoo smirked. Glad you're all right. And, thanks. Be sure to pass that on to Soyeon too. Yeren's cheeks flushed. Pass it on? You should tell her yourself. The protagonist disagreed, saying this was the best option for Soyeon. She glanced at him, surprised. Kang-hoo recalled how things unfolded in the novel. Soyeon was the type who'd stick by him no matter what. And in the end, it would all lead to the same tragic conclusion. The image of Soyeon's lifeless body in his arms flashed through Kang-hoo's mind, leaving him frozen in shock. Without looking back, the protagonist calmly said he was leaving. Yeren watched him and spoke up. If he had his reasons, she wouldn't interfere. But could he spare her a moment? Blushing slightly, she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and admitted there was something she wanted to tell him.